A written letter addressed to Mr. Ans begins with a warm and polite greeting. She reflects on her past as a helpless orphan from Kilguiney with nowhere else to go. She notes that 5 years have passed since he sponsored her stay in Wertherford. Her newly sponsored life in Wertherford brought her comfort and a fresh beginning. She writes that her life was perfect, though she occasionally felt they went a bit overboard. Turning with a gentle smile, she admits that they actually went far beyond normal. As she writes, she notes how his generous gestures constantly surprised everyone in the nursery. Shouts echo outside demanding Judith come out, marking the most surprising event of all. The gray-haired gentleman presents her with a life-changing proposal and an invitation to waltz. Her friends react with utter astonishment over the prestigious name of Curtis in the noble city of Waltz. She admits that she is far more excited to meet her sponsor than the city. With a quick dash down the stairs, she eagerly wonders what her sponsor is like. The scene transitions to the city streets as her vehicle arrives in the new area. She walks through the crowd, wondering if reality will match her grand imagination. Her expression freezes in shock as her thoughts suddenly shift to the sponsor-strewn nature. Trembling with fear, she clutches her suitcase tightly as the atmosphere grows increasingly tense. She internally questions how much her sponsor actually knows about her true identity. Sprinting desperately across the cracked ground, she flees into the dark, desolate night. Turning quickly, she looks back in panic as her golden necklace shines in the dark. The man in the trench coat coldly warns her that they have entered his territory. Armed soldiers surround her as her glowing amber necklace falls with a sharp came. She vividly remembers her arrival at the Waltz estate during that fateful summer. The red-haired man grabs her wrist, warning her not to trust her sponsor too much. Blonde-haired man surprises her, calmly commenting on the presence of an unexpected female guest. Roger notes over the phone that Judith seems like an entirely different person lately. She listens intently on the receiver, her expression growing tense at his words. Overwhelmed by her returning memories, she looks forward with wide, startled eyes. She stands before the massive, ornate iron gates of the Grand Waltz Mansion. The memory shifts back to a snowy, freezing night in Baja during 1920. The vehicle navigates the dark, snow-covered roads under a gloomy winter sky. 3 passengers ride in tense silence inside the dim, cold interior of the vehicle. The driver glances at the mirror, estimating they will arrive safely before sunrise. Judith sits stiffly in the back, feeling highly uncomfortable in their presence. Adjusting his mirror, the driver suggests she could have been dropped off on the outskirts. The passenger in the cab sharply orders the driver to stop talking and accelerate. The driver warns the scarred man to stop talking because he is scaring Judith. She looks down in deep sorrow, feeling completely powerless in her current situation. Her memories shift back 8 months to her escape at the Jelani Western Front. Sprinting desperately through the dark woods, she tightly grips a heavy wooden rifle. Loud shouts echo through the dark forest, ordering guards to catch the escaping prisoner. Panting heavily, she looks over her shoulder as the terrifying pursuit draws closer. An officer's hand appears in the foreground, tracking her desperate flight from afar. She gasps in sheer terror as a heavy boot steps directly into her path. An armed military officer suddenly blocks her way, cornering her in the dark woods. She stares at the officer's gray uniform, her heart pounding with rising dread. Panic strikes her as she realizes she has been completely cornered by the enemy. Knowing the consequences of capture, she desperately raises her rifle to defend herself. A sudden gunshot fires through the darkness, splattering blood across the cold air. Her vision blurs as she collapses, the tragic memory finally fading into darkness. She remembers her sister's final tearful plea to survive as she hid her away. Collapsing onto the grass, the wounded black-haired girl tragically recalls her sister Liselott's final moments. At the field hospital, a worried doctor and nurse rush to stabilize the newly arrived patient. Standing nearby, 2 hospital workers watch the urgent medical treatment with expressions of deep concern. The doctor closely monitors the severely injured girl as she lies heavily bandaged on a hospital bed. A medical chart on the bed frame identifies the 16-year-old female patient as Judith Krauser. 3 months later, hospital officials inform Judith that a distant relative intends to act as her sponsor. A gray-haired gentleman in a trench coat advises Judith to seek safe asylum in the Baja Federation. The gentleman encourages her to live a peaceful, normal life, a concept that feels completely foreign to Judith. A solemn silence settles as the promise of a safe, ordinary life lingers in her thoughts. Sitting quietly in her hospital bed, Judith silently contemplates the prospect of a completely fresh beginning. Clutching her collar, Judith realizes with sudden apprehension that someone has already discovered her true identity. Judith sits tensely inside a moving carriage, watching the heavy winter snow drift past the window. Pressing her hands to her chest, she anxiously wonders what awaits her at her final destination. Determined to survive no matter what, Judith travels onward through the cold, dark winter night. Her attention is captured by a sudden loud creak as the vehicle door begins to open. Startled by a sudden warning to stay low, Judith prepares to disembark into the cold. Heath opens the door and confirms their safe arrival with the gray-haired driver of the vehicle. Stepping out of the vehicle, Judith suddenly loses her footing on the slippery, snow-covered ground. Reacting quickly, Heath catches her in a firm grip to prevent her from falling into the snow. When Heath asks if she can walk, Judith nervously attributes her awkwardness to stiff legs. Insisting she is fine, Judith refuses his help, determined not to appear weak before her benefactor. Together, they arrive at the grand entrance of the Kinsley County Private Waterford Orphanage. A cheerful chime sounds as a warm-faced, brown-haired woman opens the door to welcome Heath. The woman warmly greets Heath inside while he notes the snowy weather delayed their journey. She happily welcomes Heath back, noting it has been 4 long years since his last visit. Heath directs her attention to Judith, introducing the young girl to the welcoming orphanage director. As the director welcomes her, Heath grows momentarily confused by her name before preparing to leave. Despite the director's warnings about the storm, Heath bids her farewell and promises to stay safe. Turning on his heel, Heath prepares to make his departure back into the freezing night. Before stepping away, Heath leans down to whisper a quiet parting message of encouragement to Judith. Judith stands at the open doorway, quietly watching Heath as he steps back into the cold. Heath walks alone down the snow-covered path, leaving a trail of deep footprints behind him. Watching him disappear into the winter night, Judith holds on to his final wish for her well-being. Looking back, Judith realizes that the stern young man made preaching so terrifying after all. Inside her cozy office, director Rachel Waterford introduces herself and learns that Judith is 16 years old. Rachel mentions a boy named Million will help her adjust to the orphanage's unique educational curriculum. Rachel explains that the children are homeschooled directly at the orphanage rather than attending public school. Sitting across from the director, Judith listens intently to how life is managed within the facility. When Judith asks about her benefactor, Rachel clarifies she only manages the orphanage and hasn't met them. Rachel slides an anonymous, wax-sealed letter across the desk, explaining it was her only contact. Reading the letter, Judith is astonished by the generous monthly stipend and the promise of full college tuition. The letter urges Rachel to ensure Judith grows up safely and normally, listing a Walt's address for emergencies. Clutching the paper tightly, Judith internally questions why a wealthy stranger would sponsor her so extravagantly. Noticing her thin winter coat, Rachel kindly offers to take Judith shopping for proper winter clothes. Rachel notes her worn dress and promises to provide new outfits suitable for going out. When Judith asks for a reason, Rachel explains the benefactor simply wishes for her to grow up normally. Rachel reassures her, explaining that wealthy individuals in Waltz frequently sponsor orphans anonymously without expecting anything back. Rachel lightheartedly suggests the wealthy sponsor likely has everything and wants nothing in return from Judith. Rachel smiles warmly, offering a gentle suggestion on how Judith might eventually repay her anonymous benefactor. Sitting quietly in the dimly lit office, Judith silently resolves to make the most of her new life. A historical narration recounts the devastating defeat of Kilkenny against the Ailance Alliance. Judith walks slowly down a quiet hallway towards a closed wooden door. Opening the door with the soft click of a talk, she laments becoming a war orphan while fleeing capture. Touching the desk, she recalls being unconscious for 2 months after a gunshot wound. Standing in her room, Judith laments that all her memories vanished after her sister's death. Clutching her collar, Judith finds comfort in the fact that she still remembers her identity. Unveiling her glowing red eyes, she identifies herself as Judith Krauser, the Witch of Kilkenny. History reveals how fear of gifted individuals shifted to appreciation for their scientific and military value. Warring nations began fighting to capture these powerful individuals, leading to the destruction of Kilkenny. The narration highlights the immense rarity of Kilkenny's demonic humans who possess mental abilities. Judith's striking crimson eyes shine brightly, revealing her latent and exceptionally rare power. Text emphasizes that individuals with such mental powers were considered of unparalleled rarity. She explains that her sister's necklace hides her glowing eyes, allowing her to live normally. She recalls removing her necklace to escape captivity, faintly remembering being discovered by someone. Judith surmises that a high-ranking enemy officer must have ordered her to be saved. Believing she will never meet her savior again, Judith turns her thoughts to her benefactor. She suspects her anonymous sponsor already knows her true identity as a demonic human. A haunting memory of a blonde girl warns Judith never to trust anyone again. Writing her letter, a soft scratching sound echoes as Judith decides to thank her anonymous benefactor. Not yet fluent in the local language, she decides to write in Kilkenny first. Following Rachel's suggestion, Judith drafts a response directly to her mysterious savior. Judith pauses mid-sentence, expressing her gratitude while harboring deep, unresolved doubts. Judith questions her sponsor's motives, political ties, and how much they know about her. She wonders if her mysterious benefactor has ever witnessed her true, glowing crimson eyes. Resting her head on her desk, Judith whispers a tearful message of longing for Lot. Though the sponsor might be an enemy, Judith admits their presence brings her strength. Having a recipient for her letters makes Judith feel significantly less isolated in the world. Signing off with her true name, Judith wishes her mysterious benefactor a Merry Christmas. A cheerful blonde boy enters with a breakfast tray to wish her a Merry Christmas. Now wearing a light blue dress, Judith politely greets her new brother, Million Waterford. Million explains he volunteered to be a roommate and encourages her to enjoy breakfast. Million explains he brought food upstairs for her recovery, making Judith note his kind nature. Now that breakfast is finished, Million eagerly suggests they begin their scheduled tasks. Sitting across from her, Million begins by asking Judith for her official last name. Judith claims she discarded her surname, prompting Million to officially declare her Judith Waterford. Tense and anxious, Judith internally contemplates using her memory-altering abilities on Million. Noticing her rigid posture, Million asks why she looks tense, which she quickly dismisses. Reassuring her that this is not an interrogation, Million prepares to ask simple clichés. Million casually asks Judith if there are any specific medical precautions she must take. Knowing she was severely ill before arriving, Million gently prompts her for more details. Judith attributes her weakness to lung issues, agreeing it is similar to tuberculosis. Million brightly reassures her that their location in Kinsley boasts the area's freshest air. With breakfast complete, Million warmly invites Judith to join him for an orphanage tour. Walking down the hallway, Million explains the layouts of the basement and first floor. Peering into a doorway, Judith listens to Million detail the locations of classrooms and dormitories. Passing by a window, Million assures Judith that the older residents would gladly assist her.
Spotting children outside, Judith learns they are returning from shooting practice with their instructor.
Stunned by the mention of shooting, Judith learns the orphanage teaches combat and survival skills. Million gazes thoughtfully out the window as the unusual curriculum of the orphanage sinks in. Million suddenly poses a mysterious question, asking Judith what all the children have in common. The narrator laments that they were all abandoned by the world for various reasons. A solitary manor stands illuminated in the darkness, serving as their secluded sanctuary. Million explains that everyone at Waterford has a secret past, which is why the director teaches them self-defense and shooting skills to protect themselves. The narrator notes that physical defense is not the only way to protect oneself. An unseen companion offers Judith their help, leaving her in silent, thoughtful contemplation. Judith wonders why they are so eager to help her, but Million reminds her that she gave up her old name to join their family. The blonde boy fondly notes how thoughtful and considerate everyone in their home is. The warm atmosphere of the orphanage blossoms as the children gather together like a family. She reflects on finding a true safe haven and real friends in this sanctuary. Judith writes about her plans to visit town for winter clothes and expresses concern that her frequent letters might bother her mysterious benefactor. She gently requests her benefactor return the letters if they are unwelcome, though admitting it would sadden her. She hopes that if they ever meet, her benefactor will pronounce her name correctly. She notes that only her benefactor knows her true name is Judith Krauser. A new day brings a surprising announcement that a package has arrived for Judith. The director delivers the package, revealing it came all the way from Waltz, which deeply surprises Judith. Judith is deeply bewildered to receive an unexpected shipment from a place called Waltz. She gasps in utter disbelief as the reality of the situation begins to set in. The director smiles warmly as she begins to piece together the benefactor's intentions. The group stands in utter shock as they realize the benefactor is an incredibly wealthy person who sent a massive pile of luxury presents. The director wonders what kind of Christmas letter Judith wrote to inspire such generosity, but Judith nervously insists she wrote nothing special. The director playfully asks if Judith complained about lacking clothes, which Judith vehemently and comically denies. She wonders if the massive gift was triggered by her simple mention of buying clothes. A gorgeous array of high-quality garments and accessories fills the room with sparkling lingerie. Judith looks at the absurdly long inventory list of coats, dresses, and undergarments, sweating at the extreme waste of money. She realizes her benefactor must have simply ordered the boutique's entire stock with one call. Million jokingly mimics how a wealthy person would simply order the boutique to pack up everything they have. Millie suggests that a benefactor wealthy enough to invest this much in their ward probably just had their butler handle the call. The orphans speculate about the lavish lifestyle of the wealthy benefactor, leaving Judith sweating and completely overwhelmed by the theory. Judith generously decides to share the excess clothes with all of her friends. The children joyfully embrace Judith, thanking her enthusiastically for sharing the wonderful clothes with them. The young orphans praise Judith and her Santa Claus, while Judith sweat drops, wondering if her benefactor anticipated this outcome from the start. Judith holds basic dictation and language books, sweat dropping as she realizes her benefactor still treats her like a toddler. Despite the silly textbooks, she feels deeply touched by her benefactor's warm, enduring care. 2 months pass and Judith is shocked to hear that yet another package has arrived. As spring arrives, Judith is overwhelmed by a massive new delivery of transitional seasonal wear. Judith realizes she will not need to buy any new clothes for several years. She happily shares her gifts equally with the orphans, while Million remains absolutely convinced that her benefactor owns multiple luxury vacation homes. Judith writes a letter to her benefactor, playfully inquiring about the extent of their immense wealth. The scene shifts as the benefactor holds her letter, reading the postscript she added. The benefactor smiles warmly upon reading Judith's request to stop sending such extravagant gifts. He sits in his grand study, reading her heartfelt words with quiet, pleased amusement. Winter returns to the school, blanketed in a quiet and peaceful layer of falling snow. Feet tread carefully through the fresh snow, leaving steady footprints in their wake. Another year passes, and Judith reflects on adapting to her new name while waiting. She keeps a lingering hope of finding the mysterious man who knows her benefactor's identity. Judith feels thoroughly embarrassed remembering the desperate letter she sent her benefactor last month. Million runs up to Judith to return the warm scarf she had accidentally left behind. Million wraps the scarf around her, lecturing her about her past illness and the absolute necessity of staying warm in the winter weather. A sudden sharp crack of a gunshot rings out, causing her to freeze in startling surprise. Million notes that shooting class is starting and offers to accompany her to town first, ensuring she gets there safely. He confidently boasts about his status as an elite while sporting his gray cap. She playfully comments on his immense confidence as he prepares to ride his bicycle. She freezes in shock as an ominous sudden thought of a witch crosses her mind. Clenching her chest in sudden pain, she hears the blonde boy call out to start going.
The blonde boy urges her to get on the bicycle, to which she hesitantly complies.
A voice calls out into the cold winter air, warning her to hold on tight. They ride together on the bicycle through the snow as she grips him tightly. Holding on, she silently wonders if she will ever meet her mysterious benefactor in this lifetime. She envisions the shadowed figure of the powerful man who crushed Liselot Kilgany. She quietly mentions wanting to learn marksmanship, but the blonde boy cannot hear her words. She imagines herself confronting him, resolved to be the first one to pull the trigger. Looking up at the winter sky, she ponders asking her benefactor for a pistol. The director welcomes them inside with the surprising news that another gift has arrived. They open the door to reveal a room filled with piles of gift-wrapped books. Blonde boy jokingly asks if she complained about lacking books, which she hastily denies. She suddenly recalls mentioning an unfinished library book in her letter from months ago. She blushes softly as she gently lifts one of the sent books from the box. In her bedroom, she realizes it is the exact book she could not finish reading. She feels a quiet, profound connection with the mysterious benefactor who watches over her. Sitting in her bed, she recalls being warned by Liselot never to trust anyone. Hugging the book tightly, she decides she is too tired of living in constant doubt. Years pass, shifting the scene to Kinsley State University in the spring of 1925. As she peeks through a door, she is greeted by a sudden festive party popper. Now older, she stands wide-eyed and blushing as roses frame her lovely white dress. Her classmates present a strawberry birthday cake, eagerly urging her to make a wish. He wishes her a happy 21st birthday, hinting that more surprises are yet to come. A uniformed mail carrier arrives asking for her, leaving her in a state of shock. The postman explains he first looked for her at the quiet academic building. She stands completely speechless, cradling an enormous shimmering bouquet of pink tulips in her arms. Her friends point out the real pearls and gold dust, which she nervously tries to deny. She silently despairs over her benefactor's extravagant gifts, preventing her from living an ordinary life. Her classmate swoons at the extreme wealth, jokingly theorizing Judith is a president's secret daughter. Gregory lists several powerful tycoons, but his classmate urges him to think globally instead. She dismisses their wild theories, claiming Mr. Ans is simply a stubborn old man. She admits her theories are mere imagination, accepting she may never know his true identity. She writes a heartfelt letter thanking the kind Mr. Ans for a gift she will cherish. Resting her pen, she notes this will likely be the final letter she ever sends. A smug brown-haired student smiles condescendingly as Judith and her friends freeze in their tracks. The smug student maliciously insinuates that her sponsorship must require some sordid favor in return. Striding forward, he continues his insulting gossip by crude objectification of her appearance and figure. Philip sneers that countryside orphans are easier to toy with, provoking Gregory to stand up. Gregory furiously challenges him to continue, causing the cowardly bully to stammer in nervousness. Philip weakly defends his claims as classmates whisper rumors about the Weatherfords carrying hidden pistols. As Philip advises her to watch her behavior, she resolves to avoid making a scene. With steady, clacking footsteps, she decides it is best to handle the matter herself immediately. Philip continues mocking her family, only to freeze in terror as she looms behind him. Holding her pocket watch, she coldly warns him that gossiping about Mr. Ans is entirely useless. He gasps in absolute dread as she calmly advises him not to make a fuss. With terrifying, glowing crimson eyes, she issues a bone-chilling final warning to watch his words. Riding the bicycle, Million angrily grumbles that Philip must be completely sick with jealousy. Judith dismisses the recent insults, calmly explaining to her companion that she is unaffected by such petty gossip. Million angrily insists that Judith should have fought back, but she playfully warns them to avoid getting evicted from the dormitory. Spotting a red mailbox down the street, Judith asks Million to drop her off nearby. A soft clatter sounds as Judith slips her final thank you letter and gift into the red mailbox. Million is utterly baffled when Judith casually reveals that she is sending her final letter to her benefactor. A shocked, echoing shout rings through the air as Million reacts in absolute disbelief to her decision. Back at the orphanage, the director lets out a heavy, tired sigh while relaxing in her armchair. While Million continues his loud protests in the background, the director gently expresses her immense gratitude for the sponsor's crucial help over the years. The director listens understandingly as Judith explains that her decision to end the sponsorship was carefully considered over the past year. Judith reflects on her 5 years of incredible fortune, content that she now enjoys a peaceful, ordinary life. The director playfully points out that Judith barely spent any of the fortune on herself, choosing instead to support the orphans. A soft clink sounds as the teacup is set down, and Judith explains her hope that other needy children can receive the sponsor's care. A sudden faint crackle emanates from the radio on the shelf, broadcasting news on Christmas Eve of 1924. As the radio announces the victorious end of the 5-year war, Judith lies on her bed, clutching her pillow in silence. Crying quietly into her pillow, Judith listens to the grim broadcast detailing the immense casualties and geopolitical shifts of the bloody conflict. Walking through the bustling streets, Judith painfully recalls her sister's loss and the surreal peace of a world unaffected by her personal tragedy. Haunted by her battlefield memories, Judith deeply sympathizes with the countless orphans who survived the war but never received a saving miracle. The director notes Judith's unwavering determination, and Judith firmly confirms her readiness to move forward. Looking at the young woman before her, the director warmly remarks on how much Judith has truly grown into an adult. The director jokingly agrees that 5 years of luxury was plenty, prompting a playful, sweat-dropped reaction from Judith. Judith falls silent when the director asks if she will regret ending the correspondence with her beloved benefactor. Judith admits the letters were her comfort and confesses she added a final, special request in her last postscript. As she gazes at a shop window displaying elegant fountain pens, Judith hopes her benefactor will send a reply just this once. A pleasant chime rings out as Judith steps out of the boutique, willing to accept any reply, even an anonymous one. Holding the carefully wrapped fountain pen, Judith reflects on how a simple letter would perfectly conclude the safe life he gave her. Judith doubts she will receive a response, assuming her benefactor will simply move on now that she is grown. Outside, a low rumble sounds as a luxury car parks while the director notes the benefactor's preference for actions over words. The director dramatically slides open the door and reveals she received an unexpected phone call earlier that morning. Smiling warmly, the director announces that the mysterious benefactor has finally responded to Judith's letter for the very first time. With her heart beating rapidly, Judith is invited by the director to go downstairs and meet their long-awaited visitor. Judith is stunned as she stands before a distinguished gray-haired gentleman who has traveled all the way from Waltz. Judith is completely taken aback when the visitor greets her using both her fake name and her real past identity. A sudden memory flashes in Judith's mind of the same gentleman visiting her bedside at the hospital years ago to arrange her sponsorship. The visitor expresses his delight that Judith remembers him, confirming he was indeed the representative who visited her at Aylin's hospital. Introducing himself as Billiard Layson, the secretary of Mr. Curtis, he leaves Judith staring in silent, polite confusion. Judith panics upon learning her benefactor is the Curtis family, the world-renowned military titan, while the director casually jokes about her own high expectations. Billiard explains that his master intended to remain anonymous, but was deeply moved by Judith's final heartfelt letter. Billiard reveals his master was amused by Judith's blunt advice to sponsor a different child, adding that he fully respects her wishes. Judith sweats as she realizes her sponsor's true gargantuan status, while Billiard notes that his master deeply enjoyed reading her letters over the years. Judith looks up in surprise as Billiard prepares to hand her a special final delivery from his master. Overwhelmed with a mix of gratitude and deep embarrassment, Judith covers her red face with both hands. Back in her quiet bedroom, Judith sits on her bed, holding her benefactor's final, mysterious gift box. Judith gently grips the edges of the box, preparing to untie the elegant black ribbon. Judith carefully lifts a polished wooden box from the packaging, holding the benefactor's highly anticipated physical response. Judith gasps in sheer shock as she opens the box to reveal a beautifully crafted silver revolver nestled in velvet. Sudden chill runs through her as she reads the simple, foreboding note tucked inside the velvet lining. Judith's expression darkens in terror, wondering if her benefactor sent the weapon as a grim warning to prepare for danger. Clutching the brief card, Judith reads the chilling message again, realizing her peaceful, ordinary life is coming to an end. A sudden loud clatter startles her as she stares at the card, recognizing the handwriting instantly. Comparing the card to her original letter of sponsorship, Judith realizes with absolute certainty that they were written by the exact same hand. Clutching the card, Judith realizes with a heavy heart that her benefactor truly sent it. A close-up of the elegant card reveals her benefactor's warm anticipation of spending summer with Judith Krauser. Surrounded by blooming pink roses, Judith blushes deeply as she cradles the card against her chest. Standing by her bedroom window, Judith resolves to travel during her upcoming summer vacation. Outside the grand brick building, a sleek gray automobile is parked, ready for Judith's departure. Million worries if she will be fine traveling alone, but she confidently assures him of her age. Million's list of warnings about city pollution makes Judith sweat drop over his excessive maternal fretting. Embracing her tightly, Million begs her to contact him if anything goes wrong, which she warmly accepts. The director gently asks Judith to convey their eternal gratitude to the sponsor before she departs. Giving the director a tender kiss on the cheek, Judith bids her a loving farewell. From the window of her departing carriage, Judith waves goodbye to her waving companions. Looking out the window, Judith prepares for an arduous 25-hour carriage and train journey to Waltz.
The sprawling historic capital of Baja, Waltz, rises majestically as one of the world's greatest cities.
In a flashback, Billiard assures Judith that Curtis will handle the burden of her post-war travel. Billiard guarantees that Curtis's hired guards will keep her entirely safe upon her arrival in Waltz. Holding her glowing red amber necklace, Judith takes comfort in knowing her true identity remains safe. Narration introduces the brilliant representative director of General Curtis, a young man named Roderick Curtis. Sitting in the shadows, a mysterious, faceless man in a brown suit and fedora looms. The emblem of General Curtis represents a prodigy who built a worldwide military empire by age 29. Judith reviews a newspaper article detailing Roderick Curtis's massive wealth, political influence, and aviation business. Seated inside the train compartment, Judith reads that Roderick Curtis is vacationing in Waltz this summer. Squinting at the newspaper's blurry photo, Judith is startled when a blonde passenger asks about her interest. Judith politely admits her curiosity, and her seatmate marvels at the young millionaire's extraordinary status. While her companion grumbles about unfairness, Judith privately notes she had imagined her sponsor as a stubborn old man. Her seatmate playfully imagines a mercilessly strict professor grading papers, making Judith sweat drop in mild amusement. The blonde passenger gushes about the millionaire being Walt's most eligible bachelor, making Judith smile nervously. Feeling completely out of her depth, Judith nervously worries if she will merely be a nuisance. Planning to quickly express her gratitude and leave, Judith confirms she is a first-time college traveler. The passenger warmly contrasts the clean, simple Kinsley with the vastly different, congested atmosphere of Waltz. Leaning in close, the seasoned traveler sternly warns Judith to remain hyper-alert in the dangerous city. The blonde passenger gestures forward, warning her about the perils of passing through the northern station. As footsteps sound, the traveler whispers warnings about dangerous gangs, prompting Judith's quiet confusion. A group of intimidating men in flat caps strides arrogantly down the train carriage aisle. Listening closely, Judith learns that Bowell's gang members can be identified by distinct facial scars. The passenger quietly points out a red-haired gang member standing nearby with a noticeable cheek scar. The red-haired man adjusts his cap, carrying the infamous mark from an incredibly violent past conflict. Narration reveals the scar is practically his identity, earned while brutally eliminating his former boss. Judith freezes in surprise as the imposing red-haired man walks past her train seat. Staring at his retreating figure, Judith's eyes widen with a sudden tense realization. Remembering his yellow eyes and scarred face, Judith realizes in shock that he is her past acquaintance. A sudden screech of brakes jolts the train, prompting a startled Judith to stand up quickly. A massive steam engine grinds to a halt as the train finally arrives at Central Station. Scanning the crowded platform, Judith is disappointed to find the mysterious red-haired man has vanished. Her blonde travel companion yells in sheer shock at Judith's surprisingly fearless, bold attitude. Judith gasps in horror when the passenger reveals the red-haired man is the ruthless boss of Bowell. The passenger warns that the ruthless Bowell boss dominates the dangerous backstreets of Waltz. Judith panics, wondering if the notorious gang boss had recognized her during his constant surveillance. Judith politely thanks her companion while train personnel loudly urge passengers to move quickly. Stepping onto the platform, Judith lets out a tired sigh as she carries her suitcase. Looking around the bustling station, Judith contemplates the unsettling presence of a gangster in her journey. Judith examines a map of Waltz, realizing the Curtis estate is located far away on the east coast, a distance too far to travel on foot. Judith checks the Grand Station clock, noting that her scheduled pickup time of 2 o'clock is quickly approaching. Deciding against waiting indefinitely, Judith resolves to step outside the station first. Shifting outside, the warm afternoon sun illuminates the grand architecture of Waltz. Judith stands overwhelmed amidst the bustling crowd and noisy streets of the capital city. Judith is bumped by a passerby and nearly hit by a reckless driver, but an elderly gentleman catches her and warns her about the city's dangers, prompting her nervous gratitude. Retreating back inside the Grand Station building, Judith lets out a tired, relieved sigh. Feeling exhausted, Judith rests on a bench on the decorated indoor platform. Looking at the station clock showing that 2 o'clock has passed, Judith wonders if she should keep waiting. As 90 minutes pass in agonizing delay, Judith waits on the bench while eating a light snack. Overcome by impatience and annoyance, Judith narrows her eyes in frustration. Judith directly confronts the red-haired man who has been secretly watching her from behind a pillar for over 30 minutes. The red-haired man casually responds that he will continue watching her as long as she remains seated there. Recognizing him as a dangerous gangster, Judith attempts to leave to avoid trouble, but the red-haired man sternly orders her to stay. The red-haired man threatens Judith, warning her to stand still unless she wants to be forcefully dragged away by his associates. Realizing the surrounding men are indeed part of his gang, Judith anxiously accepts that his threat of abduction is entirely real. Judith submissively sits back down, frantically wondering why someone from her former orphanage's town of Waterford is targeting her. While silently lamenting her situation, Judith is approached by the red-haired man who asks if she has ever visited Waltz before. Judith admits it is her first visit, and the red-haired man expresses surprise at her calm, unawed demeanor in the massive city. When questioned about her lack of fear while stranded alone, Judith silently reassures herself of her safety, knowing she possesses a concealed revolver. The red-haired man mocks Judith, calling her a fool for stubbornly waiting at the station instead of exploring the city. Judith defends her actions, but the red-haired man counters that walking alone in a city swarming with criminals would have been incredibly foolish. Judith grows increasingly anxious, silently questioning when Curtis's representatives will finally arrive to pick her up. When the red-haired man notes that her ride is clearly not coming, Judith starts to connect the dots in chalk. Recalling that this man escorted her to Kinsley 5 years ago, Judith addresses him, prompting him to reveal his name as Heath Ardmore. Judith realizes Heath might be her scheduled escort and asks if Curtis sent him, receiving a silent look in response. Heath abruptly picks up her suitcase, leaving Judith confused and concerned by his cryptic warning that she has no choice. Heath suddenly grabs Judith's arm and begins pulling her forcefully away from the bench. When Judith questions if he even knows her destination, Heath correctly recites the address of the Curtis estate as he guides her upstairs. With a rough shove, Judith is forced into the backseat of an awaiting luxury automobile. Bewildered, Judith is startled to find the secretary, Billiard Layson, sitting inside the vehicle, welcoming her back. Judith demands to know if she is being kidnapped, but Heath coldly warns her against making such accusations. Removing his cap, Heath reassures her that his sole mission is to deliver her safely to her destination, just as before. As the vehicle begins to move, Judith remains deeply suspicious and guarded. Confirming they are heading in the right direction, Judith provides her fake name, Judith Waterford, when Heath demands it. Judith questions if the orphanage director is aware of Heath's aggressive and suspicious behavior. Heath dismisses the orphanage, prompting Judith to demand why he keeps staring at her so rudely. Judith suddenly realizes that Heath is not staring at her face but is instead focused on her neck. Sudden realization strikes Judith as she remembers the distinctive red amber necklace she is wearing. Fearing her true identity is exposed, Judith asks about his connection to Curtis, which he describes as a business partnership. Heath reacts with amused skepticism when the concept of honor is mentioned. In a sudden, aggressive move, Heath grips Judith's chin forcefully, catching her completely off guard. Holding her face tight, Heath sneers that her ideas of honor are highly amusing. Heath scoffs at the notion of calling Curtis an honorable gentleman. Heath warns Judith not to place too much trust in her wealthy sponsor. Heath demands that Judith open her eyes to the harsh reality of her current surroundings. Heath declares that the high society world she is entering is crawling with filthy hypocrites rather than virtuous nobles. While Judith struggles to free herself, Heath mocks her expectations of her sponsor's spotless reputation. Ignoring Judith's demands to be released, Heath reveals that Curtis is a weapons manufacturer devoid of honor or integrity. Judith fiercely defends her benefactor, but Heath challenges her loyalty by suggesting Curtis had an ulterior motive for saving her. Judith questions if Heath is warning her about Curtis, pointing out his obvious lack of genuine concern for her safety. Heath bluntly explains that he only cares about his client's money, dismissing any personal interest in saving her. When Judith asks why he is treating her so poorly, Heath insults both her appearance and her intelligence. Squeezing her cheek, Heath cruelly compares Judith to a pathetic dog that is overly grateful for a scrap of food. As Heath forcefully grips her face, Judith internally wishes to be rid of her necklace while aloud she calls him vulgar. Heath mockingly smiles, replying that people in his line of work are naturally crude and rude. Judith groans in pain as Heath roughly pushes her back, warning that she should have turned back sooner. Heath threatens Judith with a blindfold and a gag if she refuses to stay put, prompting her to call him insane. Seated inside the car, a deeply frustrated Judith sighs and wonders what is wrong with her companion. Judith reflects on why Heath dislikes her so much despite merely carrying out Curtis's orders to collect her. As the car rolls forward, Judith continues to fret in silence, wondering what she could have possibly done to offend him. The luxury car finally arrives at the Grand Curtis estate as the warm colors of sunset illuminate the mansion. Judith demands to get out of the car, but the polite butler explains there is still some distance to go. Overwhelmed with anger and frustration, Judith furiously demands that they stop the car immediately. Butler reacts in shock as the vehicle suddenly screeches to an abrupt halt. Defiant and finished with the tense ride, Judith opens the car door and steps out onto the paved driveway. Judith boldly declares she will manage her own life and hopes to never see Heath again. Heath dismisses her with a warning about unreliable telegrams, leaving Judith to curse his lack of an apology. A warm voice calls out to Judith as she stands before the massive, elegant mansion at sunset. The butler greets Judith in the lobby, scolding her for not sending a telegram to coordinate her arrival. The butler explains he received no telegrams, then gasps in shock upon noticing a red bruise on Judith's wrist. As the butler orders a maid to fetch an ice pack, Judith silently wonders if Heath intercepted her telegrams. The butler guides Judith up the grand staircase, explaining that Curtis hired Heath for protection despite his extreme methods. Walking down the corridor, the butler explains that Heath is a business associate who protected Curtis's weapons factories from gangs. Butler reveals that Curtis's father hired the Bellwell gang for defense, prompting Judith to question why they bypassed the police. The butler casually defends the practicality of gang ties in business, leaving Judith shocked by his pragmatic legal views. Continuing up the winding stairs, the butler reassures Judith that the gang connection is strictly business, though she remains skeptical. The butler apologizes on Heath's behalf, explaining that the gang leader is notoriously rude to everyone. The butler lists Heath's erratic, violent court history, leading a worried Judith to silently label him a complete psycho. Judith resolves to complain to her orphanage director while the butler defends the Bowell gang's structured, disciplined nature. Judith notes that people still fear the gang, and the butler acknowledges their inherently dangerous reputation as criminals. The butler recalls a violent street shootout from a few years ago when Heath took over as Bowell's ruthless new boss. The butler promises to warn Heath away, which Judith eagerly supports, hoping to never encounter him again. Arriving on the third floor, the butler guides Judith down the hallway toward her assigned guest room. The butler presents Judith with her stunningly beautiful and spacious guest room. The butler introduces the polite maids, Macy and Sarah, who will assist Judith during her stay. Judith asks about restricted areas, and the butler replies that only Curtis's bedroom and study are off limits. Judith blushes as she processes the immense luxury of her new high society life. The butler lists her luxurious privileges, leaving an overwhelmed Judith completely stunned by the scale of the estate's wealth. The butler informs her that Curtis is away on urgent business, promising to notify him of her arrival. A mysterious blonde-haired man speaks from down the hall, catching both of them off guard. The butler places his hand over his face in deep embarrassment as the blonde man approaches. Judith gasps in sudden, deep embarrassment as she looks down the hallway. A tall, handsome blonde man wearing an open robe that reveals his muscular chest walks down the corridor toward them. Smiling warmly, the attractive blonde man notes that he was indeed expecting a guest. The butler frantically covers Judith's eyes, scolding the blonde man for his scandalous lack of proper attire. The blonde man casually questions if his lack of clothing is truly such a major issue. A transition screen announces Chapter 8, as the butler's voice demands the blonde man fix his appearance before meeting a guest. The blonde man playfully objects to the butler's scolding, pointing out their long 10-year history together. The blonde man laments the strictness of the estate, while the butler lectures him on the difference between freedom and recklessness. Judith stands completely frozen in astonishment as she observes the handsome blonde-haired man approaching her. While Judith silently admires his striking blue eyes, the butler begins to introduce the guest. The butler introduces the man as Ethan Ewart, who politely extends his hand to greet her. Ethan warmly offers a simple hello as he bends forward slightly to greet Judith in the hallway. Judith politely introduces herself as Judith Waterford while accepting his handshake. Ethan mentions her sponsor Roger, but a sudden sharp pain causes Judith to wince uncomfortably. Ethan suddenly pauses and looks down thoughtfully, noticing something unusual about her hand. Ethan questions the bruises on her wrist, but Judith nervously claims she merely bumped into something. Ethan suggests having a doctor treat her, while Judith silently wonders if he is letting her obvious lie slide. Ethan instructs Billiard to tighten security because of potential intruders, and the butler promises to handle it. Judith is deeply puzzled by how naturally this casual guest commands her sponsor's personal secretary. Judith asks how she should address him, and Ethan casually permits her to use his name. Judith politely suggests addressing him as Mr. Ewart while the butler watches them closely. Ethan agrees to the title, but the butler desperately tries to intervene and explain Ethan's true identity. Ethan asks if he can call her a nickname, leaving Judith surprised by his casual attitude. Pondering their similar age, Ethan remains indifferent to how casually they address one another. Ethan decides to call her Judy, catching her completely off guard with the familiar nickname. Ethan asks if there is an issue, and Judith explains she has simply never been called that. Ethan inquires about her usual nicknames, and she explains that her orphanage friends called her Jude. Ethan chooses Judy anyway, prompting Billiard to silently note that Ethan always does as he pleases. Ethan flashes a warm, dazzling smile that radiates charm and eases the tension between them. Turning to leave, Ethan kindly advises Judith to get some rest after her long journey. The butler clears his throat uncomfortably, breaking the silence after Ethan's sudden departure. Billiard explains that Ethan is a close friend of Mr. Curtis visiting from the north. Billiard assures Judith that Ethan's stay is brief, while Judith graciously downplays any inconvenience she caused. Billiard insists on apologizing for the schedule mishap, leaving Judith feeling that he is being overly apologetic. The next day, Judith finally begins to understand the butler's deep concern about the estate. Judith notes that the estate is incredibly vast, yet has a surprisingly small number of staff. The grand mansion stands peaceful and quiet under the bright midday sun with its sparkling fountain. Judith observes that the few staff members complete their tasks early and vanish, leaving the mansion empty. Judith awkwardly offers a greeting as she runs into someone during her walk through the estate. Ethan greets her from his poolside lounge chair, relaxing under a sun umbrella and swim trunks. Judith realizes with exasperation that they have already run into each other multiple times that day. Their second encounter occurred in the library, where Ethan casually asked if it was already lunchtime. They met a third time in the art gallery, exchanging yet another round of polite greetings. Having fled outside to avoid him, Judith finds him poolside and quickly tries to excuse herself. Ethan playfully points out their numerous accidental encounters and asks if she is ready to speak with them. Ethan gives her the choice to leave, but Judith reluctantly decides she might as well stay and talk. Flapping wind blows through the bright white poolside umbrellas, emphasizing the quiet, sunny afternoon. Judith quietly agrees, taking a seat nearby as Ethan continues to relax on his sunbed. Judith nervously steals a quick glance at Ethan, her cheeks flushing as she tries to remain composed. Judith secretly admires Ethan's statue-like physique while silently wondering about a prominent scar on his shoulder. Ethan asks if his lack of attire makes her uncomfortable, but Judith quickly denies it. When Ethan offers alcoholic cocktails, Judith politely requests a non-alcoholic drink, prompting him to suggest orange juice. As he pours her a drink, Ethan inquires about her age and she replies she is 21. Ethan's simple remark that she is young strikes Judith with a sudden, comical wave of shock. Judith defends her age, while Ethan teasingly notes she is the same age as Roger, her sponsor. Judith apologizes, bluntly admitting that his manner of speaking reminds her of her old orphanage director. Ethan apologizes, explaining he feels familiar because Roger sent numerous letters describing her childhood in the countryside. Ethan smiles warmly, his expression radiating fondness as he remembers his old friend's endless countryside stories. Deeply embarrassed by her comparison, Judith looks down and offers her sincere apology to Ethan. Judith mentions Ethan's deceased older sister would be around his age, prompting him to suggest they act like siblings. Ethan suggests dropping the personal topic, while Judith silently expresses shock that he shared such intimate details. Ethan asks about her stay since her sponsor is away, and Judith explains she will leave soon to avoid overstaying. Lounging comfortably on his sunbed, Ethan casually mentions how beautiful summers are at St. Honk. Ethan notes St. Hawk is perfect for sunbathing, causing Judith to point out his apparent dislike of Waltz. Ethan explains massive skyscrapers make him nauseous, and Judith agrees that Waltz's dizzying heights are hard to stand. Ethan mentions most Baja youths dream of Waltz, leading Judith to jokingly question if she fits that typical mold. Intrigued by her playful remark, Ethan smiles warmly and asks Judith why she feels different from others. Judith freezes in absolute shock when Ethan suddenly asks if her reservation is because she is from Kilgeny. Sitting rigidly in her chair under the sunny sky, Judith is stunned silent by Ethan's direct question. Overwhelmed by his accurate deduction, Judith's fingers tremble and slip against the stem of her glass. The glass shatters on the poolside pavement as Judith silently reels from the sudden revelation. Judith wonders how much Ethan knows, questioning if their encounters were orchestrated to keep watch over her. Ignoring the shattered glass, Judith steps on the spilled juice to demand answers, but Ethan firmly orders her to step back onto the sunbed. Judith demands answers, nervously clutching her glowing amber pendant and contemplating using her mysterious abilities. Asking for a brief moment, Ethan crouches down to inspect her foot while a startled Judith watches. Gently holding her foot, Ethan advises Judith not to react so defensively whenever someone questions her past. Judith demands to know how he found out, and Ethan reasons that anyone well-traveled would easily notice. Ethan pauses thoughtfully, staring intently with his striking blue eyes as he prepares to explain. Ethan explains her regional accent is highly noticeable, causing a nervous Judith to flinch slightly. Judith notes no one back home ever mentioned her accent, but Ethan explains rural villagers wouldn't recognize its subtle, muted qualities. As the butler rushes over, Ethan orders him to clean up the glass while declaring he will carry Judith inside. Extending his hand, Ethan politely asks for Judith's permission to carry her away from the broken glass. Judith insists on walking, but Ethan warns her that tiny glass shards could lodge deeper into her feet. Judith looks down in quiet hesitation as Ethan prepares to lift her up. Ethan firmly yet gently takes Judith's hand to hoist her into his arms. Sweeping her off her feet, Ethan carries Judith bridal style as she blushes intensely at their sudden closeness. Resting her head near his chest, Judith softly thanks him while silently realizing she can feel his steady heartbeat. As Ethan carries her inside, Judith nervously hopes he cannot feel how rapidly her own heart is beating. Walking briskly down the corridor, Judith makes her way through the estate's luxurious halls. Judith regrets missing her chance to ask about his comments while recalling the maid's advice about treating minor wounds. Having studied the common language for 5 years, Judith remains frustrated that her foreign accent was so easily detected. The large wooden doors swing open as Judith enters the study to confront Ethan directly. Judith stands resolutely before Ethan's desk, demanding his full attention as he works. Ethan stops his writing and stares up at Judith with a neutral, silent expression. Ethan teasingly compliments her neat appearance, which only prompts an annoyed Judith to raise her voice in frustration. Judith urges Ethan to explain what is wrong with her pronunciation, emphasizing how important this matter is to her. Tapping his pen on the desk, Ethan casually remarks that her overall pronunciation is simply too strong. Ethan explains that strong plosives are a typical linguistic feature of people from the northeastern western continent. Ethan details how her silenced letters point to southern Kilgany, adding that black hair is highly common there. Flashing a bright, cheerful smile, Ethan proudly asks if his linguistic deduction isn't quite logical. Ethan tells her not to look so worried, while Judith silently fears the implications if her Kilgany escape is exposed. Judith stands quietly before Ethan's desk as the silence stretches between them. Ethan looks down thoughtfully, letting out a soft sigh as he contemplates his next move. Ethan suddenly proposes making a mutual deal, catching a highly suspicious Judith completely off guard. Ethan inquires about her foreign language skills, and Judith lists Kilganian, Oberonian, and basic conversational Preda. Presenting a clipboard, Ethan asks her to translate a document, explaining he has been searching for a translator. Scanning the paper, Judith begins reading a report describing a mysterious figure named Silly visiting an auction house. Judith finishes translating the text, prompting a satisfied Ethan to acknowledge that those were indeed the correct words. A soft rustle fills the quiet room as Judith flips through the paper, realizing with a sudden wave of deep unease that she is looking at a highly sensitive surveillance report. A sharp thud sounds as she firmly slams the folder back down onto the desk, immediately resolving not to get involved in anything illegal. Standing before his desk, Judith voices her concern about causing trouble for her sponsor, while a relaxed Ethan casually shifts his focus back to her initial request. Taken aback, Judith blushes and reacts with surprise when Ethan playfully asks if she suspects him of attempting to blackmail her. Ethan proposes a mutual deal, suggesting she translate the sensitive documents in secret, while he promises to help correct her regional pronunciation in return. Judith stands in quiet contemplation, carefully weighing the fairness of his proposal to keep each other's secrets. Leaning forward at his desk, Ethan offers his solemn promise that their secret arrangement will not cause harm to anyone. Judith silently wrestles with her doubts, uncertain of the true weight and intentions behind the mysterious nobleman's name. Looking directly at him, Judith finally voices her agreement, accepting his terms of mutual secrecy. With their quiet deal officially struck, the tension in the library begins to settle as they prepare to work together. Her light footsteps click softly along the corridor floor as Judith makes her way to the library for their scheduled afternoon sessions. Clutching her books tightly, Judith mentally prepares herself to tackle her newly assigned translation tasks. A soft creak sounds as the heavy wooden door swings open, marking the start of her daily work. A dramatic flowery light seems to frame his greeting as a casually dressed Ethan welcomes Judith to the study with a dazzling smile. Seated across the desk from him, Judith points out his effortless authority in the mansion, prompting Ethan to joke about his closeness with Roderick. Judith awkwardly averts her gaze as Ethan playfully teases her about her formal, modest attire. Gesturing with a self-assured smile, Ethan boasts about how well his relaxed robe fits their cozy shared study sessions. She clears her throat uncomfortably, warning Ethan that his extremely casual outfit is bound to earn him a scolding from the butler. Sitting back comfortably, Ethan confidently dismisses her concerns, teasingly giving her permission to stare as much as she likes. Judith clutches her book tightly, privately reflecting on how incredibly peculiar and unpredictable his personality is. The document details ongoing surveillance of a mysterious target currently being tracked through the backstreets of Waltz. Reading further, Judith feels increasingly unsettled by the sensitive intelligence describing cooperation with various influential factions. Studying the text closely, Judith is alarmed to find details linking the target, Silly, directly to prominent criminal syndicates. Judith steals a quick, suspicious glance at Ethan, wondering if he could possibly be an undercover police officer. Judith quickly dismisses the theory, realizing a cop wouldn't be close to Roderick, who is known to associate with these very factions. Catching his warm, pleasant smile, Judith struggles to decipher the true nature of the man sitting before her. Her cheeks burn bright pink as she resolves to ignore his charms and remain entirely professional. A sharp rustle of fabric follows as Judith forces herself to look down and focus on her work, determined not to let him fluster her. Judith privately marvels at the bizarre, mismatched friendship between her serious sponsor and the carefree Ethan. The fireplace crackles warmly, casting a soft, flickering glow across the quiet library shelves as the afternoon fades. Stopping mid-thought, Judith raises her hand as an important question suddenly crosses her mind. Looking up from her papers, Judith inquires about Roderick's true character, and Ethan warmly affirms their close friendship. Ethan describes Roderick as an exceptionally sharp and visionary leader who is always steps ahead of everyone else. Scanning the document in her hand, Judith presses further about her sponsor's personal morality, prompting Ethan's casual praise. Ethan describes him as kind and polite, though his words only cause Judith to sink into silent, conflicted thought. A tense memory flashes back as the red-haired man mockingly questions if she truly expected her patron to be a spotless gentleman. The red-haired man's mocking gaze intensifies as he details how General Curtis profits off manufacturing weapons of war.
Returning to the present, Judith remains troubled, noting the stark contrast between her memories and how others describe her sponsor.
Ethan freezes mid-motion as Judith directly asks if he has ever experienced the horrors of war firsthand. Judith reveals her painful past as an exiled Kilgenian, admitting she lived through the devastating conflict herself. A soft sigh escapes Ethan as he leans back, the heavy mood of war settling over them. Ethan gently acknowledges how deeply her sponsor's dark line of work must weigh on her mind. Looking down in silence, Judith absorbs his question about her conflicting feelings toward her benefactor. Judith looks up, her eyes filled with sorrow as she confesses her inner turmoil over the harsh truth. A painful memory depicts Lieselot lying helpless on the ground with a cold rifle pointed directly at her. Ethan reasons that Baha and Roderick remain neutral, urging her not to place the blame of war on them. Sitting quietly, Judith listens as Ethan explains Roderick was merely fulfilling business demands during the conflict. Looking at him apologetically, Judith expresses regret for complaining, but Ethan quickly reassures her that he understands. Ethan looks on with a soft, empathetic expression, sharing in the heavy emotional weight of her past. Judith looks up, deeply moved as Ethan reminds her that war leaves painful scars for everyone, including himself. Ethan stands quietly in his luxurious red robe, lost in deep, silent thought. Looking out the window, Ethan remarks that things would have been much worse if Roderick had been an Islandian. Ethan states that such a scenario would never happen, adding that if it did, Roderick wouldn't have come to Waltz, leaving Judith in silent thought. Judith silently reflects on how relieved she is while closely observing a peculiar change in Ethan's facial expression. Judith looks up in surprise as Ethan smiles warmly, casually announcing that it appears to be just about time. Judith gasps that there is still half a page left and offers to finish quickly, but Ethan clarifies that is not the issue. Judith reacts with shock and disbelief, staring up at Ethan as he stands calmly by the desk. A voice over the phone addresses him as Lord Ethan, prompting him to tease the caller about being impatient and asking if they missed him after only 3 days. The voice on the phone sighs and asks to end the teasing, inquiring if there is currently a guest at St. Hawk after reading a telegram, which prompts a realization from Judith. The caller hopes it is not who he thinks, but Ethan teases him and suggests he talk to her himself, shocking Judith as he addresses the caller as Roddy. The caller demands to know what they are both doing together, quickly adding that he trusts Ethan but remains highly suspicious as Ethan offers the receiver to Judith. A close-up reveals Roderick holding the telephone receiver in tense, expectant silence. With her cheeks flushed, Judith stands in nervous hesitation as her heart beats rapidly while holding the phone. Roderick stands before his library bookshelves, waiting in silent anticipation for her to speak. Clutching the receiver to her ear, Judith hesitantly begins to speak into the phone. Judith panics inwardly, frantically trying to decide how she should address her benefactor.
Feeling immense pressure, Judith tries to steel herself to speak, comparing her intense nervousness to a student presenting in front of a strict professor.
Judith formally introduces herself to Mr. Curtis, immediately wondering with embarrassment if her greeting sounded far too stiff. Mr. Curtis chuckles and remarks that it feels like they are meeting for the first time, leaving a blushing Judith completely flustered. Roderick mentions the nickname Ans that she gave him, wondering aloud if he was mistaken and thinking they had grown close. An intensely embarrassed Judith holds the receiver close, frantically wondering how she should respond to her sponsor's playful comments. Judith reflects on Roderick as her deeply trusted benefactor and weapon dealer whose true motives for saving her remain completely shrouded in mystery. Judith listens intently as Roderick's calm voice continues to speak over the telephone receiver. Ethan crosses his arms and smiles as Roderick states it is finally his turn to formally introduce himself to her. Roderick Curtis formally states his full name, sending a wave of quiet realization over Judith as she holds the receiver. Roderick explains his role as CEO and notes that he was informed of her eagerness to meet him, even visiting Kinsley in person. Roderick expresses that he always looked forward to her delightful letters but was highly surprised by the unexpected requests written in them. Judith quickly apologizes if her letters caused any discomfort, earnestly assuring him that she had no hidden intentions. Judith fumbles over his name in a panic, accidentally calling him Mr. Ans before quickly correcting herself to Mr. Curtis. Judith apologizes for her awkwardness in speaking live, but Roderick gently replies that she isn't the only one feeling anxious. Roderick points out that despite their correspondence, this is truly their very first time speaking to each other in person. Roderick confesses his worry that his line of work might make her uncomfortable, noting that this conversation could be their last chance. Judith stands quietly in the light, deeply moved as Roderick confesses that he feels she can truly understand his feelings. When Roderick warmly asks if she enjoys cricket, Judith politely responds that she has indeed heard of the sport before. Judith smiles softly, her face blushing as she feels a warm, genuine connection growing through their conversation. Ethan leans back against the bookcase, silently observing Judith as she remains completely absorbed in her phone call. Roderick reluctantly announces that he must end the call as someone is currently waiting for him. Roderick offers to give her his direct contact number, causing a flustered Judith to scramble to find a pen and paper.
Roderick says he looks forward to their eventual meeting, while Judith silently holds back her complicated emotions. Roderick questions her use of the name Mr. Ons, prompting Judith to apologize and admit it feels strange to say it directly. Roderick admits that hearing the nickname out loud is slightly embarrassing, before warmly wishing Judith a day filled with joy. A soft click sounds as Roderick hangs up, leaving Judith holding the silent receiver with a gentle sigh. Judith stands alone by the desk, anxiously wondering if she made any mistakes or left a good impression on him. A sharp clack sounds as Judith carefully places the heavy black receiver back onto its brass cradle. Judith blushes intensely, reflecting on how wonderful Roderick's clear, composed, and effortlessly charming voice sounded over the phone. Walking slowly, Judith ponders the stark contrast between the two completely different stories she has heard about her sponsor. She recalls the red-haired gangster's harsh warning, questioning if a man in Roderick's business could ever care about honor. Conversely, she remembers Ethan's glowing praise of Roderick as a brilliant, sharp-minded, and truly admirable friend. Judith stands quietly by the desk, desperately hoping that Ethan's positive assessment of Roderick is the true one. When Ethan questions her thoughts, Judith quietly admits she hopes he is right about Roderick being a good person. The blonde-haired man laughs lightheartedly, thoroughly amused by their ongoing conversation. Judith agrees with his point about Roger before falling into a silent contemplative pause. Judith internally resolves to speak with him directly to uncover the truth of the situation. She wonders if her anonymous sponsor is trustworthy or someone she must abandon after summer. Though the blonde man remarks on their surprisingly good rapport during their first meeting, Judith modestly disagrees. Judith assures him she wasn't laughing, yet he playfully laments that she treats him differently than Roger. Judith denies treating him differently, though she internally chides herself to hide her visible excitement. As they discuss a scheduled meeting in North Carolina, Judith struggles to keep her composure despite knowing nothing about the clients. A soft chuckle from the blonde man breaks the silence, catching a surprised Judith off guard. The blonde man affectionately calls her a kid, which immediately ruffles her feathers. Judith indignantly questions his age-based teasing, pointing out that children do not mature overnight. The blonde man calls a truce on their banter, though Judith insists he was the instigator. Judith reluctantly accepts her study assignment after the blonde man emphasizes its long-term benefits to her. Judith doubts how copying what appears to be a stalking journal will aid her Persian studies. The scene shifts to the towering, illuminated skyscrapers of Welts on North Carini Street under the night sky. Heth walks purposefully through the cold city streets, adjusting his cap against the night breeze. Stepping into a beam of light, Heth arrives at his secure designated location. Heth stands alone in a massive, dimly lit hall, facing a towering window. An elderly woman peeks through red curtains to verify Heth's long-awaited arrival. The elderly woman sternly reprimands Heth for his lateness, noting their guest's impatience. With a sharp click, Heth pushes open the door and prepares to meet the visitor. Princess Celeste Harvest of the Parida Kingdom sits regally on a sofa, sipping red wine. Heth casually tosses his cap aside, dryly questioning what brought a royal princess to his establishment. While her attendant reacts in outrage, Princess Celeste dismisses Heth's poor etiquette as a byproduct of his upbringing. Heth offers a sarcastic thanks for her understanding, prompting the princess to suggest they get straight to business. On Princess Celeste's command, her attendants step forward to present a heavy black briefcase. The briefcase clicks open to reveal 50,000 Reed, the only currency capable of motivating the Botwell leader. Princess Celeste officially delivers her commission, asking Heth to track down a specific individual. The princess specifies her target, confidently assuming Heth already knows she is searching for the Kilgeny mage. Placing her glass down, Celeste explains that an unknown entity has been actively obstructing her search in Waltz. Celeste reveals she has identified the saboteur, prompting Heth to calmly ask for the name. Celeste accuses Heth of protecting the mage and demands he betray his current client to deliver the girl to her. Heth remains dead silent, his gaze turning cold under her direct accusation. The word triggers a memory of Heath standing with Judith under a dark, snowy night sky. In his memory, Judith gently explains that her actions are driven by a desire to protect, just as they were years ago. Heth recalls another deal involving Judith that was easily settled for a substantial sum of money. While Heth internally finds her persistence irritating, Celeste points out how relentlessly he has been searching. Celeste smugly wonders if Heth's client simply outbid her, mocking the desperate nature of the mage. Celeste issues a chilling warning about the dangers of greed, urging Heth to accept her deal. Heth mockingly declines her offer, declaring he prefers to choose his alliances with far greater care. Celeste questions if Heth harbors a personal interest in the mage, a claim he echoes with dry amusement. Remembering Judith's delicate features, Heth silently concedes that the rumor of all mages being beautiful is quite accurate. Celeste describes how demonic mages use their swamp-like red eyes to effortlessly charm and destroy their victims. Heth bluntly asks if she believes he has fallen under the mage's hypnotic enchantment. Heth begins walking away, leaving Celeste convinced his rejection of her fortune proves he is bewitched. Heth halts to deliver a brutal parting truth, explaining he is not enchanted but simply dislikes her.
Dismissing her demands, Heth advises the princess to keep her royal entitlement in her own kingdom. The elderly woman greedily smiles, completely indifferent to the political schemes surrounding the Kilgeny mage. The elderly woman swiftly loots the open briefcase, declaring that while politics are dirty, money remains innocent. Celeste furiously demands to know if they intend to keep her money without fulfilling the contract. Hath Admore offers valuable information to the princess instead of moving Boel for 50,000 reed. As a gun is suddenly drawn, Heth reveals that one of her subordinates is a spy. Heath ruthlessly shoots the spy, explaining that mutual trust is the foundation of any business deal. Stepping on the bleeding spy's hand, Heth coldly dismisses his half-hearted attempts to please him. Declaring his strict neutrality, Heth warns the princess to stop stealing personal correspondence for information. The princess is left completely speechless by a sudden and terrifying display of cold ruthlessness. Watching him leave, the princess questions if Heth harbors a deep hatred for the nobility. Princess recalls Heth's past as a slave who murdered his master's heir before escaping. The princess suggests his reluctance to accompany her stems from his resentment toward royal lineage. She challenges him to reconsider his stance if an Ilancia noble resides at his client's manor. Butler once instructed young Heth to simply keep his new young master amused and comfortable. The servant warned young Heth of punishment for insolence but promised comfortable living for absolute obedience. The butler reassured Heth that his sick mother's medical expenses would be fully covered. Left entirely alone, young Heth silently contemplates the weight of the arrangement he just accepted. A sudden wave of nausea hits Heth as the painful childhood memories resurface in his mind.
Meanwhile, back at the Grand Estate, a maid announces that a letter has arrived from Kinsley.
Sarah delivers the correspondence to Judith, who is thrilled to receive a letter from the director. Judith sits on her bed with a letter opener, eager to read the director's words. She reflects on how quickly 10 days have passed since she arrived at the lavish mansion. A gentle smile spreads across Judith's face as she begins reading the warm letter from home. The letter describes Heth's arrival at Waterford as a troubled, closed-off young orphan in the winter. The director remembers him as an antisocial, cynical child who was exiled with no clear nationality. She recalls Heth's deep-seated resentment toward the cruel and rigid aristocratic class system of Islands. After barely staying in Waterford for 4 years, Heath eventually left his caretakers behind for Waltz. Sipping her tea, the director notes that she keeps close track of all her former pupils. She reminds Judith of the tragic, war-torn backgrounds shared by every orphan who passed through Waterford. Judith realizes Heth must have been incredibly young and vulnerable when he first arrived at Waterford. She laughs as the headmaster jokingly advises her to kick Heth if they ever meet again. The letter urges Judith not to avoid Waltz simply because of her fear of Heth's presence. Determined, Judith resolves not to hide away in the mansion when so many people support her. Taking a deep breath, Judith makes her way down the grand staircase of the mansion. Judith spots Ryson and Ethan speaking quietly to one another at the bottom of the stairs. Judith is taken aback when Ethan casually remarks that she has a very unique, troublesome presence. Rayson urgently warns Ethan about the potential tragic consequences of skipping the crucial upcoming negotiation meeting. Ethan dismisses his father's potential reaction, while Judith stands awkwardly nearby during their family dispute. Ethan firmly maintains his stance, refusing to yield to the pressure of his family's demands. Noticing her presence, Ethan's serious demeanor instantly melts into a warm and cheerful morning greeting. Ethan firmly advises Rayson to focus strictly on his professional duty to the Curtis estate. Ethan kindly reminds Judith to eat her breakfast while she notices he is dressed to leave. Ethan is pleased that she noticed his unusually formal attire, admitting his typical preference for comfort. Judith silently ponders his words as he explains the duty of presenting himself properly when required. Ethan playfully guesses her hidden wish for a shared carriage ride, hitting the mark perfectly. The bustling district of Mine Street serves as the central hub for key government administrative offices. Nearby, Johnson Street serves as a crowded haven for major banks and stock market investors. Finally, Karina Street stands as the vibrant center of global culture, high fashion, and art. Ethan apologetically explains he cannot accompany her today, leaving her in the care of Mode. Before departing, Ethan suddenly asks Judith if she remembers their recent translation work from 2 days ago. Leaning in close, Ethan issues a stern, quiet warning for her to stay away from North Carolina. Judith instantly connects his warning to the mysterious telegram detailing a suspicious meetup in North Carolina. Ethan cautions her about the looming danger, and Judith promises to keep his warning in mind. Judith receives a parting warning to stay safe and watch her belongings as a car departs. Heth suddenly appears behind Judith, startling her after she grumbles about being treated like a child. Heath casually greets Judith as a little exile, prompting her annoyed reaction to his sudden presence. Mode quickly intervenes to protect Judith, but she calmly reassures him that she wants to avoid a scene. Judith nervously offers a polite response, trying to maintain her composure during the tense encounter. Judith warmly recalls the kindness and compassion of her old friends at the Waterford orphanage. Judith cheerfully greets Heth as Mr. Ardmore, calling their sudden crossing of paths a curious coincidence. Heth mockingly questions if she is truly naive enough to believe their meeting is just a coincidence.
Judith asks Heth if he plans to kidnap her again, but he teasingly offers to comply.
Judith politely declines his offer, mentioning her sore wrist, which catches Heath by surprise. Heath leans in closely, intently inspecting her wrist with a quiet murmur of concern. Judith pulls away, preparing to leave while wondering why he is staring so intensely at her. Judith walks away from Heth, stating she wishes to avoid any such encounters in the future. Walking away, Judith glances back in disbelief as a sudden, unsettling realization hits her. Judith hopes they never meet again, wondering if Heth is actually feeling guilty about his past actions. Inside a bookstore, Judith reflects on the harsh reality that things rarely go as planned. Judith notices Heth standing outside the window, wondering if he is indeed feeling guilty. Judith continues to observe Heth from inside, questioning the true motives behind his lingering presence. Judith realizes Heth has been tailing her to the souvenir shop, post office, and record store. Mode offers to warn Heth again, but Judith dismisses it, thinking Heth might just be bored. Judith exits the bookstore, finding Heth still waiting outside and growing increasingly irritated by his persistence. Judith wonders if Heth's behavior stems from a grudge against Waterford or if he knows a secret. Heth quietly admits to himself that he has recently realized something he had never noticed before. Her attention is taken by a sudden sharp clack of her shoe stopping in her tracks. Judith stops walking and turns back to directly face her silent pursuer. Standing directly before him, Judith calls out to Heth, ready to address his constant presence. Judith asks Heth where the best place for dessert on Leonard Street is, and he answers Dump's Bakery. Judith asks Heth to show her the way, resolved to establish a proper conversation to clear things up. Heth stares back at her silently, his expression unreadable as he processes her sudden request. A sudden loud chime of a bicycle bell rings out as a rider rushes down the street. The rider speeds past him, shouting a warning as Judith and Heth stand close together. Startled by the fast-moving bicycle, Judith is pulled back out of harm's way. Heth swiftly pulls Judith close, catching her in his arms as her hat flies off. As the bicyclist shouts an apology, Heth stares down intensely at Judith, who is held against him. Judith looks up at him in surprise, her breath catching as she finds herself held so closely. Meanwhile, a wealthy woman inquires about his interest in the stunning women of the main lineage. Back in the present, Heth holds Judith close and questions her reaction while she demands to be let go. Heth blocks her from leaving, asking where she thinks she's going. Heth walks ahead and asks if she didn't say she wanted cake. A cheerful welcome chime sounds as they enter Dump's Bakery together. At their table, Heth offers to pay for her order, which she deems fair payment for his guidance. Looking at the menu, Judith reminds herself that Heath is just another troubled child from Waterford. Heth rattles off a massive dessert order, confirming to a stunned Judith that he intends to eat it all. Heath demands she finish every bite, making Judith realize he ordered the massive spread entirely for her. Her attention is caught as she takes her very first delicious bite of the cake. A sudden wave of pure delight washes over Judith as she finds the dessert absolutely delicious. Judith happily compares the cake to their patron's gifts, but wonders how Heth knew about this place. When Judith asks why he isn't eating, Heth quietly tells her to go ahead without him. Heth repeats his command to eat, leaving Judith frustrated by his absurdly large order. Judith stares back at Heth in silent bewilderment, completely unable to understand his strange actions. Judith demands an apology from Heth, but he, blunt and unbothered, asks what for. Judith gestures to her wrist, explaining exactly why she is holding a grudge. Judith lists the specific injury she sustained in their past encounter, leaving Heth surprised. Judith is frustrated to realize that Heth has absolutely no memory of hurting her. Judith discovers Heth's interest in her wrist was merely out of cruel, physical curiosity. Heth mockingly observes that it is strange for a Waterford orphan to be so physically weak. Judith defends her upbringing, asserting she learned values far more important than mere combat. Judith flinches in visible shock when Heth casually dismisses the concept of a mother. Heth cynically remarks that having a mother only brings trouble, leaving Judith utterly speechless. Judith firmly demands Heth show Rachel respect, arguing it is a minor request. Heth crosses his arms, slyly asking if the headmistress spoke about him to her. Judith is deeply offended when Heth insults Rachel, quickly defending her family's circumstances. Judith reluctantly reveals that Rachel simply called him one of her most difficult students. Heth deeply offends Judith by comparing her concern to fake sympathy from hypocritical orphanage workers. Heth wonders if this shared naive philosophy is why all Waterford children look identical. Flashbacks highlight Heth's bitter past, filled with empty sympathy and disgust from his caretakers. Heth walks alone, dismissing the orphanage workers as hypocrites who offered meaningless comfort. Heath cynically reflects that his current desperate situation might make him no better. A dark memory flashes of Heth standing over a fallen man crushed by Erlands. He remembers when Rachel first knelt down and offered him refuge at Waterford. Returning to the present, Heth quietly pities Judith for blindly trusting her deceitful sponsor. A mysterious silver-haired woman fills Heth's thoughts as he grimly foresees Judith's tragic fate. Reflecting on his own foolish past actions makes Heth feel physically ill. Judith remains quiet, letting the weight of Heth's cynical remarks settle between them.
Squeezing her hands together, Judith requests that they first clear up a major misunderstanding. Judith firmly explains that she does not pity Heth nor offer him cheap comfort. Judith recalls her painful childhood in Kilkenny, where she was despised as a cursed mean. She remembers the villagers burning her touched objects, blaming her for every misfortune. She recalls how her protective sister saved her from being stoned to death. Judith asserts that despite her past, she does not believe she is a cursed being. Judith credits Waterford and her generous patron for giving her a real home to heal. Judith acknowledges that Heth likely views Waterford and her patron in a completely different light. Judith draws a clear boundary, stating there is no chance they will ever stand together. Judith points out that their worlds, thoughts, and personal circumstances are completely different. Judith requests that Heth stop paying attention to her, stating she hates threats and hypocrisy. Heath quietly accepts her claim that they belong to entirely different worlds. Heath scoffs with a quiet smirk, wondering just how different she truly is. Heth agrees to stop showing interest in her private life, respecting her wishes. Heth stands up, coldly taking his leave and preparing to walk away. A sudden sharp gasp escapes Judith as Heth firmly grabs her hand to stop her. Judith demands to know his intentions, but Heth insists she must hear his real motives. Heth demands to know who she is currently living with in that grand mansion. Ignoring Judith's request to let go, Heth explains he must know to decide his side. Heth lists several powerful noble families, questioning if her sponsor belongs to one. Leaning in close, Heth demands to know if an Eland's noble resides at the mansion. The scene shifts back to the grand mansion, bathed in a vibrant sunset. Inside the mansion, Mode adjusts his collar while walking down the quiet hallway. Mode enters the parlor to find Judith sitting on the couch, looking visibly troubled. Mode advises Judith to eat nutritious food rather than snacks, but she claims she has eaten. Mode holds a box from the bakery as Judith admits she was debating eating the leftovers. Mode sets down the bakery box, asking if she is stressed, while Judith curiously wonders who told him that craving sweets is linked to worry. Mode reveals his younger sister used to worry every night over trivial matters like eating chocolate before bed. When Judith suggests his sister must have had many worries, Mode admits he was not interested in her back then. Mode regretfully remembers how little he knew about his late sister's dreams, likes, and dislikes during her lifetime. Judith assumes Mode was a kind older brother, but he disputes this, saying his sister would be speechless with disbelief. A sudden crisp rustle echoes as Mode opens a telegram reporting Bowell's location and a scheduled meeting. Mode internally questions Bolwell's loyalty, wondering if the man has turned traitor to his partner. Mode examines the card, which invites members of the Rabbit Club to a mysterious gathering. Mode tries to downplay his sisterly dynamic, lightheartedly stating that not all siblings get along perfectly. Judith flusteredly reassures Mode of his kindness, while Mode realizes his silence over the telegram made her self-conscious. Judith apologizes for raising the subject, but Mode thanks her and expresses hope that Judith's sister was a better sibling. Judith falls silent, staring ahead with a solemn, thoughtful expression on her face. Mode notes that Judith shares some similarities with his sister, catching Judith completely by surprise. Mode explains his sister loved her sibling excessively, prompting Judith to wonder what they could possibly have in common. Judith quietly reflects on her own sister, feeling a familiar ache in her heart. In a flashback, a young dark-haired child resolves to play whatever role is expected of her. Lieselot remembers her duty to live not just as Judith's sister, but as Kilkenny's representative. Lieselot tells Judith about the heavy burden and societal expectations of belonging to a noble lineage. Lieselot explains that enduring these burdens is the price of the noble privileges she has enjoyed since birth. Returning to the present, Judith acknowledges her duty to maintain an upright demeanor despite her personal desires. Judith sits on the couch, lost in quiet contemplation of her sister's words and her own duties. Back in the bakery, Heth demands to know if an Aelant's noble resides in the mansion with Judith. Judith firmly denies ever meeting anyone with the surname Aelant's, assuring Heth she is telling the truth. Judith notes that the only possibility would be during her carefree 2-month stay at an enemy hospital. Judith considers that the military officer she met at the hospital might have been of noble birth. Judith asks Heth if her explanation is sufficient, reiterating she has never consciously met an Aelant's noble. A sudden quick tap sounds as Heth releases her hand, warning that he will soon discover if she is lying. Back in the mansion parlor, Mode invites Judith to ask him whatever is on her mind. Judith gathers her courage and asks Mode directly if he is indeed a noble. Mode remains silent, his expression unreadable as he processes Judith's unexpected question about his lineage. Mode lets out a soft sigh, claiming Judith is putting him on too high of a pedestal. Mode denies being a noble, revealing he was born in Northworth but has one parent from prestigious lineage. Mode playfully boasts that he has only his face and wealth, allowing him to live an easy, lazy life. Mode asks if she is curious about anything else, and a satisfied Judith tells him that is enough. Mode apologizes for his bluntness, but reiterates that Judith resembles his sister, which she takes as a compliment. Mode jokingly tells Judith he wouldn't mind if she called him sister, which she flatly refuses. Mode advises Judith to tidy up since it is late, prompting her to ask if he is treating her like a child. Judith internally grumbles about Mode's patronizing attitude, wondering where he learned such behaviors. Judith firmly convinces herself that Mode cannot possibly be one of the Aelance nobles who destroyed her homeland. Judith bids Mode goodnight but is surprised by his uncharacteristic silence before he suddenly calls out to her. Judith turns back and softly calls Mode's name, sensing a sudden shift in his mood. A soft, gentle rustling sound is heard as Mode reaches out and softly runs his fingers through Judith's hair. Mode gently pats Judith's head, guiltily realizing he never showed such affection to his own sister. Mode fondly and sadly remembers his sister's radiant smile from when she was still alive. Mode reminds himself that Judith is not his sister, acknowledging his emotional projection is selfish. A soft, gentle stroking sound is heard as Mode cradles her face, wondering if he can indulge his selfishness just this once. Mode holds Judith close, creating a tender and emotionally charged moment between them. Judith's face flushes red as she confusedly questions what Mode is trying to do. Mode mentally reproaches himself, recognizing his actions as the worst kind of selfishness. Mode quickly masks his emotions with a playful smile, telling Judith she should head to bed. Judith asks Mode if he is going to bed, prompting him to joke about his age, which she playfully teases. Judith decides to head into her room first, advising Mode not to stay up too late. Mode gently wishes Judith sweet dreams as he bids her goodnight with a warm smile. A sudden clean click of her door closing echoes as Judith stands in silence, processing her racing thoughts. Judith's face flashes bright red in deep embarrassment as she screams internally over the heart-fluttering encounter. Collapsing face first onto the rug, Judith desperately convinces herself that Mode's head pat was purely sibling affection. Judith reminds herself of Mode's gentle gaze, certain he only looked at her as a younger sibling. Dismissing her racing thoughts, Judith tries to clear her mind and put the brief moment behind her. Judith's attention is suddenly caught by a gentle cool breeze brushing against her cheek. Judith wonders if the maid left the terrace doors open as she walks toward the billowing curtains. Stepping onto the stone balcony, her attention is taken by a sudden, quick rolling sound of a metallic object. Judith's eyes widen in alarm as she identifies the object on the floor as a spent bullet shell casing. Before she can process the discovery, a sudden light tap sounds on her head as another casing bonks her. Judith leans over the railing to angrily confront the culprit, only to be met with a casual nightly greeting. Judith is utterly speechless to find Heth standing in the courtyard, tossing bullet casings up at her balcony. Judith demands to know why Heth is lurking around her home, but he dismisses her concern as a simple night stroll. Spotting a holster on Heth's thigh, Judith panics and questions if he came to personally investigate the mansion's occupants. Judith desperately calls after Heth as he turns to leave, trying to explain that she has already verified the household. Annoyed that Heth is completely ignoring her warnings, Judith's irritation flares as she plots a reckless move. A sudden, sharp rustle of movement sounds as Heth pauses and turns back to investigate. Heth is gripped by sudden panic as Judith recklessly climbs over the high stone balcony railing. Heth scolds Judith for her complete lack of safety, asking if she has a death wish as she hangs from the ledge. Heth holds out his arms and instructs her to stop clinging to the railing and simply drop down so he can catch her. Judith stubbornly demands a promise of cooperation before she lets go, warning that a fall would leave a corpse for the gardener. Judith smugly points out that Heth would face trespassing charges while she rested peacefully in her bed, leaving him speechless. Realizing she holds all the cards, Heth finally capitulates and promises to behave, calling her a madwoman. Satisfied with her leverage, Judith prepares to drop down from the balcony into Heth's arms. As Judith falls, her concealed red gemstone necklace slips loose and begins to emanate a bright mystical glow. Heth catches her securely in his arms but freezes in sheer terror as her eyes suddenly glow a haunting crimson. A tense, quiet moment passes under the full moon as Heth stands frozen, holding her close in the dark garden. Staring into her mesmerizing gaze, Heth recalls the legend of those whose eyes are compared to a crimson swamp. A flashback reveals Heth asking the silver-haired woman if he had fallen under some kind of magical enchantment. The woman notes that falling under such a spell would be entirely expected, though Heth chose to dismiss the warning. Lost in the hypnotic red glow, Heth holds Judith securely as the mystical atmosphere surrounds them. In an instant, the supernatural crimson light drains from Judith's eyes as she returns to normal. With a sudden soft rustle, Judith loses consciousness and collapses limply against Heth's shoulder. Unprepared for her sudden weight, Heth loses his footing and the two crash heavily onto the garden lawn. A sudden sharp click of a gun being cocked echoes as Heth finds himself staring down the barrel of a pistol. Showing off her surprising agility, Judith holds Heth at gunpoint while triumphantly sitting astride his chest. Pinned to the grass, Heth remains completely silent as Judith gloats about successfully outsmarting him.
With a sudden surge of strength, Heth reverses their positions and pins Judith to the ground, demanding she look closely at him. Judith struggles and gasps for breath as Heth firmly presses his hand over her mouth to stop her from shouting. Heth sighs in annoyance, whispering a stern warning for her to stay quiet before they alert the entire household. Judith coughs and wheezes as Heth, sitting beside her, instructs her to breathe deeply and keep her voice down. Heth's demand to see her red eyes again makes Judith realize her protective necklace must have slipped off. Heth tries to describe the transformation he saw, while a nervous Judith quickly stammers and plays dumb. Annoyed by his insults, Judith silently fumes and contemplates using her power to erase his memories. Sudden, close proximity leaves Judith startled as Heth leans in directly to examine her face. Blushing furiously, Judith pushes his face away and orders him to immediately leave her alone. As Heth prepares to walk away, Judith reassures him she verified the mansion, clarifying that the resident is simply Mode. Heath urges Judith to leave quickly, explaining he is only letting her go tonight because of the headmistress. Standing outside the dark mansion, Judith is relieved to find Mode already asleep, glad to avoid returning to his bedroom. Heth bids Judith goodnight as they part ways outside her residence, promising to see her tomorrow. A sudden heavy sigh escapes Heth as he walks away under the night sky, deeply disturbed by Mode's mention of Kilkenny's mane. Heth wonders if Judith's boldness at the bakery stems from having a powerful backer she can confidently rely on. Walking past a glowing street lamp, Heth ponders how Judith manages to conceal her mysterious power and if it manifests subconsciously. Heth stops in his tracks, wondering if placing Judith in another crisis will force her hidden ability to manifest once more. Heth recalls the hypnotic crimson glow of Judith's eyes as she fell from the balcony, desperate to see it again. Heth stands frozen in the quiet night, utterly overwhelmed by his lingering obsession with Judith's mystical crimson gaze. Under the serene full moon, Heth mutters in frustration as he realizes he is slowly losing his mind over her. The next morning, a sleep-deprived Judith coughs inside a carriage, regretful that last night's fall has ruined her health. Mode places a gentle hand on Judith's forehead, deeply concerned by her persistent coughing as they ride together. Hearing of her weak lungs, Mode suggests she return to the estate, but Judith insists on completing her business in the city. Mode advises Judith to rest since her translation work is finished, confirming they will receive no more reports starting today. Staring down at her shoes, Judith quietly realizes she will no longer have any reason to meet with Mode at the mansion. Judith asks Mode if he is attending another party, prompting him to reveal he was invited to an extravagant, hedonistic event. Judith is left bewildered when Mode playfully characterizes his destination as a highly licentious and scandalous gathering. Mode bids Judith farewell, planning to enjoy his night out fully while she wishes him a safe and pleasant time. The scene shifts to the Grand Poison National Library on Walt Street, where patrons quietly browse through massive bookshelves. While reading in the quiet library, Judith is startled to find Heath sitting behind her, ignoring his promise to leave her alone. Heath boldly retracts his previous promise, admitting his interest was reignited after seeing her jump from the balcony with a gun. Judith insists she is a boring, rule-abiding country girl, but Heath playfully remarks that her conservative nature is already completely obvious. Judith feels verbally attacked as Heath ruthlessly teases her about her unrefined hairstyle and plain country bumpkin appearance. Defending her modest tastes, Judith claims she simply prefers simpler things, but Heath argues she just lacks exposure to new experiences. Heth points out that Judith has spent 2 weeks in vaults without enjoying any popular activities, like riding a yacht. Placing his hand on the table near hers, Heth leans in close to address her with newfound seriousness. Heth leans in directly over Judith's desk, asking if she is curious to experience the true essence of Walt's nightlife. Judith sits in her room wearing a pink sleeveless lace dress, her gaze falling upon the mysterious invitation card on her bed. Back in the library, Heth tempts Judith with the allure of North Korea, but she resolutely declines, citing her sister's strict rules. Heth is left completely exasperated when Judith childishly uses her sister's warnings as an excuse to avoid going out. Heth playfully snatches Judith's hair ribbon, urging her to stop acting like a coward and reconsider his enticing offer. Holding her ribbon triumphantly, Heth smiles and guarantees that she won't find a safer or more suitable guide to waltz. With a lingering promise of an exciting night, Heth departs after telling her he will see her at the venue. Resting on the bedsheet is the elegant invitation card, welcoming its holder to the strange and mysterious Rabbit Club. Judith asks her maid, Maisie, if she has ever heard of the elusive Rabbit Club located in North Korea. Looking over a display of luxury bags and accessories, Maisie explains that North Korea is home to many exclusive, unlicensed clubs. Smiling warmly, Maisie asks Judith to stand up so they can finish preparing her outfit for the evening. Standing before the mirror in a stunning pink lace dress, Judith self-consciously worries that her short skirt is far too revealing. The maids beam with pride as they admire Judith's elegant appearance in the beautiful pink gown. Maisie happily expresses her long-held desire to style Judith in different fashions, offering to help her shop for more modern clothes.
Encouraging Judith to enjoy herself, Maisie notes that the master strictly ordered the staff to serve her every whim without hesitation. Judith quietly reflects on Maisie's words, realizing she genuinely desires to see the brilliantly sparkling night streets of Waltz. Remembering Mode's plans, Judith wonders about the mysterious party he is attending and how much of the world she has missed. Clutching her protective orange gemstone necklace, Judith worries about making a mistake or drawing unwanted attention at the club. Judith reluctantly decides to stay behind and decline the invitation, feeling that such normal entertainment is an unaffordable luxury. Before she can put the card away, Judith's eyes widen in shock as a sudden wave of severe dizziness overcomes her. Her vision distorts and blurs as she looks down at the Rabbit Club invitation card slipping from her hand. An oppressive darkness quickly closes in as Judith's consciousness fades away completely. The golden rabbit logo on the invitation card glows with an ominous hypnotic light in the deep black void. Quiet darkness envelops the room as Judith succumbs to the mysterious, spellbinding power of the cursed invitation. A maid turns around in surprise, wondering what has happened. An empty dressing room stands quiet, devoid of any sign of Judith. Judith stands in her pink dress, holding the card in utter bewilderment. She gasps, looking around a lavish gold-curtained hallway and wondering where she is. At the estate, the director stands in the library, frantically calling to report Judith's sudden disappearance. The director's face tightens on the phone as he absorbs the troubling news. He paces around his office, demanding a precise report on how she vanished from her room. The person on the other line informs him that Mode left for an investigation in North Korea. Taking off his glasses, the director firmly rejects filing a missing persons report. Turning away with the receiver in hand, he decides to personally handle the search. A sudden disorienting ring echoes in her head as Judith tries to identify her strange surroundings. Confused by her sudden teleportation, she notices rhythmic party music echoing from down the hall. She anxiously pats down her dress, relieved to find her protective necklace and thigh holster secure. A sudden startle makes Judith jump as a ticket booth seller abruptly pops out demanding her invitation. Startled and flustered, Judith stammers in confusion as she searches for the card. She nervously hands over the card, prompting the seller to recognize her as a special guest. The old seller narrows his eyes, noting her surprisingly ordinary appearance for a special guest. Swallowing hard, Judith is instructed to follow him inside to uncover the invitation's true owner. Judith cautiously walks behind the mysterious seller as he leads her through the golden corridor. Walking past the wooden doors, the seller begins detailing the rules of the Rabbit Club. The seller lists the club's strict guidelines, warning her not to mingle with staff or expose her identity. With a heavy creak, the seller swings open the door to reveal the bustling party. Bright lights flash and lively music blast as masked performers dance on a golden stage. Talented musicians play the trumpet and cello, filling the venue with energetic jazz. Elegant masked guests dance and socialize throughout the club's lavishly decorated ballroom. Dizzy from the booming music, Judith stumbles slightly as she navigates the dense crowd. Bumping into a passerby, she quickly apologizes while trying to maintain her footing. Judith blushes furiously upon spotting couples shamelessly kissing right in front of her. She suddenly halts, her eyes widening as she spots a familiar face nearby. Through the crowd, she spots Mode wearing a black masquerade mask holding a champagne glass. Judith looks around in disbelief, wondering if Mode could actually be at this scandalous party. A sudden chill runs down her spine as a familiar red-haired man whispers directly into her ear. Fuming with anger, Judith turns and loudly berates Heth for scaring her like that. Heth smiles, teasingly pointing out her dramatic change from her usual rustic style. Judith is left flustered and speechless when Heth unexpectedly praises her elegant pink gown. Staring up at the glowing chandeliers, Judith defensively claims she didn't dress up on purpose. She points an accusing finger at Heth, demanding to know how his invitation teleported her. Heth denies having such magic, leaving Judith frantically wondering who was behind the spell. Backing away, Judith insists she wants to leave the loud and overwhelming club immediately. Judith worries that losing her protective gemstone pendant in this crowd would be a total disaster. Heth sighs at her quick temper while reaching into his coat pocket for something. He gently places a matching black masquerade mask over her face to help her blend in. Judith finds the mask annoying and tries to adjust it, prompting Heath to tell her to stay still. Heth explains that the underground club is a haven for guests desperate to conceal their identities. Heth jokingly calls her the most dramatic person there, causing Judith to shoot him an annoyed look. Heth offers his hand, promising to be her safe guide if she follows him. Judith stares at his outstretched palm, hesitating for a brief, tense moment. Swallowing her doubts, Judith takes his hand as they walk together into the glowing light. Inside an exclusive lounge, a beautiful blonde woman in a white dress sits smoking on a sofa. The woman smiles warmly, welcoming Heth back as the boss of the mysterious establishment. Caroline welcomes Judith to sit, introducing herself and asking for Judith's name, to which Judith hesitantly responds with the alias Jude. Caroline curiously asks Heth if Judith is a client, prompting him to evasively reply that it is none of her concern. Caroline confidently deduces Heth's client is Curtis, while Judith recognizes her from the stage and wonders if she belongs to the Boatwell gang. Caroline asks if she is related to Curtis, leading Judith to claim she is his cousin from Kinsley visiting Waltz for the first time. A soft hiss sounds as Caroline lights her cigarette, asking if Judith is currently staying at the Curtis Mansion in St. Hawk. Caroline silently observes Judith as she blows out a puff of smoke, noting that Judith looks nothing like Roderick Curtis. Caroline reflects on the intriguing combination of the prominent entrepreneur, the country girl, and Bowell security, sensing a major scandal brewing. Caroline questions Heth for bringing a newly arrived country girl to such an underground club. Caroline suggests milder venues for a beginner, but Heth explains he brought Judith here because he thought she would find it interesting. Heth secretly hopes that surprising Judith in an unfamiliar setting will elicit the fierce, captivating gaze he saw before. Heth lists Judith's complete lack of worldly experience as his reason for bringing her, leaving her trembling with sheer frustration. Caroline warmly embraces Judith, offering to explain the true nature of the club since Heth failed to do so. Leaning in to whisper directly into Judith's ear, Caroline mysteriously reveals that the club hosts real magicians. A sudden flash of light signals the start of the performance, and Caroline prompts Judith to watch the stage. A bright spotlight illuminates the stage as Caroline welcomes Judith to experience the strange and mysterious show. The acrobats begin their performance on the special, highly anticipated stage of the Rabbit Club. Supernatural abilities are categorized into diverse physical, elemental, and mental types, showcasing immense variety. Historically, supernaturally gifted individuals faced brutal persecution, forcing many to migrate to the southern continent to survive. Western powers later launched aggressive invasions to capture these valuable gifted individuals and seize their resource-rich lands. The struggle escalated into colonial expansion and eventually ignited a global war between rival nations 6 years ago. Countless supernatural individuals perished on the front lines, making them exceptionally rare on the Western continent. Despite the war ending, nations continued their fierce, covert race to secure the surviving supernatural individuals. Neutral nations joined the search, each adopting different strategies to manage and integrate these gifted people. Unlike the strict control in the West, the Baja Federation permitted lower-ability individuals to reintegrate into society. Released individuals were subjected to strict legal restrictions to ensure they remained under societal control. The laws forbade them from indulging in luxury and restricted any unauthorized use of their supernatural abilities. Though violations carried the death penalty, loopholes always existed for exploiting these restricted abilities. Teleportation invitations brought elite clients and world-renowned special guests to this secret magical jazz party. 6 years ago, the mysterious Rabbit Club opened its doors in the very heart of Waltz. Caroline boasts about designing the teleportation invitations for the club, casually mentioning the availability of high-quality cannabis. Caroline explains that the club's main attraction is the show, introducing the Taylor sisters' opening act. A sudden snip echoes as the performer slices through her own supporting rope, eliciting shocked gasps. Loud cheers and clapping erupt as the performer defies gravity, floating gracefully above the amazed audience. Caroline points out another performer, identifying her as a skilled aquamancer visiting from Trizeta. To the guest's immense surprise, the red wine begins floating gracefully out of his glass. The aquamancer demonstrates her remarkable supernatural power by effortlessly manipulating the floating water in midair. Cheers and clapping echo through the venue as the acrobats dance elegantly amidst the swirling streams. Judith asks if such open displays are safe, and Caroline explains clever staging hides their low-ranking status. Caroline leans in close once again, whispering a cautionary tease about the club's guests. Tense heartbeat sounds as Caroline notes that high-profile users hide their true identities to evade authorities. Caroline giggles and reassures Judith, explaining that international guests and elite playboys frequent the club. Judith looks on in deep apprehension, questioning Heth's motives for bringing her here. She glares toward Heth, silently wondering what secrets or intentions he is keeping hidden. Judith gets annoyed by Heth's casual dismissiveness, feeling entirely unsafe despite his claims. Judith resolves to find the perfect moment to slip away from the noisy venue. She recalls spotting a familiar blonde man in the crowd earlier, heightening her curiosity. A gentle sparkle sounds as Judith imagines Mode teasingly scolding her for staying out past bedtime. Rhythmic footsteps clack as Judith decides it is best to avoid searching for Mode altogether. The sharp clack of a final step announces an arrival, drawing Judith and Caroline's immediate attention. A striking silver-haired woman in an elegant black gown stands before them. Caroline greets Silly, prompting Judith to realize her identity, while Silly warmly greets Caroline and Ardmore. Caroline inquires about Siley's search in Waltz, but Siley admits that her day's efforts were entirely wasted. Silly expresses her deep frustration over not knowing the identity of the person who took her item. Heth sits back and casually remarks that things would end quickly if people would just cooperate. Heth questions Ardmore on whether his response today remains the same as his previous stance. Silly demands 5 times the previous price, but Heth accuses her of being a highway robber. With a sharp snap of her fingers, Silly casually declares that the deal is completely off. Speaking in Purda, Ardmore instructs Siley to monitor the waiting area behind the stage without exceptions. Judith clenches her dress in distress, realizing they are actively searching for a supernatural ability user. Judith reviews surveillance records of Silly's recent movements, piecing together the mysterious search in Waltz. Judith starts in sudden shock as she realizes they are searching for the person sitting right beside them. Judith gasps softly under Siley's silent, piercing gaze, hoping she did not give herself away. Caroline claps her hands to break the heavy tension, inviting everyone to lighten the mood with a drink. Caroline calls upon Mimi, who steps forward to prepare a bottle of champagne for the guests. The festive pop, the waiter pours the bubbly champagne into glasses floating in midair. The guests look on in amazement as the champagne glasses float gracefully through the lounge toward them. Raising his glass high, Heth toasts to a midsummer night's dream with their gathered comrades. The lively guests clink their champagne glasses together with a cheerful ringing toast. Amidst the loud cheers of the crowd, a glass of champagne is quietly slid toward Judith. Silly holds out her glass and offers a warm toast to the silent, masked Judith. Smiling behind her mask, Judith returns the toast, wishing Silly success in her search. Silly smiles softly, seemingly touched by Judith's unexpected but sincere well wishes. As their glasses clink together, Siley gently appreciates the sweet and polite gesture. Before Judith can take a sip, a sudden hand snatches her glass away, leaving her startled. Judith turns around in complete bewilderment, trying to identify the rude person who stole her drink. The bold blonde man leans back beside Judith, casually gulping down her glass of champagne. A giant question mark hangs in the air as Judith stares at him in sheer disbelief. The greedy gulping sound continues as the stolen champagne glass is quickly drained. Staring at his golden hair and deep blue eyes, Judith instantly recognizes Mr. Ewart under his mask. Caroline chides Mr. Rex for snatching a lady's drink, but he dismissively blames the stuffy air. Carolyn politely hands Judith a fresh glass of champagne to make up for the stolen drink. As Judith reaches for the new glass, a hand sweeps in once more to intercept it. Mr. Rex snatches the fresh drink, stubborn in his claim that the room's air is too stuffy. Caroline coughs lightly and complains about the smoke, suggesting the owner install better ventilation. Feeling her breathing ease, Judith wonders if Mr. Rex's actions were meant to protect her. From across the lounge, Heth silently observes the interaction with a cold, calculating gaze. Caroline welcomes the group and introduces the guest as Mr. Rex, who briefly visited the previous night. Caroline formally introduces Mr. Rex to Heth, the club owner, and the silver-haired guest, Siley. Mr. Rex expresses surprise at meeting someone from Perta, and Siley notes that fate brought them together. Siley maintains a cool and calculated profile, carefully sizing up the mysterious Mr. Rex. Judith notes with a mixture of awe and caution how smoothly Mr. Rex slid in beside her. Silly questions their relationship, prompting Mr. Rex to boldly suggest he plans to get much closer soon. Silly teasingly remarks on Mr. Rex's apparent interest in Judith, wondering what they should do. Silly muses about Judith already belonging to someone, adding to the dramatic tension in the room. Heth watches them closely, intrigued and slightly annoyed by the rumor of Judith's secret connection. Mr. Rex notes Judith doesn't seem married, prompting her to defensively deny any romantic connection. Silly boldly suggests love is meant to be conquered, provoking a scandalized internal reaction from Judith. Caroline playfully flirts with Judith by offering herself, leaving the young girl completely overwhelmed. Annoyed by the endless banter, Judith firmly declares that she does not belong to anyone. Silly teases Judith about her suitors while Mr. Rex complains about his comparison to a brute. Silly turns her gaze to Judith, asking to confirm her name and suggesting she would prefer a more refined conversation. Silly inquires if Judith is a native of Waltz and asks where she is staying, causing the nearby men to react. Intervening smoothly, Mr. Rex gently squeezes Judith's hand while reminding Silly that prying into guest backgrounds is strictly forbidden. Judith looks down at her hand, realizing that despite his secrets, Mr. Rex is actively trying to protect her. Judith remains determined to find a way to handle this dangerous situation completely on her own. As Heth suggests avoiding awkward questions, Judith chimes in to state that she is currently staying in Byron. Judith lies to the group, explaining that she has only come to visit a relative for the summer. Putting on a bashful act, Judith giggles and claims that a sophisticated place like Waltz does not suit her. A stunned silence falls over the group as Judith internally hopes her country girl act was convincing enough. Silly maintains her cool composure and gently clarifies that she did not mean any offense by her questioning. Silly notes that Baron is quite a tough journey, but Judith quickly reassures her that she is fine. Judith continues her fabricated story, explaining that she did not make the long trip to Waltz completely alone. A sudden, muffled pfft escapes Mr. Rex as Judith boldly claims she traveled here with her sister. Heth groans in annoyance at the recycled sister excuse, prompting an irritated Judith to tell him to shut up. Faking a light, polite cough, Judith announces that she needs to head out to search for her missing sister. Judith asks for the way to the exit, prompting Heth to stand up and offer to escort her. Judith insists she can go alone to avoid trouble, making Heth dryly question when she became so thoughtful. Glaring right back at him, Judith retorts by questioning when Heth ever started worrying about her. Heth grumbles that she is always twisting his words, but Judith shoots back a sharp reply as she departs. A sharp rhythmic click-clack of heels echoes as Judith walks past the mysterious gray-haired man. Gray-haired man stops in his tracks as Judith approaches him to politely ask for a quick favor. Judith asks if he can accompany her, mentioning she heard he is a frequent visitor to the club. The man turns to Siley to ask for permission, and Siley quietly grants her approval for him to go. Silly quietly instructs her subordinate to investigate the suspicious atmosphere, but cautions him not to push too hard. Heth watches their departure with his golden eyes narrowed in deep, silent suspicion. Heth calls out to Judith, warning her that she'll regret heading in that particular direction. Judith scoffs at Heth's sudden warning before ignoring him entirely and asking her guide to show her the way. Caroline kindly chimes in, directing Judith to use the side door to reach the second-floor balcony. Waving with a polite smile, Judith bids everyone a lovely evening as she makes her quiet exit. Rhythmic footsteps sound as Judith walks alongside her guide, silently relieved that she brought her hidden gun along. Judith looks incredibly serious, wondering if Mr. Ewart was already aware that Siley was searching for her. Knowing there must be a reason Heth brought her here, Judith resolves to move as quickly as possible. The gray-haired man politely guides Judith down the elegant, golden-trimmed corridors of the club. Judith gently removes her mask and asks the mysterious guide if he would mind sharing his name. A sudden heavy thud echoes as the gray-haired man turns back with his eyes glowing a menacing red. A soft clatter sounds as Judith's black masquerade mask slips from her fingers and drops to the floor. A heavy boom resonates as Judith stands entirely frozen, her eyes wide and glowing a lifeless bright crimson. An elderly woman in a feathered hat peeks through the red curtains in confusion as heavy footsteps approach. With a sudden loud crash, a squad of armed agents in dark coats and hats bursts aggressively into the room. The lead agent barks orders to tear the establishment apart, prompting a chorus of swift affirmative shouts as they search. The startled elderly woman demands to know who they are, and the lead agent demands to see the owner. The old woman looks on in sheer shock and panic as the aggressive raid unfolds before her eyes. Flashing his official badge, the agent announces they're from Baja Federal Intelligence and demands her immediate cooperation. A heavy, suffocating silence descends over the main lounge area where the rest of the VIP guests remain. Heath lets out a heavy sigh while Silly silently notes Judith was the woman Heath kept staring at. Resolving to take Judith in for questioning, Siley signals her subordinate, who instantly recognizes the princess's hand sign. Rhythmic footsteps sound as Heth steps forward to firmly remind Siley that this is his club. His amber eyes burning with fury, Heth menacingly demands that she deal with the intruding pests immediately. Silly coolly responds that she would prefer to avoid a scene, reminding him of his important VIP guests. Silly warns that upsetting the VIPs would be unwise, prompting an irritated scoff from Heth as he clenches his fist. Heth draws his gun with a click, confidently questioning when he ever cared about rules. Siley warns him of the consequences, but Heth threatens her with a bullet as he cocks his weapon. Surrounded by armed guards, Heth smugly notes that not everyone present is a fool. Amidst the tension, a waiter is instructed to fetch ice, only to reveal they are completely out. Both Heth and Siley are temporarily caught off guard as they mentally process the bizarre interruption. The blonde masked man casually drinks his wine, leaving Heth to wonder about his true identity. With a quiet tap, the blonde man places his glass down, letting a soft sigh escape him. Rex mockingly questions if the referee is making them nervous, noting Heth's sudden loss of spirit. Heth clenches his fist in silent rage, deeply irritated by the man's mocking, refined accent. Glaring intensely, Heth directly accuses the blonde masked man of being an island's noble. Caroline quickly decides to leave after hearing that Elon's nobles are strictly banned from the club. Heath wonders if Judith lied to protect the nobles or if she was being deceived herself. Shrugging casually, Rex complains about the poor service despite the club's high reputation. Rex nonchalantly walks away from the tense confrontation, leaving a frustrated Heth staring after him. With a click, an alarm system begins to beep loudly, alerting the nearby security guards. Judith interrogates her brainwashed guide, who slowly mentions the secret terminology of Kilgenny's mine. His eyes glowing a dull red, the subordinate stammeringly confirms that Siley is the first princess of Perta. The brainwashed subordinate speaks fluently, detailing the testimonies and records from the fall of the royal castle. Judith tries to piece together the fragmented clues, frustratingly realizing she lacks the proper language skills. Resolving that the effort was not in vain, Judith commands her dazed companion to stand up. Judith casts her hypnotic magic, instructing him to forget their conversation and return to the princess's side. She directs the brainwashed subordinate to drop his weapons and return to his post as if nothing happened. Judith sighs in relief, knowing that the effects of her brainwashing magic will eventually wear off in a week. Though her actions might seem suspicious later, Judith prioritizes escaping from the club as quickly as possible. Recalling Rex's cryptic warnings about letters, Judith finds herself completely bewildered by his complex personality. She mentally complains about Rex's highly unpredictable behavior, noting how he fluctuates between worry and sulking. Judith suddenly stops in her tracks as she hears an echoing commotion from down the hallway. A sudden, thunderous boom rings out, causing Judith's eyes to widen in sheer panic and shock.
With a swift click, Judith nervously readies her revolver, wondering what is happening in the club. Hearing the footsteps getting louder, Judith anxiously wonders if she is actively being hunted by pursuers. With rapid footsteps sounding, Judith rushes down the dimly lit corridor, determined to escape the immediate danger. A soft creak echoes as she pushes open the heavy double doors leading to the balcony. Stepping outside, Judith spots a blonde-haired man standing quietly on the terrace under the night sky. Steady footsteps click against the cold stone floor as she slowly approaches the mysterious figure. Hiding behind the heavy curtains, Judith holds her gun tightly as the footsteps draw closer to her. Her heart beats rapidly as she senses the mysterious figure getting closer to her hiding spot. A polished brown shoe steps onto the moonlit balcony with a soft creaking sound. With a sharp click, Judith prepares to aim her weapon at the approaching intruder. Judith steps out from the shadows, aiming her revolver directly at the masked Rex, ordering him not to move. Rex remains perfectly calm, staring back at her through his black masquerade mask. Looking at her defensive stance, Rex curiously asks her who taught her how to hold a gun. Judith firmly refuses to change the subject, demanding that he first remove his mask. With a quiet rustle, Rex complies with her demand, agreeing to show her his face. Removing his black mask, Rex reveals his handsome face and piercing light blue eyes. Judith stares at him in stunned silence, temporarily captivated by his striking and familiar appearance. Regaining her composure, Judith insists that he must answer her remaining questions with absolute honesty. Judith asks about the princess's identity, and Rex reveals she is Celestia Harvest, currently monitored by Baha. Judith points her gun, demanding to know if he is chasing the princess or seeking whatever she is after. Rex smiles faintly, cryptically stating that her first assumption is correct, while the second is ambiguous. Under the starry night, Rex explains his desire to intercept whatever the Purta woman is searching for. Clenching her hand on her weapon, Judith listens as Rex asks her to state his true identity. Rex questions if the Judith he knew for 2 weeks is different from the woman before him now. Confused, Judith admits she does not understand his question before confirming her identity. Judith turns the question back on him, demanding to know if he knows her identity. Keeping her weapon aimed directly at him, Judith firmly repeats her question about her own identity. A heavy, tense silence falls over the balcony as Rex stares at her without a word. Rex takes a step forward, flatly denying any knowledge and stating his intention to keep it that way. Rex steps closer, declaring he would never admit knowing her true identity to anyone, including her. Judith asks if her sponsor told him, but Rex responds that Roger is far too cautious to speak. Rex reveals he saw the medical report of the child smuggled out of islands, leaving Judith shocked. Judith internally realizes that her private records and unique abilities were likely detailed in that file. Judith asks why he covers for her, and Rex explains it is because Roger protected her. Rex adds that she reminds him of his younger sister, while Judith remains on guard. Judith's heart suddenly leaps as she is struck by a wave of intense, unexpected familiarity. A fleeting memory of a braided girl flashes in her mind, amplifying her confusion. Rex gently places his hand over her fingers on the gun to offer reassurance. Under the soft moonlight, Rex stands remarkably close, calmly holding her trembling hand on the weapon. Judith mentally admits to herself that she never actually had any intention of shooting him. Judith wonders why he looks at her as if he actually wants her to shoot him. Staring into his eyes, she senses that he has been waiting for this exact moment. With a quiet click, the tension begins to ease as she slowly lowers the weapon's hammer. Judith quietly calls him terrible, her defenses finally breaking down under his intense gaze. Rex offers a soft smile as he gently tells her that she is far too soft-hearted. Rex asserts that he would have fired immediately the moment doubt entered his mind. Judith tearfully calls him reckless, but Rex reminds her that a double-action trigger prevents accidental firing. Embracing her, Rex notes her kindness is a weakness while dismissing her claim that he is joking. Despite her lingering worries, Judith lets her tears fall as she leans into his unexpected warmth. Judith feels a deep sense of relief that Rex was the one who pursued her. She imagines how disastrous it would have been if Hethro the subordinate had caught her. Rex teases her about her dramatic older sister act, prompting an annoyed retort from Judith. Judith insists she was dragged here by an invitation, but Rex notes she dressed exceptionally well. Flustered, Judith tells him to stop teasing her, refusing to explain her choice of dress. Judith asks if Ewart is an alias, and Rex explains it is his awkward-saving middle name. Judith notices the commotion inside, but Rex assures her that the enforcement squad has arrived. Judith is stunned to silence when Rex casually admits that he reported the club himself. Judith realizes he planned the raid beforehand, questioning his massive connections to mobilize the police. Rex playfully repeats his claim of being just a rich, meddlesome, and unemployed wanderer. Rex directs Judith toward the back door, where a trusted friend waits to escort her home. Judith walks cautiously down the dark corridor, keeping her guard up as she exits. Hearing a sudden rustle nearby, Judith stops in her tracks to investigate the strange sound. An uneasy sensation washes over her as she peers closely into the dim hallway.
Peering around the golden archway, she spots a shadowy couple embracing in the hallway corner. Two patrons are silhouetted in a passionate kiss, completely oblivious to her sudden intrusion.
Stunned by the intimate sight, Judith unleashes a dramatic, silent scream of pure embarrassment.
Judith fumes in embarrassment, thinking that public displays of affection are entirely too scandalous. Rex notices her stiff posture and asks if she saw a ghost, but she demurs. Judith trembles awkwardly as Rex wonders why she is suddenly behaving so strangely.
Rex comments on the club's decadent reputation, while Judith huddles behind him in mortification. Judith blushes intensely, mortified to be stuck in such a scandalous setting with Rex.
Judith suddenly snaps out of her embarrassment as she detects something unexpected ahead. Under the warm lights, Rex tenderly cups Judith's face as she stares at him in surprise. Rex gently tells Judith that she is far too innocent to witness such scandalous sights.
Judith, blushing intensely, protests his sudden closeness while her face turns completely bright red.
Rex asks if she is okay, and Judith pulls her hand away, declaring that she is definitely not okay.
Judith mentally notes that she could have easily ignored the scandalous scene on her own.
Rex silently contemplates that perhaps it is perfectly fine to remain in this intimate position. Judith wonders if Rex is genuinely unfazed by hearing such intimate sounds right next to them. She questions if he feels any embarrassment, considering she is standing right beside him. She muses that Rex has never seemed like the type to feel any sort of shame. Judith internally wonders if Rex is simply accustomed to such scandalous situations.
With a soft rustle, Rex's hand begins to move gently along her face.
Judith gazes at his handsome face, wondering how many secrets he still keeps hidden from her.
Rex raises his hand to his lips in a slow, thoughtful gesture. Staring forward with his light blue eyes, Rex maintains a calm and mysterious expression. Looking down thoughtfully, Judith's internal curiosity about Rex's hidden secrets deepens further. Rex's large hand rests gently against Judith's cheek as she stays perfectly still. A sudden soft kissing sound echoes nearby, breaking the quiet atmosphere of the hallway.
Rex quickly turns his head with a startle as the scandalous noises continue nearby.
Rex mutters that listening to the couple is a trial, suggesting they move along. Panicking internally, Judith blushes deeply, questioning what she was about to touch on Rex's face. Squeezing her eyes shut, Judith scolds herself for her sudden, highly embarrassing thoughts. Rex agrees with her unspoken urge to leave, suggesting they should finally walk away. Rex urges Judith to follow him as they pass the embarrassing scene in the corridor. Judith questions if the police are supposed to regulate such scandalous public behavior. Judith fumes in outrage about the lack of decorum while Rex offers a small chuckle. Rex cynically remarks on human nature, prompting a sarcastic retort from a highly annoyed Judith. Rex falls completely silent, staring back at her with a calm and unreadable expression. His light blue eyes narrow slightly as a shadow falls across his handsome face. Judith remembers the warm sensation of his hand cupping her cheek so tenderly. The delicate lace details of her pink dress shimmer softly under the light. The memory of him holding her face leaves Judith completely dazed and overwhelmed. Rex stands quietly under the high columns, his thoughts completely hidden from view. An announcement echoes outside the grand building stating that a brief inspection will begin. A security guard questions them, but Rex commands him to let Judith pass immediately. The guard is shocked to address Rex as Duke, but Rex casually dismisses the formalities. Rex instructs that Judith be transported safely as Roger's guest, and the guard complies. Judith asks if he will join her, but Rex declines, citing cleanup duties first. Rex notes that she snuck out of the mansion, catching Judith completely off guard. Rex kindly advises her to head home quickly before a missing person report is filed. With a loud roar of the engine, the car speeds away into the night. Leaning back in the car seat, Judith lets out a tired and heavy sigh. Judith realizes she must urgently confirm exactly how much Roger knows about her. She questions why Roger brought her to an underground club filled with disguised patrons. Caroline's warning about the presence of magicians and illegal ability users echoes in Judith's mind. Judith remains uncertain if Rex has already discovered her deepest and most dangerous secrets. Judith is confident that Rex will soon show his true colors without her searching. Closing her eyes, Judith rests her head back as the car continues its journey. The black car drives swiftly through the quiet city streets under the starry night. An approaching subordinate respectfully addresses Rex by his noble title of Grace as he waits. Rex asks if the search is complete, and the man confirms they identified 17 infiltrators. Rex receives a report identifying their primary suspect as a young man named Heath Ardmore, currently being escorted to the Intelligence Bureau. The name of Heath Ardmore lingers heavily in Rex's thoughts as he silently considers the suspect's potential involvement. A fleeting memory of a tightly held scarred wrist flashes, highlighting a deeply protective past connection. Rex mutters an angry curse under his breath, startling his subordinate before calmly ordering him to continue his report. Rex learns of an unexpected immediate departure that would take at least 10 hours even at top speed. Rex acknowledges that the target's arrival will ease his burden, thanking the officer for his cooperation.
Rex stands tall in his sleek black suit as a voice calls out, addressing him by his noble title. Anticipating a tense confrontation with Roger in the interrogation room, Rex plans to continue his work at the bureau. Rex's light blue eyes fill with quiet resolve as he prepares for the upcoming interrogation. Under the starry night sky, the clock tower marks 2 a.m. as Rex waits for his friend's arrival. Rex stares ahead in deep thought, his mind focused entirely on the impending investigation during his long drive. With a loud, powerful rumble, the black car speeds down the quiet, tree-lined city streets. The gray-haired driver looks back respectfully to confirm his director's instructions as they drive. The driver inquires about the royal family stay approval, which the deputy director expects to take about a month. The deputy director notes a high risk of entry denial due to the unofficial nature of the visit. A sharp tap echoes as the deputy director warns that illegal activities will guarantee their entry denial. The driver confirms that college semesters indeed begin in September as they discuss their strategic timeline. Removing his glasses, the deputy director states they must keep the princess detained for several more months. With another sharp tap, he outlines their plan to frame the princess as an international troublemaker. The deputy director calmly suggests fabricating the necessary evidence to ensure her prolonged detention. At the BSIA headquarters, a tense negotiation begins as client information is strictly refused for sale. Heth defiantly dares his superior to suspend his license, threatening to expose all their hidden secrets. Heth coldly threatens to use scandalous information about the deputy director's daughter to cover his financial losses. Panicked, the deputy director pleads for mercy as Heth threatens to leak his daughter's drug secrets. Grabbing his coat, Heth smugly reminds the director that many powerful elites frequent his club. Heth exits the room, instructing the director to prepare an offer he can actually afford. Heth walks confidently down the elegant corridor, satisfied with the leverage he holds over his client. A dark, intense gaze crosses Heth's face as he turns his thoughts toward his next target. Roger makes a grand entrance, muttering a cynical remark about main characters always arriving last. Steady, rhythmic footsteps echo through the hallway as the two powerful brokers cross paths. Heth freezes in his tracks as Roger casually mentions the chaotic raid at the club last night. Roger confronts Heth about involving his ward, but Heth smugly defends his actions as contractually permissible. With a sly smirk, Heth confesses his sudden, intense fascination with Roger's ward. Roger warns that a rare, unregistered mental-type psychic will always attract dangerous predators. Flashbacks of masked elites serve as a reminder of the powerful, hidden forces watching her. Heth sharply questions if Roger is scheming behind his back with their secret backer. Roger demands professional boundaries, but Heth mockingly points out Roger's highly personal bodyguard request. Heth teases Roger about carrying her, finding his claims of strict business highly amusing. Roger calmly counters, demanding to know what exactly made his protective request so personal. Heth's playful smirk fades, replaced by a sudden flash of irritation at Roger's defiance. A collective disappointment hangs in the quiet corridor as their brief alliance turns cold. Roger firmly warns Heth to prevent any further dangerous incidents in the future. With a dismissive smirk, Heth reluctantly agrees to play by the rules for now. The two men seal their tense and fragile truce with a firm, silent handshake. Outside the towering headquarters, Heth's subordinate eagerly awaits to ask if his business is complete. Lighting a cigarette, Heth strictly orders his subordinate to withhold all details about the princess. Heth realizes the princess's file is highly valuable leverage to trade for classified intelligence. Memory surfaces of an order to change the client and secure the princess immediately. Heth orders the complete destruction of her file, determined to keep his rivals in the dark. A dark, lingering doubt echoes in the shadows, questioning if his feelings are truly dead. Roger questions how his protective request could possibly be interpreted as a personal favor. He reflects on Judith's tragic destiny, born with dangerous supernatural abilities in a world of evil. Judith gazes silently out the car window, contemplating a future filled with impossible, dark choices. Heth Ardmore recalls his history, realizing 5 years have passed since he last worked with Roger. Heth stands beneath the night sky, deciding it is finally time to part ways for good. Roger walks down the elegant hallway, accompanied by his faithful older assistant. The assistant suggests that they immediately find someone fluent in the Perta language. Roger explains how the worried king ordered secret letters to keep tabs on his daughter. Roger describes how the princess details her ambitious plans for international relations within her letters. The assistant agrees to the plan to manipulate the letters and frame the princess for rebellion. Grayson expresses deep worry over diplomatic fallout, but Roger quickly dismisses his fears. Roger remains calm and silent in the back seat, unfazed by his assistant's anxieties. Grayson walks in disbelief at how casually his boss handles schemes of global conflict. Roger views the world coldly, comparing human lives to interchangeable parts in a massive machine. Grayson excuses himself to wait outside, feeling a growing distance from his longtime friend.
The blonde-haired man offers a pleasant farewell as Roger enters the private room. Roger questions why his guest didn't return to the mansion, but the blonde man declines. Roger comments on the blonde man's persistent and unpredictable, fickle nature. The blonde guest playfully teases Roger about the supposed prestige of being his college classmate. Ignoring the invitation to eat, Roger sharply demands to know what was said to Judith. They recall how Roger's identity was carefully packaged with technically true but highly misleading half-truths. Roger complains about the unnecessary disclosure, but the blonde man defends answering her direct question. Roger warns that Judith might trace his true identity, which the blonde man hopes to avoid. The blonde man shifts the topic, announcing his scheduled departure back to Texas in 2 weeks. The blonde man asks Roger if he intends to continue working with Balto's boss. Roger reveals he is aware of his guest's late-night infiltration of St. Hawk. Roger advises seeking a more respectable partner, but the blonde man prioritizes reliable results. Roger pointedly asks if he still accepts his partner despite his rudeness toward Judith. Roger trails off as he begins to question the relevance of the partner's attitude. Roger asks if the partner's personal behavior actually impacts their ultimate main priority. The blonde man yields with a charming smile, admitting he is overstepping his bounds. The blonde man relinquishes control, leaving Judith's handling entirely up to Roger. Roger clasps his hands tightly, quietly repeating the word protege to himself. Roger smiles softly, realizing he genuinely likes the ring of that protective title. The blonde man observes Roger's reaction with curiosity, wondering what prompted his sudden amusement. Roger suddenly asks if Judith was beautiful, catching the blonde man completely off guard. Roger clarifies he meant Krauser, leaving the blonde man speechless at his playful misdirection. Roger silently relishes the unspoken tension, knowing how deeply his protective nature has been exposed. The blonde man takes the bait and asks Roger exactly how beautiful Judith is. Roger tells the director to judge Judith's beauty for himself upon their meeting. In a childhood memory, a young Judith worries about a stolen item, but her blonde friend reassures her. The blonde girl explains that the stolen object was actually Judith's mother's keepsake. Child Judith happily exclaims that wearing the heirloom completely soothes her burning eyes. But the blonde girl smiles softly, glad to see her friend finally out of pain. The older blonde girl gently cups young Judith's face, comforting her with deep warmth. She promises Judith that as long as she wears the keepsake, she can live normally. The blonde girl solemnly warns young Judith never to take the precious keepsake off. Adult Judith rests peacefully in her grand bed, temporarily safe in her dreams. A soft, sleepy sigh escapes Judith's lips as she begins to wake up. Judith sits up slowly under the warm morning light, her childhood dream lingering in her mind. Judith wakes up and notices the morning sun is already high in the sky. Judith sighs while holding a glass, deeply concerned that Mr. Ewart has not yet returned. Judith looks out the glass door, noting that Mr. Lizelot is also nowhere to be found. Judith reacts with intense anger, cursing Heth Admore for forcing her into a chaotic club tour under the guise of having fun. Judith hesitates in quiet contemplation, wondering if she should attempt to contact Mr. Curtis for help. Reassuring herself, Judith heads toward the study to use the phone, despite feeling guilty about interrupting her busy patron. Judith peers cautiously through a doorway, her eyes widening in sudden shock at what lies ahead. Judith cautiously steps out of the grand double doors of the mansion, looking around with confusion. Looking out into the courtyard, Judith spots a man in a beige suit standing near a car. Judith gasps in disbelief as the man in glasses turns around, her heart racing as she recognizes him. The light brown-haired man stands beside the fountain, quietly returning Judith's stunned gaze in the garden. Approaching with steady steps, Roger warmly welcomes her, saying they have finally met as she gasps. Roger extends his hand with a warm smile, addressing her as his dear protege while her heart pounds. Judith trembles with intense nervousness as she looks down at his offered hand, completely overwhelmed. With a sudden nervous motion, Judith eagerly reaches forward and tightly grasps his offered hand. Roger gazes down at her with a soft expression, expressing his sincere happiness at their meeting. Flushed with emotion, Judith tearfully confesses that she has sincerely been wanting to meet Mr. Curtis. A footstep sounds as Judith notices Mr. Ewart's return, expressing her relief that he arrived safely. Mr. Ewart asks if she was worried, and Judith admits she feared something had happened since he was gone past noon. Mr. Ewart explains that everything was settled smoothly because their patron flew all the way here for her, leaving Judith bewildered. Roger tells Ewart his comment was unnecessary, but Ewart claims he is helping them grow closer as Judith realizes Roger came just for her. Mr. Ewart smiles cheerfully and waves them forward, politely inviting Judith and Roger to head inside. Roger gently suggests they go inside, and Judith turns her attention back to her patron. Bathed in the warm morning light, Roger looks back at Judith with a serene, handsome smile. Judith softly complies as her heart races with excitement, looking up at her esteemed patron. She gazes at the grand estate, feeling as if she's being welcomed all over again. Inside the mansion, the staff bows respectfully as a maid welcomes the master back home. Roger asks if there is anything to report.
and the maid confirms all was peaceful except for last night, causing Judith to blush in embarrassment. Roger calmly instructs the household staff to dismiss themselves and return to their respective posts. Roger requests that Macy bring 2 cups of coffee to his study for their meeting. Judith politely reminds Roger that she mentioned in her letters her dislike of coffee. The maid notes that Judith often asks for coffee, but Roger remembers her letters and orders tea instead, touching Judith deeply. Roger politely opens the study door with a smile, inviting Miss Judith to step inside. Roger welcomes Judith into the stunning, beautifully decorated room at the heart of the Curtis estate. Judith questions what he means by the heart, and Roger explains it as his most private space, reserved only for highly regarded guests. Roger notes it is his only truly personal space and connects to his bedroom, making Judith feel as if she has intruded. Roger calmly wonders if perhaps his father was the only other person allowed inside. Roger explains that Ethan toured the room during university but quickly lost interest, relieving Judith's worry that she was the very first guest. Roger politely asks if she has eaten lunch, and Judith confirms she ate 2 hours ago. Roger mentions eating with Ethan, expressing gladness that he and Judith did not miss each other. Roger gently points out that calling him Mr. Curtis has suddenly started to sound too formal. Flushed with embarrassment, Judith explains that addressing him as Mr. Ans feels odd because she imagined her patron as an old gentleman like Santa Claus. Roger smiles warmly, suggesting that she simply address him by his first name instead. When Judith asks if it is truly okay, Roger reassures her to speak comfortably since she is his only long-standing ward. Judith hesitates, reflecting on how strange it feels to be asked to use his first name on their very first meeting. Under Roger's steady and quiet gaze, Judith shyly tests out the name Roderick in a whisper. When she hesitantly tries calling him Roger, he smiles and requests that she speak to him without using any formal titles. Judith laughs nervously, admitting that casually addressing someone so famous might lead to trouble and will take some getting used to. Roger gazes intensely at Judith through his glasses, his green eyes fixed on her face. Roger suddenly asks if she is wearing the necklace right now, and Judith confirms she is. Roger expresses his care for Judith, explaining his desire to see her true self. Roger admits he has always wondered about the real face behind her legendary identity. Standing close to Judith, Roger asks her to show him her face without the necklace. Judith is utterly stunned, never expecting her mysterious sponsor to make such a request. Judith realizes her sponsor is the only one who knows all her forgotten secrets. Clutching her throat, Judith remembers him as the savior who truly rescued her. Making up her mind, Judith softly agrees to reveal her true appearance to him. With trembling fingers, Judith reaches behind her neck to undo her precious keepsake's clasp. Closing her eyes nervously, Judith prepares herself to unfasten the protective necklace. Roger stands by quietly as Judith carefully unclasps the heirloom shielding her true self. The bright orange gemstone of the necklace swings gently as it is removed. Holding the necklace, Judith stands before Roger, awaiting his reaction with deep anxiety. Fears plague Judith's mind about losing control of her powers and influencing him. Keeping her eyes tightly shut, Judith hesitantly offers the removed artifact to Roger. Roger steps closer, gently cradling Judith's face as she remains tense and closed-eyed. Roger keeps his hand gently on her cheek, reassuring her in silent comfort. Taking a deep breath, Judith slowly begins to relax under his gentle touch. Judith slowly opens her eye, revealing the brilliant glowing crimson hidden beneath her seal. For the first time, Judith looks up at Roger with her striking red eyes. Roger gazes back at her in awe, completely captivated by her true, unfiltered gaze. Roger recalls the cruel labels others placed on her unique, crimson-colored eyes. Feeling suddenly self-conscious, a flustered Judith frantically asks for her protective necklace back. Clinging tightly to her dress, Judith worries about the consequences of exposing her eyes further. Judith explains that keeping her eyes uncovered is dangerous for both of them. Roger gently questions if making eye contact with her is truly so hazardous. Looking away, Judith explains that her gaze naturally causes deep discomfort in others. Roger listens quietly as Judith admits her powers can activate completely without her realizing. Judith confesses that she must hide her face to safely exist in public. Clutching her hands, Judith warns that her uncovered gaze carries a lingering danger. Judith tries to downplay the threat, reassuring him that no immediate tragedy will happen. Roger disarms her fears, softly complimenting her beautiful appearance and taking her by surprise. Roger smiles, teasing that her beauty exceeds his imagination and justifies keeping her hidden. Roger playfully jokes that he must protect his lovely ward from potential kidnappers. A sudden, polite knock on the door interrupts their intimate and quiet conversation. The two pull back slightly as the door opens, restoring a sense of formality. A maid enters the study, carrying a tray with a freshly prepared beverage. Maisie serves the lemonade, and Roger instructs her to leave them to their privacy. Once alone, Roger thanks Judith for having the courage to show him her eyes. Judith insists she trusts him completely, prompting Roger to question if she is overly trusting. Judith realizes there are still many unanswered questions lingering between them about their past. Sitting together, Roger offers to clear up any doubts she has been harboring. Judith takes a sip of lemonade, preparing to ask her most pressing question. Before asking how he knows her secrets, Judith stops to rephrase her thoughts. Looking at her patron, Judith decides to first express her profound, long-overdue gratitude. Judith happily admits that his distant but constant letters were her ultimate source of comfort. Judith sincerely thanks Roger for reaching out and always listening to her lonely stories. Roger nods with a gentle, satisfied smile, deeply touched by his ward's heartfelt gratitude. Basking in the warm moment, Judith smiles serenely, feeling a profound sense of peace. Roger begins his explanation, tracing the origin of their connection back 5 years ago. Roger recalls a spring business trip to the Western continent involving military aircraft engines. Roger recounts hearing a rumor at a Western Front field hospital 5 years ago. The rumor detailed a daring prisoner who was shot during an escape attempt. Roger notes that hospital personnel received orders to save the prisoner's life. Intrigued by rumors of an ability user, Roger investigated the prisoner's Kilgeni roots. A search through the hospital records quickly confirmed the rumors about her identity. Judith anxiously asks if he possesses more information about her condition back then. Judith recalls suffering from dissociative amnesia after collapsing during her search for her sister. She tightly clasps her hands, deducing that her sister's death caused the trauma. Determined, Judith expresses her desperate desire to regain memories of Lieselot's final moments. Roger gently points out that he never actually met her directly back then. Learning about her unstable state and heavy sedation, Judith realizes she was not unconscious. Roger admits he did not pay attention to the details of her escape attempt. Roger honestly admits his initial interest in her was due to her special ability. Roger explains that her rare mental-type ability would have made her a research subject. Roger confesses that his decision to rescue her was ultimately just an impulsive choice. Judith listens quietly to his explanation, absorbing his words with a pensive expression. Judith softly reminds him that his actions were still entirely for her benefit. Roger remembers being completely consumed by expanding his family business during the war. He admits he feared who he was becoming and saved her to ease his guilt. Roger asks if she can believe that an arms dealer retains some humanity. Roger understands if she finds his past actions and motivations distasteful. Roger hopes she stays comfortably, while Judith reassures him that she feels perfectly fine. Judith notes that very few people in this world would show any real sympathy. She emphasizes that to her, he has always been a warm and gentlemanly savior. Roger smiles warmly at her, deeply touched by her sincere and comforting words. He quietly wonders to himself if he truly was such a good person. Judith reflects that regardless of his flaws, he is the benefactor who saved her. Looking at the bright morning light, Judith decides she wants to trust his goodness. Birds chirp cheerfully as a new morning begins in St. Hawk on June 25th. Judith enters the room, pausing in surprise as she spots someone unexpected. Mr. Ewart sits at the dining table looking completely exhausted, weakly waving at her. Judith is surprised to see him awake early since she expected Roger first. Judith asks if he was unable to sleep, and Mr. Ewart admits it. Judith asks if he is feeling unwell, while Ewart blames the summer heat. Judith looks at Mr. Ewart thoughtfully, noticing his unusually pale and tired face. She observes his dark under-eye circles and bloodshot eyes with growing concern. Judith is deeply worried about his appearance, wondering if something else is wrong. Mr. Ewart sits quietly at the table, looking incredibly drained and distracted. Looking down, Mr. Ewart closes his eyes as if fighting off exhaustion. With a slow motion, he reopens his tired eyes, lost in a grim memory. The sound of cawing crows fills the air as Ewart recalls his wartime past. Chilling wind blows around a bandaged corpse draped with a military dog tag. In his memory, a solemn young Ewart looks away from the tragic battlefield. Ewart stands near piles of body bags as soldiers clean up the camp. In the memory, Ewart grimly notes that the corpses are decaying far too quickly. Mr. Ewart snaps awake from his dark daydream when Judith calls his name. Judith gently suggests he should go back to his room to sleep properly. Mr. Ewart rubs his forehead, tiredly insisting that he is perfectly fine. Ewart explains that he never sleeps well in this kind of hot weather anyway. Judith turns around with a bright smile as Roger walks into the room. Roger politely greets Judith as she enters, asking if she slept well. Ewart playfully complains about being ignored, prompting a dry retort from Roger about his sour expression. Roger humorously advises Judith on dealing with Ewart's moodiness, while Ewart silently resolves to remain gentle with her. The dining table is beautifully set with a warm meal as grace begins before they eat. Ewart finishes reciting the mealtime grace with a quiet, surprisingly devout prayer. Judith quietly observes Ewart, surprised to learn of his disciplined habit of always saying grace before meals. Roger politely wishes Judith an enjoyable meal, and she warmly returns the friendly sentiment. Judith takes her first bite of food, quietly contemplating her surroundings as she eats. Roger quietly enjoys his breakfast, focused intently on the meal before him.
Ewart sits back with a gentle smile, appearing much more relaxed than earlier. Two men dine together in comfortable silence, enjoying the peaceful morning atmosphere.
Judith happily reflects on how pleasant it is to start her morning surrounded by such handsome company.
Judith wonders how the two men became friends given their vastly different personalities, noticing their subtle interactions. Roger critiques Ewart's casual manners at the table, but Ewart playfully asks if Judith is bothered. Ewart questions if his casual state bothers Judith, prompting her to flusteredly reassure him that she is fine.
Judith reinforces her indifference, jokingly bruising Ewart's vanity as he laments her lack of a stronger reaction.
Judith quickly flatters Ewart by comparing his physique to a statue, eliciting a hearty laugh from Roger. Ewart becomes flustered when Judith reminds him of his past invitation to stare at him like art. Ewart playfully teases Roger about being outnumbered by his ward, but Roger dryly dismisses the entire conversation.
Roger suddenly gazes seriously at Ewart, offering to prepare some sleeping medication to help him rest.
Roger suggests prescribing sleeping pills for his insomnia, but Ewart firmly declines relying on medication. Roger persists with his advice on medicine or exercise, but Ewart lazily complains about summer heat and sweat. Ewart seeks Judith's agreement on the dreaded season, and she warmly concurs that she also dislikes summer. Ewart explains his summer jinx of bad luck, while Judith playfully guesses a few minor examples of misfortune. Judith freezes in shock, realizing she only ever wrote about those specific summer jinxes to her pen pal. Ewart brings up another detail from her past correspondence about a missing child, deepening Judith's silent suspicion. Ewart expresses hope that the summer jinx passes quietly, leaving Judith to silently piece the mystery together. Judith tries to reassure herself that the shared details could just be common coincidental summer misfortunes. Ewart decides that keeping busy during the daylight hours is his best chance at getting some sleep. Ewart plans to change his routine, but Roger instantly shuts him down by strictly banning any parties. Ewart complains that business-minded men are incredibly boring, making Judith sweat drop as she feels quietly singled out. Ewart pauses thoughtfully, stroking his chin as he devises another plan for their afternoon. Ewart enthusiastically suggests taking his yacht out for a pleasant afternoon trip. Roger agrees the nice weather makes it a perfect idea, while Judith internally squeals with excitement over the legendary yacht. Both Roger and Ewart look directly at Judith, warmly inviting her to join their yacht outing. As Judith stands in stunned excitement, Ewart plans their morning shopping trip before their lunchtime departure. Judith wonders if they need much, prompting Ewart to list a comical abundance of beach supplies on a chalkboard. Roger suggests a department store visit, and Ewart casually arranges to clear a section out while designating Roger to pay. Judith politely protests the lavish shopping, but Ewart insists Roger can easily afford it since he is incredibly wealthy. Ewart suddenly pauses as a charming thought occurs to him, smiling as he prepares to speak. Judith blushes crimson when Ewart warmly compliments the beautiful outfit she wore during her club visit. Ewart insists she needs proper clothing for the yacht, causing a flustered Judith to quickly agree to the trip. Judith nervously shifts in her seat, thinking his dangerous combination of good looks and kindness should be illegal. Mentioning the club triggers a nostalgic, tender memory of Ewart gently cradling her face. Judith turns her head away to hide her blushing face from Roger's observant gaze. Roger watches her reaction in silence, looking slightly thoughtful as he processes her flustered behavior. The scene transitions to the grand, bustling exterior of the high-end department store in the city center. Judith stands elegantly inside the lavish boutique as Roger and Ewart observe her from behind. Roger asks if they should worry about reporters, but Ewart points out how difficult it is to avoid attention. Roger warns Ewart to maintain a low profile, earning a playful complaint about his constant nagging. Roger warns Ewart about being recognized by Miss Krauser, while Ewart laments his lack of privacy. Roger decides to visit the sports section, suggesting Ewart and Judith handle the shopping together. Ewart glances back with a playful smile as Roger departs for the sports section. Roger stands in pensive silence, watching his companions walk ahead into the department store. Judith notices Ewart's sudden absence, and Roger informs her he went to the 4th floor. Judith suggests following Ewart upstairs, prompting Roger to try to recall what else is on that floor. Roger stares forward with a serious expression, internally troubled by a lingering deep suspicion. Judith questions Roger about Lord Ethan's whereabouts, while Roger remains quiet and deeply observant. Ewart notices how acutely conscious Judith seems to be whenever they discuss Ethan. Roger reflects on Judith's wary personality as described in her past correspondence. Roger convinces himself that Judith and Ewart could not have grown close during his absence. Roger explains that the 4th floor only has menswear and gym equipment of no interest to her. When Judith mentions lacking proper beachwear, Roger promises to have the staff bring some directly to her. Judith happily agrees to let Roger handle all the shopping arrangements. Judith remarks on how surprisingly empty the boutique is, though she clarifies she does not mind.
Judith realizes with quiet amusement that they literally cleared out the entire department store for her. Roger's high-profile status is noted as the primary reason they had to secure the private shopping. Judith expresses her warm sympathy to Roger for the constant burdens of his extreme fame. Judith cutely encourages Roger to hang in there despite the heavy pressures of public life. Roger thanks her, secretly exasperated that she does not realize the store was cleared for her benefit. Roger suggests moving to the lounge, explaining it will make shopping much easier for them. Roger explains how personal shoppers work, but Judith admits she is unfamiliar with luxury brands. Judith cheerfully decides to just view whatever items they bring, looking forward to the fun. Roger quietly agrees, his gaze lingering on Judith with a gentle, thoughtful look. Roger stands in silence, remembering the incredibly detailed clothing descriptions from her past letters. Roger watches Judith admiring the clothing's craftsmanship like an art piece rather than shopping for herself. Roger mentally sighs, amused that Judith is treating the luxury store like a museum visit. Judith turns around in response when Roger calls out her name in the boutique. Roger asks Judith if she is having fun, prompting a quick, startled denial from her. Judith sits down at the table and inquires about specific memories from her past. Roger specifies that he is referring to her memories regarding the winter clothes she once received. Judith recalls how unpacking the winter clothes helped her quickly bond with her siblings at the orphanage. Judith fondly reflects on those memories, expressing how much she suddenly misses her sister Millie. Judith recalls that the following year, Roger sent an astonishing shipment of exactly 1,878 books. She remembers how the massive gift boxes forced the director to custom order shelves from a carpenter. She admits she initially assumed Roger delegated the book buying to a servant when her requested book was missing. She was deeply touched when she finally found the exact obscure book she had wanted. Clasping the precious book tightly to her chest, she became absolutely certain of his genuine care. Finding her favorite book made Judith realize that Roger was personally reading every single letter she sent. Roger listens to her detailed recollection in stunned, speechless silence, clearly moved by her memory. Judith notices his silent reaction and hesitantly asks if he fails to remember those events. Roger silently gazes at her, processing the weight of the memories she just shared. Judith asks again if he truly does not remember, and Roger remains completely silent. Roger finally speaks up, admitting that he has a vague feeling those events might have happened. Judith reasonably points out that it was over 4 years ago and she sent many letters. Judith warmly reassures him that it is perfectly fine if he does not remember the details. Despite her warm smile, Judith nervously clasps her gloved hands together to calm her mounting anxiety. Judith carefully asks Roger if anyone else had ever read the letter she sent him. Judith quickly stammers that sharing letters with someone close like Lord Ethan would not be strange. Roger asks Judith directly if she is worried that he shared her personal letters with anyone else. Judith admits to herself that she might be a little worried as she reflects on a heartfelt letter she once received. Judith sits in quiet contemplation, her expression gentle and slightly melancholy. Roger slowly extends his hand toward Judith, his touch gentle and deliberate. Roger gently cradles Judith's cheek in his hand, a tender and unexpected gesture. Roger reassures Judith with a gentle smile, promising that he never shares her letters with anyone else. The two of them sit together in the elegant boutique, enveloped in a quiet, intimate atmosphere. As Roger continues to hold her face, he reflects on how deeply personal her letters felt to him. Roger gazes warmly at her, explaining how her written words felt like they spoke directly to him. Roger explains that he only met Ethan again after a long 5-year separation. Roger recounts that after college, they barely communicated until their recent reunion this year. Roger points out that he couldn't have shared her letters with Ethan even if he wanted to. Roger acknowledges his close bond with Ethan, calling him one of his dearest friends. Roger firmly emphasizes that his affection for Ethan never made him want to share Judith's private letters. Judith blushes in stun, deeply affected by Roger's sincere and protective explanation. Roger notes that he remembered their shopping trips, apologizing for taking so long to recall the details. Judith quickly waves her hands in a flustered panic, insisting that she didn't mean to press him. Roger softly corrects her, stating that the things she told him were precious and meant only for him. Roger places his hand on the armrest, asking Judith to share her thoughts with him again in the future. Roger leans in close, asking to hear everything about her past directly from her. Roger smiles warmly as he expresses his desire to hear her stories in her own voice. Judith frantically nods her head in embarrassment while Roger playfully thanks his gracious lady. Roger calls over the boutique assistant, instructing them to ship the purchased items directly to St. Hawk. Judith attempts to protest, but Roger gently corrects her by insisting she use his first name. Judith freezes in surprised silence as Roger reveals that the special gift is indeed for her. Judith grows flustered, reminding herself of their agreement to no longer accept any financial support. Roger walks over with a sleek black box, playfully arguing that he never categorized it as support. Roger opens the box to reveal a pair of stunning, elegant, white high-heeled sandals. Judith blushes deeply as Roger formally presents the beautiful sandals as a personal gift to her. Roger kneels down before Judith, gently sliding the elegant white sandal onto her foot. Judith looks down in a deep blush, softly thanking Roger for his kindness. Judith admires the perfect fit of the shoe, internally swooning over how beautiful it looks. Their quiet moment is suddenly interrupted, causing both Roger and Judith to look up in surprise. Eward stands there holding a vintage camera, teasing them about interrupting an intimate scoop. Eward casually wanders off, mentioning he has already finished his shopping and sent the items ahead. Eward playfully thanks his dear wallet while Roger dryly notes his companion's lack of manners. Eward teases Judith about her bright red face, prompting her to defensively deny being hot. Eward chuckles at her reaction, causing Judith to shout back in flustered embarrassment. Eward casually tells her to cool her face down before they continue docking. Judith hastily stands up, worried that the situation is becoming far too ripe for misunderstanding. Judith suddenly loses her balance, her ankle buckling in the unfamiliar high-heeled sandals. Roger swiftly catches Judith in his arms, preventing her from falling to the floor. Judith gasps in shock, finding herself held tightly against Roger's chest. Eward calls out from ahead, urging them to finish up so they can return before sunset. Roger watches Judith in silence, suddenly struck by a memory of a brown-haired man holding her. Roger dismisses the thought, noting to himself that the two of them are completely different. Judith tries to compose herself, clearing her throat to change the subject. Judith looks around the quiet boutique, sensing a strange tension lingering in the air. Judith resolves to avoid being left alone with Roger in enclosed spaces from now on. Under a brilliant blue sky, the grand yacht floats peacefully upon the open sea. A foot in a flip-flop steps eagerly onto the wooden deck, filled with anticipation for the day. The yacht manager reflects on his 5 years of service and how rarely the owner uses the vessel. Excited about the boat's debut, the manager hopes the president has brought a lovely lady on board. The yacht manager eagerly welcomes the guests as they arrive on the wooden pier. The yacht manager stares in complete astonishment at the arriving guests. Judith stands beside Roger, dressed in a lovely white dress adorned with a dark ribbon. The manager tearfully frets that Judith's dress is too short despite her looking beautiful. The manager enthusiastically details the specifications of the newly released compact sailing boat. The manager boasts about the yacht's luxury while Judith quietly listens with polite curiosity. The clear sky suggests a perfect calm day for sailing out to the open sea. The manager suggests heading southwest to catch a beautiful sunset view over the water. Boarding the vessel, Roger admires the yacht as it shines brightly under the sunny sky. Roger asks if Judith is feeling seasick, to which she quickly and cheerfully declines. The manager guides them through their scenic sailing route along the beautiful southern coast. Judith is startled when someone suddenly slides a pair of round sunglasses onto her face. Roger gently places sunglasses on Judith to protect her eyes from the bright glare. Roger smiles down at Judith with an incredibly warm and gentle gaze. Blushing behind her sunglasses, Judith softly thanks Roger for his thoughtful gesture. The manager points out the prominent landmark buildings visible along the distant city skyline. Roger points out landmarks in the distance as Judith stands beside him at the railing. Roger warmly suggests they visit the nearby Grand Park together on their next trip. Roger praises the park's wild ecosystem, prompting a pleasant chuckle from Judith. Judith playfully reminds Roger of her rustic Kinsley roots, making him realize her outdoorsy upbringing. Judith eagerly agrees to join him next time to compare the park to her hometown. A sudden camera shutter sound startles Judith as she holds her sunglasses. Ethan smiles as he holds a vintage camera, capturing the scenic moment on deck. Ethan gazes at Judith with a soft, affectionate look in his bright blue eyes. Ethan coaxes Judith to smile for a photo, catching her completely off guard. Feeling incredibly flustered and awkward, Judith tries to dodge the camera. Judith protests she wasn't ready, but Ethan argues that prepared poses look far too awkward. Ethan playfully promises to take many photos so she can choose her favorite later. Film frames capture sweet, candid moments of Roger and Judith interacting closely on the deck. A close-up frame shows Judith laughing happily and beautifully in the sunlight. Roger watches in silence, his expression turning slightly thoughtful and serious. Claiming seasickness, Ethan excuses himself to rest, leaving Judith feeling deeply concerned. As Ethan walks away, Judith nervously wonders if he overheard her earlier compliment about him. Judith worries she upset Ethan with her teasing comment about his messy, handsome hair. Judith wonders if Ethan is tired of hearing about his looks while Roger watches her. Roger directly asks Judith if she has a preference for handsome men. Judith enthusiastically admits her appreciation for good-looking men who brighten up the world. Roger reacts with mild discontent, prompting Judith to notice his habit of trailing off when bothered. Judith curiously studies Roger's face, trying to decipher his sudden, quiet mood shift. Judith flashes a bright, reassuring smile at Roger to lighten the mood. Roger silently stares back at Judith, captivated by her warm and cheerful expression. Judith wonders aloud if mentioning their handsome looks in a letter would be considered rude.
Roger smiles subtly, agreeing with her thoughts as he leans in closer. Roger gently cradles Judith's face, teasingly remarking on the excitement of his daily life. Highly embarrassed by his forwardness, Judith playfully accuses Roger of being quite mischievous. Under a vast blue sky, the grand yacht glides smoothly across a sparkling sea. Judith looks ahead in surprise as someone calls out to her on the deck. Ethan appears in swimwear, teasingly claiming he came to swim since Roger lacks a sense of fun. Roger, the shirtless blonde man, stands on the yacht deck and suggests they get into the sea at least once. Judith clenches her cheeks in delight, activating her internal observation mode to admire his impressive physique. Roger teasingly asks if he looks strange since she is staring, while a chibi Judith struggles to find her words. Judith directly compliments Roger, telling him that the shape of his muscles is truly beautiful. Roger asks if she previously claimed to not be interested, but Judith quickly denies ever saying such a thing. The two of them stand together on the wooden deck of the yacht in their swim attire. Roger looks back at Judith with a quiet, thoughtful expression. Roger teasingly calls her cheeky, but Judith happily defends herself by insisting it was a genuine compliment. Roger urges Judith to go get changed so she can enjoy the sea, leaving her hesitant. Judith peers over the railing at the endless ocean, anxious that they are in a bottomless part of the sea. Judith crosses her fingers defensively, asking why they even came on a yacht if she isn't going to swim. Roger sighs and remarks that she is still at an age where water can be scary, making Judith look annoyed. Stopping her foot in her high-heeled sandals, Judith tells him to drop the stereotype that all adults know how to swim. Roger nods with a gentle smile, conceding that her point is fair enough. Judith points a finger at Roger, demanding that he stop teasing her when she actually manages to get in. Judith continues pointing at Roger, playfully insisting that he promise not to tease her anymore. Judith walks down the steps barefoot, while Ethan kindly reassures her that she doesn't have to swim if she feels unwell. Ethan watches in complete awe as Judith appears dressed in a beautiful blue and white checkered swimsuit. Ethan excitedly promises it will be fun, while Roger playfully notes Judith's clear lack of trust in their words. Under the wide blue sky, Ethan's voice echoes as he confidently assures Judith she will have fun. The white yacht floats peacefully on the sparkling blue open sea. Judith looks down with a grim, nervous expression as she prepares to face the water. Judith nervously contemplates jumping in, but Roger in the water cautions her to use the ladder so she doesn't get hurt. Ethan gently warns Judith to be careful with her necklace before she enters the water. Judith holds up her wrist, showing a cloth tied around it, and reassures Ethan that she made sure it was secure. Ethan suggests taking it off, but Judith whispers to Roger that she doesn't want to show the necklace to anyone else. Ethan kneels down on the wooden deck to speak with Judith at eye level. Ethan asks if she truly only wants to show the necklace to him, and Judith warmly confirms it. Smiling brightly, Judith asks him to cheer for her since she is still secretly a little scared of the water. Judith promises to be careful not to drop her necklace, leaving Ethan staring at her in silent contemplation. Ethan steps closer to the edge, assuring Judith that it is perfectly fine even if she loses the necklace. Ethan smiles warmly, promising that he would search the entire seafloor just to find it for her. Judith looks up at Ethan with wide, startled eyes, deeply moved by his sincere and protective promise. Roger, floating in the water, instructs Judith to enter slowly, starting with the parts farthest from her heart. Roger reassures Judith that she will feel fine soon, though she still looks incredibly tense. Judith dips her legs into the water, nervously worrying that she might not be able to get out on her own. Judith sits on the floating mat, panicking as the moving water makes it difficult to keep her balance. Judith suddenly flips off the floaty and plunges into the deep water as Roger frantically calls her name. Sinking underwater, Judith struggles in fear as she realizes her feet cannot touch the bottom. Roger breaks through the surface with a splash, gasping as he pulls Judith safely out of the water. Waves splash around them as Roger holds Judith tightly against his chest in the middle of the sea. Terrified and tearful, Judith tightly clutches Roger's bare shoulder as they stay afloat. Roger watches her with a worried expression as Judith cries as she did not want to do this. Roger holds Judith tightly, apologizing for asking her to come down, while Judith stubbornly denies crying. Roger suggests letting go for a moment so he can help her back up, but Judith tightly grips his shoulder in panic. Judith insists she is fine and asks Roger to simply teach her how to float in the water. Judith insists that she is not crying and that seawater merely got in her eyes, while Roger gently asks to see them. Roger holds Judith close in the water, staring deeply and intently into her eyes. Judith's wide, expressive eye is shown in close-up as she gazes back at him in stunned silence. Judith's hand grips Roger's bare shoulder tightly, capturing the sudden tension and intimacy of the moment. In a cute chibi illustration, Roger questions if Judith is exaggerating about her eyes, but she firmly denies it. While drifting in the water, Judith insists she is completely fine, though Roger asks if she wants to return to the deck. Holding Judith close in the sea, Roger gently instructs her to lie back, leaving her completely startled. Roger smiles gently, promising Judith that he will teach her an easier and more comfortable way to float.
A splash echoes as Roger instructs her to relax while Judith panics about how to lie flat on the water. Floating peacefully on the water's surface, Judith concentrates on staying calm as Roger instructs her to breathe slowly. Floating on her back, Judith looks up in surprise as Roger softly praises her for doing so well. Gazing up at the sunny sky, Judith marvels at the weightless feeling of the sea holding her up. The grand yacht sails across a golden sunset sea as Judith realizes swimming is the perfect exercise for her. A basket of fresh apples and a refreshing orange cocktail sit prepared on a wooden table. Relaxing in a white robe, Judith reflects on her newfound ability to float without losing her breath. In a cute chibi form, Judith contentedly enjoys the peaceful, drowsy warmth that follows a long swim. A close-up of Judith reveals her gentle, warm smile as she relaxes on the deck. Looking out at the radiant sunset, Judith silently wishes her dear friends from Waterford could be there too. Judith is pulled from her thoughts as Ethan suddenly approaches and calls out her name. Ethan kindly suggests inviting her friends next summer, shocking Judith, who wonders how he already knew their names. Judith is deeply touched when Ethan explains he can read her thoughts through the warmth in her eyes. Over a beautiful sunset, Judith thanks Ethan for his consideration while he encourages her to take the invitation seriously. As the sun sets, Ethan reassures Judith that St. Hawk will always be a welcoming place for her. Ethan turns to look back at Judith with a remarkably gentle and supportive gaze. Feeling a wave of emotion, Judith silently admits she never imagined this summer would be so special. On another part of the deck, Roger casually reclines in a white robe while reading a book. Ethan smiles softly as Judith internally praises her patron for validating her dreams so easily. Clasping her shoulder, Judith nervously questions if she is allowed to indulge in such a wonderful dream. Quiet close-up captures Judith looking down as doubt begins to cloud her thoughts. Looking out at the sunset, Judith reprimands herself, feeling that wishing for more is simply being too greedy. The peaceful sunset continues to fade as Judith struggles with the feeling that her desires are excessively greedy. Although Ethan repeats his welcoming promise, Judith secretly worries that people's hearts and circumstances can always change. Judith looks wistfully at the horizon, realizing that merely exchanging letters might no longer satisfy her growing attachment. The scene briefly shifts to a majestic, classic brick townhouse standing quietly under a soft sky. Back on the deck, Roger confidently asserts his own massive role in their company's grand success. As Ethan sets his glass down, his unexpected high praise flusters Roger, who is only trying to brag. Ethan warmly lists Roger's vital achievements as an investor and advisor, which Roger humbly acts surprised about. Looking thoughtful, Roger recalls that Ethan's company previously only focused on manufacturing medical transport planes. Ethan remarks that those times were before a new phase began, leaving Roger quite puzzled by his words. Roger looks intensely serious, quietly questioning if a devastating war can truly be downplayed as a new phase. Looking at the sunset, Ethan privately realizes that Roger would never truly understand the depth of his perspective. Observing them, Judith decides to stay quiet to avoid ruining the lovely evening mood with an argument. In a playful chibi moment, Roger is pleased Ethan acknowledges his stake while Ethan seeks further approval. Smiling brightly, chibi Judith expresses her heartfelt gratitude and looks forward to many more years of collaboration. Watching them interact, Judith warmly comments on how remarkably close Roger and Ethan truly are. Judith looks surprised when Ethan secretly reveals that he was actually an early shareholder of General Curtis. Mathematical formulas float around a bewildered Judith as she tries to calculate Ethan's massive financial return. Judith is stunned to realize Roger is a wealthy millionaire whose only goal is to live lazily. A handsome close-up of Roger captures his calm and effortless charm as he sits back. As the sun sets, Judith wonders about Roger's past while Roger looks forward to a good sleep. The golden sunset light reflects beautifully across the calm, dark ripples of the ocean. Lulled by the sea breeze, Roger peacefully falls asleep on his comfortable lounge chair. Ethan suggests moving the sleeping Roger inside, but Judith gently suggests letting him nap on the deck. Looking at Roger, Judith sadly realizes he must have been deeply exhausted to fall asleep so quickly. Judith silently worries about Roger's suffering in the warm heat, while Ethan begins to respond. A grim flashback shows Ethan standing by a colleague distressed by a scorching battlefield's harshness. Under the quiet night sky, Ethan silently contemplates how quickly bodies decompose in intense heat. Ethan explains that Roger's issues stem from his sister's passing, leaving Judith surprised by the revelation. Ethan reassures Judith that Roger will recover once summer ends, leaving her in quiet contemplation. Judith stares down at her high-heeled sandals, silently wondering about the end of summer. Ethan reveals Roger's upcoming relocation to Texas, which will prevent him from visiting for years. Ethan explains Roger's prestigious true background, surprising Judith as they look at the sleeping man. Judith concludes that Roger's current lazy lifestyle was merely a temporary deviation from his real life. Ethan closely observes Judith, quietly wondering if her deep concern for Roger is somewhat bothersome. Judith looks at the sleeping Roger, internally debating whether she should lend her necklace to Ethan. Ethan warns about the dangers of shifting ownership before suddenly questioning if Judith likes Roger romantically.
Judith blushes intensely when Ethan clarifies he is asking if she is attracted to Roger.
Flustered and red-faced, Judith frantically waves her hands, clarifying she only respects him as a good person. Ethan remains calm, gently pressing Judith to explain if there is more to her feelings.
Judith internally admits to herself that Roger's effortless charms make him incredibly difficult to resist logically.
Judith firmly dismisses her thoughts, shaking her head to clear away any romantic notions. Clutching her dress, Judith reminds herself that Roger only views her as a resemblance of his sister. Ethan asks for confirmation about the sisterly resemblance, and Judith quietly confirms it with a nod. Judith recalls a past shooting lesson where Roger explicitly pointed out her physical resemblance to his sister. She remembers Roger holding her tightly in the ocean without showing any emotional change in his face.
Judith tells Ethan she has no intentions of harboring foolish or unrealistic romantic dreams about Roger.
Judith states she is strictly focused on living realistically, which leaves Ethan in thoughtful silence. Ethan quietly calls out Judith's name, his pensive voice breaking the heavy silence. Ethan gently advises her to think of this fleeting summer as merely a transient breeze. Ethan stands tall over Judith, who looks up at him with wide, startled eyes. Ethan solemnly turns to look at Judith, advising her not to hold lingering attachments. Judith gazes ahead in stunned silence, her heart heavy with his cold advice. An oppressive darkness closes in as Judith feels a chilling warning in his words. Ethan shifts the conversation back to her magical necklace, snapping Judith out of her deep thoughts. Ethan suggests converting her necklace into a ring instead, catching Judith completely off guard. Ethan details how a ring would secure its magic better on her skin, preventing accidental loss.
Judith hesitates, worrying about the difficulty of being separated from the magical item during its remodeling.
Ethan offers to bring a specialized craftsman from St. Hawk to handle the transformation safely.
Judith wonders if the craftsman can identify its specific power, and Ethan promises to find answers.
Reaching out, Ethan gently takes the chain and reassures Judith of her absolute safety in St. Hawk.
Judith's eyes flash a brilliant crimson as Ethan commands her to enjoy his favor without questioning it.
Ethan emphasizes that their dynamic should remain unchanged, just as it has been for years. Judith sleeps peacefully in her cozy bed under the quiet shadow of the night. On the deck, a gentle hand pulls a warm blanket over the deeply sleeping Roger. Ethan stands quietly on the dark deck, staring off into the starry night sky. Ethan softly whispers to himself, recalling a promise that was once made to him. Ethan grimly reminds himself that he must never go back on his word. Roger remains fast asleep on his lounge chair, completely undisturbed under his blanket. A mysterious hand secretly pours white powder into a cocktail garnished with an orange slice. As Roger and Judith stand together, Ethan looks back with a chilling, silent expression. The scene shifts to the Grand Waltz BSIA headquarters in the West Continent's Southern Hemisphere. The silver-haired woman reviews an illicit list detailing various illegal establishments, gang bosses, and weapon deals. The suited man notes that Bowl denies meeting her, warning her actions would warrant expulsion. A printed confession letter lies on the desk, its contents still leaving questions unanswered. An official document reveals Her Royal Highness's plan to proceed to Oberon after contacting Baja's unregistered supernaturals. Angrily pointing at the document, the silver-haired royal woman vehemently denies that her side drafted it. The silver-haired royal woman sharply questions the suited assistant's intelligence, asking why she would go to Oberon now. The suited assistant insists there is no other logical explanation for the letter's existence. Gritting her teeth in frustration, the silver-haired royal woman listens as the assistant warns of hostile authorities. The suited assistant reveals that one of Her Royal Highness's attendants is missing 2 fingers. The assistant explains that the attendant's recent injury made handwriting verification difficult. The suited assistant faces Her Royal Highness as she defensively asks if she is being accused of mutilating her own guard. Realizing her words are falling on deaf ears, the silver-haired royal woman inwardly seethes over being framed. She desperately recalls her ambition to capture the demon of Kilgenny to secure her claim to the throne. Dark frustration consumes her as she laments how her grand plans are being ruined by this captivity. Clenching her fists, the silver-haired royal woman expresses her rage at being kept locked up for weeks. Refusing to remain silent, the silver-haired royal woman prepares to assert her innocence by force. Losing her temper entirely, she violently flips the table while screaming at her accusers. Upstairs, the red-haired man comments on the terrible soundproofing while another man listens to the loud commotion. Pointing directly at him, the man advises the red-haired partner of Curtis to choose his side carefully. The red-haired man dismisses the warning, confident that his partner Curtis will cover any necessary payments. The red-haired man boldly announces that he came to make a mutually beneficial deal with the deputy director. Holding up a roll of film, the red-haired man offers valuable information regarding the deputy director's daughter. The red-haired man confidently asks the sweating deputy director if he is interested in the trade. Shifting the conversation, the red-haired man explains that he is searching for a highly influential individual. He recalls that a mysterious, masked gentleman named Alexander was previously seen at their elite club.
The deputy director questions why the red-haired man is investigating the identity of his own establishment's customer.
The red-haired man reveals he gathered extensive information from high society contacts to track the target's movements. The deputy director notes that a prominent family head has been missing, deeply troubling the victorious king.
A grand framed portrait of Ethan stands silently, hinting at his hidden noble status. The true identity of the missing nobleman is revealed to be Ethan A. Ewart Gloucester. The red-haired man solemnly asks if the powerful duke currently residing in Waltz is indeed Ethan. Meanwhile, Roger sits in a comfortable armchair, noting that the theater booking is strictly for two. Judith is surprised by the arrangement, but Roger apologizes and admits he cannot shake off his drowsiness. Judith politely excuses herself for a moment, turning to attend to the sleepy Roger. Stepping closer, Judith gently reaches out to place her hand against Roger's forehead. She expresses concern that he might have a fever, recalling stubborn kids from her orphanage days. Roger smiles warmly at her touch, noting how refreshing and cool her hand feels. A quiet close-up captures Judith looking down as she contemplates his gentle reaction. Judith recalls Ethan's solemn advice to view this fleeting summer as merely a transient breeze. Returning to the present, she gently pulls her hand away from Roger's soft blonde hair. Smiling warmly, Roger encourages Judith to have a wonderful time and tell him all about it. Judith promises to return soon as Roger watches her walk toward the living room exit. The door quietly clicks shut behind her as she sets off for the evening. The scene transitions to the grand entrance of the Russell Theater under a warm, glowing marquee. A stylish promotional poster displays the celebrated new film Record of Anne starring Cheston Alcrest. Judith looks at her tickets in amazement, surprised they managed to secure highly coveted center seats. Holding his hat, Ethan walks beside Judith as she marvels at their exclusive invitation to the waiting room. Ethan happily plans their evening, asking Judith what she would like to have for dinner. Smiling, Ethan gently suggests that he should provide the options since their tastes differ slightly. High-rise buildings loom in the background as Ethan suggests dining at a luxurious hotel rooftop. Ethan notices her hesitation, warmly asking if his grand suggestions make her feel uncomfortable. Looking down at their steps, Judith realizes it has already been 2 weeks since she was last with Roger. Smiling brightly up at Ethan, Judith admits that his wonderful plans simply far exceed her expectations. Judith accepts Roderick's dinner invitation, wondering what Waltz looks like from above. Roderick guarantees she will love the dinner spot while Judith laughs happily alongside him. Judith gasps in shock as she spots a familiar blonde woman named Caroline in the crowd. Judith wonders about the identity of the mysterious companion walking with Caroline. Standing nearby, the red-haired Hythe gazes intensely into the crowd with sharp yellow eyes. Judith anxiously hides behind Roderick, whispering that she needs to avoid someone. Heth spots Judith in the crowd, trying to recall her name from their past meeting. Caroline stands gracefully in her dark dress, completely unaware of the tense gazes nearby. Recognizing Roderick as Waltz's most eligible bachelor, Heth silently scoffs at the man's reputation. Caroline jokes about cold-hearted romance novel male leads, instantly annoying Heth. Caroline playfully compares Roderick's handsome appearance to Heath's own boss. Caroline suggests it is time for local newspapers to stop covering up Roderick's frequent public outings. Caroline trails off mid-sentence, her sharp eyes scanning the room for any hidden secrets. Caroline directly asks Heth if he is romantically interested in Judith, catching him by surprise. Caroline points out Hutt's oversensitive reactions whenever Judith's name is mentioned in conversation. Heth remains sullenly silent as Caroline mentally scores points against his denials. Heth defensively accuses her of teasing him, but Caroline insists her reasoning is perfectly logical. Caroline drops the subject, noting that Heth will not have to rival Roderick for attention. Heth scoffs at being compared to Roderick, confidently asserting his own superiority. Caroline dryly agrees that there is absolutely no comparison between the two of them. Caroline silently calls Heth a total thug as they walk together through the crowded venue. Caroline reflects on the vast differences in education and wealth between gangsters and high-class chaebols. Heath falls into a grim silence, unable to refute her logical comparison. Heth manages a quiet chuckle, admitting that Caroline's assessment is entirely true. Formal frame highlights how drastically Judith Waterford transformed in just a few short weeks. Judith's rural past is completely gone, replaced by a life of luxurious elegance and styled hair. Standing alone, Heth finds it laughable that he ever saw himself in her. He snaps at Caroline to shut up when she proudly praises their boss's dramatic allure. Caroline whispers a scheme to leak St. Hawk's secrets to reporters for a high price. She suggests sensational tabloid headlines to expose Roderick's love life and secure a massive scoop. Heth dismisses her tabloid gossip ideas, confident his client would never engage in such nonsense. Caroline insists quiet men fall hardest, while Heth quietly wonders if she is right. As Roderick walks away, the narration notes he is neither noble nor romantic. Judith excitedly gushes about the incredible experience of watching her first movie with sound.
She details how her initial disappointment vanished the moment the main character started singing.
Roderick admits he was also secretly surprised by the sudden transition in the film. Judith reflects on the movie's deeper warning about the vanity and melancholy of the city. Judith admits that some realistic scenes reminded her of a dangerous gun-wielding figure. Roderick's butler interrupts to inform him that a guest named Mr. Admore has arrived. Hearing of Mr. Admore's invitation, Roderick sighs heavily in mild annoyance. Roderick apologetically asks Judith to head to the waiting room while he takes the meeting. Roderick gently grasps her gloved hand, promising to return shortly to join her. Judith looks up in sudden surprise, her eyes wide at his tender gesture. Roderick bows slightly and kisses the back of her gloved hand. A close-up highlights his lips gently pressing against her white gloved hand. Roderick affectionately calls her his thoughtful ward, a term that lingers in the air.
They stand together, hand in hand, sharing a quiet and intimate moment on the stairs.
Judith stares up into the soft light, deeply flustered by his unexpected affection. She recalls the sensation of his kiss, feeling increasingly conflicted about his true intentions. Judith stands in quiet contemplation, wondering what secrets lie behind his noble demeanor. Judith quietly reflects on her mysterious benefactor who has sponsored her since she was 16. Watching his departing figure, she sadly concludes he could never see her as a woman. Dismissing her silly thoughts, Judith tells herself she is simply imagining things. She deeply ponders why someone of Curtis's stature would ever be interested in her. When Judith wonders if Curtis just likes close contact, the red-haired man questions her, agreeing that the situation is indeed quite strange. Wondering how he snuck inside, Judith sternly warns the red-haired man that she will report any illegal plots regarding Chest and Alcaraz. The red-haired man warns she would face a fine for false reports, noting the actor was once his client. An unseen attendant confirms their clearance and requests they wait inside for the actor's return. An awkward silence fills the lavish waiting room as they sit together in anticipation. Judith hesitates to confront him, realizing too much time has passed since their last encounter. She recalls how Curtis also mentioned having his own matters to confirm with her. While Judith wishes he would speak normally, the red-haired man abruptly calls out to her. The red-haired man asks if she intends to marry his client, completely catching Judith off guard. He reveals that Curtis is deeply in love with a woman, a fact obvious to everyone except Judith herself. Overwhelmed by the shocking revelation, Judith reacts with pure disbelief and incoherent internal panic. Trembling with anxiety, Judith internally panics over the rumors, while the red-haired man explains that Curtis bringing a woman to a theater has sparked intense curiosity. When he asks if she fears her face appearing in newspapers, Judith frantically screams her confirmation. As Judith laments being caught in tabloid gossip, he asks why she dislikes a man of every woman's dreams. The red-haired man points out that Curtis's cold glare alone reveals his formidable nature. Judith scolds him for repeating suggestive rumors, while he defensively claims he is merely echoing others' words. Overwhelmed by the absurd rumors, Judith gritted her teeth in deep frustration and silence. Feeling completely defeated, she walks away, deciding it might be best to abandon her autograph quest. Stopping her in her tracks, the red-haired man asks if she also showed everything to his client. Judith turns back slowly, a chilling and intense aura suddenly surrounding her. He presses further, asking if she revealed her unique red diamond-like eyes to Curtis as well. The memory of Roger's golden hair flashes in her mind, adding to her emotional turmoil. The red-haired man demands to know if she stays close to Roger despite knowing his true identity. Chilling words echo, labeling Roger as the brutal butcher who ruthlessly trampled her beloved homeland. Defensive and firm, Judith demands he stop throwing such vile insults at both her and Curtis. With an intense, cold glare, the red-haired man issues a final stern warning. He quietly grumbles to himself, realizing the situation is rapidly spiraling out of control. Turning back toward her, he asks if he should silence their club singer to protect her. He reveals that someone plans to sell her information to tabloids, shocking Judith by naming Caroline as the culprit. The red-haired man stands by the window and casually offers to intervene and stop the leak. Judith bites her lip in deep, silent conflict as she weighs her limited options. Regretting his rash words, he internally curses himself for blurting out anything just to stop her. Frustrated by his own lack of planning, the red-haired man aggressively clutches his head in annoyance. Simple instructions appear, advising her to simply get the autograph, take a photo, and leave. In chibi form, he questions if that is truly all she wants from her visit to Bay. He quickly retracts his offer, dismissing the entire idea as too stupid to pursue further. He pulls out a luxurious chair, instructing a quiet and hesitant Judith to sit down. He tells her to sit and chat about anything, even ordinary things or the movie. Staring at him in disbelief, Judith wonders if he is actually being serious with his request. Judith clarifies if talking about anything will secure his help, and he firmly confirms it will. He accepts, realizing that fulfilling this simple condition is a very small price to pay. Throwing caution to the wind, Judith points directly at him, ready to vent her frustrations. She demands his full attention, aiming her finger squarely at his chest to establish ground rules. Judith rants that nice requests get ignored, so she must threaten him, while he calmly agrees to listen. Judith's first strict demand to the red-haired man is for him to stop ordering her around.
She lists further demands, warning him not to touch her hand, follow her, or scare her. Heth Admore sharply commands Judith to cease her pointless insults and ask him properly if she wants something. He crosses his arms, firmly demanding that she show basic manners when speaking to him. Judith is left completely dumbfounded by Heth's sudden demand for polite and respectful language. While Heth strictly defines the boundaries of respectful speech, Judith internally doubts he will ever agree to her request. Judith is startled when the proud and arrogant Heth suddenly agrees to go along with her terms. Heth calmly notes that agreeing to her simple conditions is not difficult if that is what she desires. When Heth questions how far he should lower himself, Judith is left utterly confused by his words. Looking at her with an intense gaze, he asks exactly how far she wants him to bend. Heth bitterly explains that noble lords in his past always demanded that he keep his head low. Sudden realization strikes Judith's heart, recalling how Heth was once treated as an abandoned child forced to grovel. Recalling his past at Waterford, she listens as Heth asks if she is surprised by his easy compliance. With a quiet step, Heth remarks that she likely assumes he lives a life of complete freedom. He steps closer, clarifying that his reality has been far different from the easy life she imagines. Heth stands silently before Judith, his imposing figure casting a quiet, heavy shadow over her. A flashback reveals a younger Heth being praised by a noblewoman for speaking submissively to her. In the memory, the young Heth is forced to kneel submissively at the noblewoman's feet. A cruel young noble violently grabs young Heth's red hair, mockingly reminding him of his low status. The abusive young master demands that Heth show absolute respect and thank him for taking him in. A poignant, silent thought ponders why those with immense power take such pleasure in trampling the weak. Turning his back, Heth admits that while he doesn't understand her plans, she surely has her own reasons. Finding it difficult to speak respectfully, Heth slowly forces himself to address Judith formally as his lady. Judith gently taps her gloved hand down, clarifying that she never wanted him to grovel or lower himself. She explains she wants mutual respect rather than a master-servant dynamic, leaving a bewildered Heth questioning her meaning. In chibi form, Heath asks what she wants him to do. The fearsome Heath Admore is officially defeated by basic social etiquette. Heth challenges her to show him how to act, and an annoyed Judith accepts the challenge. Judith instructs him to give her his hands first, prompting Heth to look at her in confusion. Coaxing him forward, Judith catches his hands with a gentle tap as he tentatively reaches out. Grabbing both his hands, Judith notes his left hand is a mess, while chibi Heth sweat drops in embarrassment. Holding his hands tightly, Judith prepares to demonstrate by speaking first. Heth looks at her in surprise as she announces there is something she wants to thank him for. Judith holds Heth's hands warmly and sincerely thanks him for taking care of her when she first arrived in Wiltz. Judith recalls Heth's harsh but protective warnings on their journey, realizing they ultimately kept her safe. A biting snowstorm rages on the quiet night she first arrived in Baja 5 years ago. She remembers how Heth silenced their companions' chatter and chased away the mysterious people who were watching her. Judith acknowledges his protection was on Curtis's orders, but still expresses her deep gratitude to Heth. Sincerity fills her voice as she asks him not to misunderstand her thanks, leaving Heth completely speechless. Having finished her heartwarming demonstration, Judith cheerfully reminds Heth that it is now his turn to speak. She warmly suggests that exchanging thanks and an apology will clear any lingering resentment between them. Judith tells him to speak normally, assuring him that she's ready to forgive him once he apologizes. Heth stands in silence, internally panicking because groveling on the floor is his only concept of seeking forgiveness. Heth's brain goes into a full system error trying to calculate an apology that doesn't involve dirt eating. Noticing his deep, silent hesitation, Judith gently smiles and notes that apologizing is clearly not easy for him. Closing her eyes, she offers to help him by telling him to repeat her words. She prompts him to apologize for bruising her wrist, causing Heth to wonder if he actually did that. A memory flashes of Heth forcefully grabbing Judith's wrist to drag her away from a bench. Heth admits he has no recollection of his actions or the words he was babbling back then. Judith reacts with deadpan exasperation, realizing he completely forgot about bruising her wrist despite her mentioning it earlier. Looking at him with a wide, hopeful eye, Judith prompts him with the final line of the apology. Heth quietly apologizes, leaving Judith thrilled to finally receive the sincere words she had been waiting for. Completely stunned by his quiet apology, Judith's cheeks flush bright pink as she stares in absolute disbelief. Heth Admore defensively questions if bruising her wrist was entirely his fault, leaving Judith utterly confused. When Heth rudely suggests she exercise more, Judith accepts his apology while pointedly ignoring his final insulting remarks. Setting down tea, Judith addresses Heth Admore, indicating she has something important to say to him. Heth turns away, quietly acknowledging that she must have her own reasons for her decisions. Staring down, Judith internally wonders about this unexpectedly gentle and compliant side of Heth's personality. Judith questions the arbitrary social distinctions of Baha, catching Heth completely off guard by her words. Looking toward the window, Judith firmly asserts that no one deserves to be insulted based on social status. Holding his hands, Judith gently adds that this rule of self-respect applies to him as well. Judith gazes at him warmly, softly advising him not to be so hard on himself anymore. A wave of shock washes over Heth as her gentle, supportive words strike his heart. Judith admits she supports him only because they share a homeland, despite disapproving of his past actions. Judith cheerfully teases him about his low self-esteem despite his formidable connections with General Curtis. Shrouded in shadow, Heth listens as Judith reassures him that he did nothing wrong. She begs him not to look down on himself, leaving Heth in stunned, heavy silence. An abrupt, sharp sound cuts through the air as Heth suddenly demands she stop her words. Raising his hand in frustration, Heth bitterly questions what a lady like her could possibly understand. Clutching his face in deep emotional turmoil, Heth mutters that she knows absolutely nothing about him. Taking heavy steps away, Heth snaps that accepting his pathetic nature is his only way to survive. With a cold glance, Heth bitterly tells her to experience her own hell before judging him. Judith sits in stunned, sorrowful silence, deeply hurt by his sudden and bitter emotional outburst. Walking away, Heth quietly mutters that he only wanted to prevent her from getting hurt. Bowing his head in deep frustration, Heth aggressively curses his own weak and contradictory excuses. A brisk stride sounds as Heth angrily storms out of the room, cursing his own actions. Rubbing his scarred cheek, Heth frantically questions the strange and unfamiliar emotional warmth he just felt. Left alone, Judith internally struggles to comprehend the heavy, complicated feelings lingering in her heart. Wearing a fedora, Roger reads a handwritten note from Judith inviting him to meet at a cafe. Roger asks if anyone else visited her, learning that Heth Admore had been with her earlier. The worker explains that while they did not argue, Heth's parting expression seemed unusually troubled. Heth's conflicted, scarred face flashes in thought, highlighting the emotional weight of their intense conversation. The scene shifts to the exterior of Café Sempre on Leonnaire Street under a warm sunset. A steady, measured footstep sounds as Roger approaches the outdoor seating area of the quiet cafe. Roger scans the outdoor tables, his calm eyes searching for Judith among the cafe patrons. Spotting her near the yellow flowers, Roger sees Judith writing peacefully in her notebook with a gentle smile. Roger quietly calls out Judith's name, startling her from her deep focus. Roger realizes she did not hear him because she is completely absorbed in her writing. Roger peers down curiously through his spectacles, trying to catch a glimpse of her writing. Judith's pen scratches as she writes that they must strive to understand each other against all odds. Her written thoughts reveal her original plan to resolve things with Heth and end their relationship. She concludes her letter, noting she must finish writing before Curtis arrives for their meeting. The heartfelt words of her letter express deep love and promise separate farewell notes to her friends. She pens a final wish for blessings upon her beloved former classmates from Waterford. A shadow of quiet concern or sorrow crosses Roger's eyes as he observes her peaceful demeanor. Roger stands patiently beside her, waiting for her to notice his presence at the cafe table. Startled, Judith nearly calls him Curtis before correcting herself and asking Roger when he arrived. Flustered, Judith waves her hands, insisting he didn't interrupt and that she was just writing notes. Roger looks at her curiously, repeating her words about having something she wanted to say. A slight hesitation shows on Judith's face as she prepares to ask Roger an unexpected question. Catching him completely off guard, Judith directly asks Roger if he currently has a girlfriend. She presses further, inquiring if there is perhaps anyone he harbors special feelings for. Clenching her hands, Judith explains she learned many people view their relationship in a poetic light. Judith proposes that they should stop going out together like this to prevent further misunderstandings. She explains her worry about uncontrollable rumors and her desire to protect his future romantic prospects. Roger agrees that it is generally best to stop false rumors before they can spread. Roger asks what would happen if the rumor were true, leaving Judith completely startled and confused. Roger asks Judith how she would react if he refused to clarify his true intentions. Judith stares at him in complete disbelief, utterly stunned by his sudden cryptic questioning. As Judith struggles to comprehend his motives, Roger takes her hand and points out her usual sharp perception. Roger appreciates her concern but clarifies that he has no lover or feelings for anyone else. Roger gently raises Judith's hand and kisses it, sealing his confession in the warm sunset. Startled, Judith accidentally addresses him as Curtis before quickly correcting her flustered mistake. Judith sits completely frozen and speechless in her chair as the sunset glows behind her. Roger looks at her with an intense, quiet gaze, waiting for her response. Roger internally questions if it is the right moment to release his hold on her hand. A brief memory shows Judith laughing happily alongside a tall, blonde-haired man. He realizes that if Judith discovered the whole truth, her warm expression toward him would vanish. Roger resolves not to speak impulsively, fearing he might lose his cherished old friend. They stand divided, back to back, each harboring their own secrets and private documents. He reflects on how merely receiving her correspondence had sparked an unexpectedly deep level of interest. A past memory shows young Judith with vibrant red eyes reacting to a gentle touch on her cheek. A fleeting recollection lingers of a quiet, intimate moment shared between them in the past. He admits to himself that meeting her in person has awakened completely unexpected emotions within him. Roger calculatedly plans to keep Judith close as a sorceress while avoiding a rivalry with Ethan. Roger playfully tells a flustered Judith to relax, claiming his previous words were half jokes. Judith remains skeptical, questioning which part of his intense declaration he actually meant seriously. Roger warns Judith that her unique status as a sorceress makes the entire world dangerous for her. Roger proposes using their rumored relationship as a shield, prompting Judith to ask for his reasoning. Roger begins to explain what would happen if her closely guarded secret were ever exposed to Baha. But Roger maintains his calm, reassuring smile as he continues to explain his protective strategy to her. Judith listens intently, her expression a mix of doubt and careful consideration of his words. Standing beneath the sunset patio, Judith asks Roger if this fake arrangement will make him uncomfortable. Roger and Judith express mutual concern about causing each other unwanted trouble or social misunderstandings. Roger sighs, stating that his own risks are a personal burden he must carry alone anyway. Judith reiterates her deep reluctance to ruin his esteemed reputation or cause him any unnecessary trouble. Roger tells Judith to act as she pleases and directly offers himself to be used by her. Judith is caught off guard by his bold offer, internally processing the weight of his proposal. Roger sits in composed silence, giving her space to digest his unexpected and serious proposition. Roger reassures her that this is merely a tactical arrangement rather than a genuine romantic proposal. Roger reasons that maintaining the rumor is far easier than trying to explain and dismantle it. Roger adds that back in Waltz, such scandals simply burn out and cool down over time. Laughing, Roger confesses he is weak for her since she forced him to explain himself thoroughly. Deciding to drop his formalities, Roger resolves to be completely honest and transparent with Judith. Smiling warmly, Roger declares that being romantically linked to her does not bother him at all. Judith is shocked to realize her sponsor harbored genuine romantic feelings for her all along. Torn by this sudden revelation, Judith frantically wonders how she should proceed with their relationship. Judith panics and denies hating the rumors after Roger teasingly suggests she is the sensitive one. Judith internally worries about making her benefactor and sponsor feel uncomfortable with her reactions. She remembers his past support and wonders if she should prioritize whatever Roger desires from her. Acknowledging Roger as her benefactor, Judith prepares to make a compromising decision. Judith decides to pretend to play along with the rumors, but only in front of others. Both agree to postpone discussing the future details, leaving them with much to ponder individually. Roger accepts her proposal to maintain their fake arrangement with a gentle, compliant smile. Judith feels immensely relieved, laughing softly and hoping her playful response was appropriate. Roger suggests they head to their dining venue as the beautiful evening sky deepens into twilight. Sitting in the high-altitude tower lounge, Judith marvels at the scenic view that resembles an airplane flight. Judith reflects that despite their deep conversation, nothing has fundamentally changed, finding comfort in that stability. Roger brings up a conversation he had with Heth Admore during her brief absence. Judith expresses her growing frustration, deciding it is finally time to cut Heth off completely. Roger calmly offers to eliminate the nuisance if Heth continues to disturb her peace. Roger reasons that it is always best to eliminate budding problems early to avoid complications. Judith declines his extreme offer, insisting she can handle the issues surrounding Heth on her own. Roger warns her of the dangers of Walt's outlaws, while Judith confidently welcomes any confrontation. Tapping her gloved finger on the table, Judith playfully reminds Roger of her potent psychic abilities. Judith explains that while she lacks physical strength, her mental powers allow her to easily control others. She details the frightening extent of her powers, capable of driving minds insane or altering their memories. Judith clarifies that she merely chooses not to use her dangerous abilities, not that she is incapable. Reassuring Roger with a bright smile, Judith reiterates her capability to manage her own affairs. She expresses her heartfelt gratitude to Roger for setting up her upcoming meeting with Saint Hawk. Roger smiles warmly, acknowledging just how formidable and terrifying his young companion truly is. Roger playfully begs her to spare him, while Judith promises never to use her powers against him. Judith mentions her plan to contact the Hawk Goldsmith in 3 days to consult him. Roger advises her to carefully prepare the specific questions she wishes to ask the goldsmith. Judith nods in agreement, mentally preparing herself for the crucial meeting ahead. The scene shifts to a quiet bedroom where the blonde-haired man sleeps soundly face down. A soft rustle sounds as the blonde-haired man wakes up and searches for his slippers. Clutching his head in pain, the blonde-haired man realizes his chronic insomnia has mysteriously vanished. Running his hand through his blonde hair, he ponders the sudden change in his sleep patterns. He humorously wonders if his constitution is simply better suited to the climate of Waltz.
A creak sounds as he opens the door, finding his sudden cure quite absurd. The brown-haired maid stands in the corridor, startled as he suddenly greets her. The maid politely asks if he needs anything, prompting him to request cold water in his study. The blonde-haired man sits on a plush couch, deep in quiet, exhausted thought. Staring up at the wooden ceiling, he wonders if Judith enjoyed her very first talking movie. He silently hopes she remembered to obtain the famous actor's autograph during her outing. A nostalgic memory flashes of Judith smiling brightly back during their school days in Waterford. A soft sigh escapes him as he leans his head back against the couch in contemplation. He laments that their connection will inevitably end once the fleeting summer season is over. A sudden clatter sounds as the maid accidentally fumbles the water teapot, startled by his presence. The flustered maid hurriedly offers to prepare anything else he might require to assist him. Staring intently, the blonde-haired man quietly declines her offer with a solemn expression. A soft footstep echoes as he commands her to leave the tray and exit the room. The maid freezes in place as he suddenly calls out her name to stop her. A sharp snap sounds as he firmly grabs her wrist, exposing a hidden medicine packet. Gripping her arm tightly, he demands to know if her master ordered her to drug him. A pen scratches on a crossword puzzle, marking the passage of 3 days since the incident. Sitting together in the study, Judith informs the blonde-haired man of her upcoming afternoon appointment. The blonde-haired man listens quietly as she explains Roger arranged a jeweler to modify her pendant. Judith pauses in surprise, questioning why he is staring at her with such intense focus. They sit together in an awkward silence, the sudden tension thick between them. The blonde-haired man feels a trace of competitive annoyance at how completely indifferent she seems toward him. He continues to stare at her with an intense, unreadable gaze, harboring his unspoken thoughts. She slowly walks over to the blonde-haired man as he sits on the study's couch. He watches her approach with an incredibly intense, silent, and highly critical gaze. The blonde-haired man sharply criticizes her decision to trust a strange jeweler with her protection. Judith strongly defends her choice, explaining her absolute trust lies entirely in Roger's reliability. When he asks if Roger suggested the jeweler, Judith quietly confirms that it was his idea. Frustrated by her unwavering defense, the blonde-haired man bitterly insults Roger under his breath. Judith is left completely shocked and deeply offended by his uncharacteristically harsh language. Raising her voice in disbelief, she demands to know what he just said about Roger. She asks if they had a fight, but he abruptly cuts her off by calling her full name. He demands to know if she blindly accepts every single recommendation Roderick Curtis gives her. Caught off guard by his sudden intensity, Judith sheepishly offers a hesitant, quiet confirmation. Clutching her dress, she quietly admits she has no reason to doubt Roger's suggestions. Exasperated by her compliance, the blonde-haired man slumps back on the sofa in defeat. Judith firmly reiterates her stance, declaring that she knows Roger is a deeply trustworthy person. As she explains her reasoning, he leans in closer to prompt her for a direct answer. When the blonde-haired man asks if she trusts him, Judith responds with a warm, genuine smile. He looks at her skeptically, reminding her that he has never formally granted her his trust. Judith points out she keeps his secret, but he retorts that his compliance was strictly for Roger. He smiles wryly, reflecting cynically on the empty, transactional nature of trust between them. He bluntly declares that they simply are not close enough to share genuine trust. Judith is deeply stung by his cold rejection, repeating his harsh words in absolute shock. She internally lists all their intimate daily routines, wondering how he could deny their closeness. Her stubborn pride prevents her from spelling out their entire relationship calendar to argue her point. Annoyed, she retorts by recalling his past compliment, comparing her to a beloved little sister. The mention of his sister Chloe, whom she closely resembles, brings a quiet shift in mood. He quietly admits that her physical resemblance to Chloe was indeed the primary reason. Feeling increasingly hurt, Judith directly demands to know why he is suddenly being so cruel. He challenges her on her upcoming appointment, offering to cancel it if she gives him a reason. A heavy, oppressive silence fills the library as neither of them is willing to back down. She demands to know why he is acting so angry if he refuses to explain himself. Defiant and frustrated, Judith reiterates that she has done absolutely nothing wrong in this matter. Standing up to leave, Judith coldly bids him goodbye and tells him to enjoy his afternoon. A soft rustle sounds as her exit is halted when he grabs her wrist and apologizes. Gripping her hand tightly, he gently confesses that he was never actually angry with her. Turning back toward him, Judith demands to know the real reason behind his hostile attitude. A sharp, quiet gasp catches in her throat as he silently pulls her closer to him. He suddenly pulls her into a tight embrace, whispering how deeply he truly cares for her. Judith blushes a vibrant red in shock as he confesses his frustration stems purely from worry. Looking up at the chandelier, she suddenly remembers Roger's highly suggestive advice about calming his tantrums. She playfully threatens to take him straight to bed next time, prompting a lighthearted warning back. He squeezes his hand, pleading with her never to distance herself or draw lines again.
Highly flustered by his physical and emotional closeness, Judith looks down with a bright red blush. He gazes at her with an incredibly soft, earnest expression, waiting for her silent response. The butler suddenly enters to announce the jeweler's arrival, breaking their intimate, quiet moment. As Judith rises to meet her guest, he tightly maintains his hold on her hand. Judith turns back to him in mild surprise, questioning why he is still holding her.
He looks up at her with profound concern, asking her what she is so worried about.
His throat tightens as he quietly asks if she has already taken off her protective pendant. He reassures her that she can stop the meeting immediately if it ever gets too difficult. Settling into her chair, Judith prepares to face the jeweler for her highly anticipated meeting. The blonde-haired companion firmly grips Judith's hand, warning her to leave immediately if anything feels off with Roger. A soft rustle sounds as the purple ribbon fastening Judith's protective necklace is gently untied from behind. Roger carefully unclasps the delicate chain, slowly lifting the warm pendant away from her body. Judith looks down anxiously, wondering if removing her protective charm will trigger some unforeseen danger. Settled quietly behind a wooden screen, Judith waits while Roger stands by as the jeweler inspects the gem. Judith reassures herself that she has previously survived without the necklace when utilizing her psychic abilities. The jeweler peers intently at the glowing gemstone through his handheld magnifying glass. Under close magnification, the jeweler identifies the radiant gem as an extraordinarily polished piece of natural amber. The jeweler marvels in astonishment, noting that the precious gemstone is an incredibly rare find. A warm visual details how the amber naturally formed from hardened tree sap, trapping a mysterious power within. Roger listens quietly as the jeweler explains that soft amber is rarely used to house active magical forces. Roger questions if the gem's power was artificially infused, prompting the jeweler to mention ancient protective leggings. The jeweler carefully polishes the surface, explaining that rendering the amber transparent will reveal its core secrets. Polishing the gemstone reveals a perfectly preserved tiny spore and a single delicate flower petal floating inside. Stunned by the discovery, the jeweler confesses that a protective relic of this caliber is of immeasurable value. The jeweler gapes in absolute disbelief, declaring that such an extraordinary treasure is virtually impossible to find. He suggests the necklace is a sacred royal heirloom, leaving Judith completely startled and wide-eyed with shock. Her hand trembles slightly as she tightly grips the fabric of her skirt in growing anxiety. A close-up reveals Judith's vivid red eyes shifting with deep, uneasy contemplation over the shocking revelation. Fleeting memory flashes of a blonde-haired princess gracefully extending her hand in the royal palace. A dark, slashed portrait of Princess Liselot looms ominously, carrying a heavy weight of past tragedy. A golden crown sits in solemn silence, reflecting on the tragic, perfect legacy of the late princess. A young girl wanders through the massive royal archives, recalling how her sister secretly delivered their mother's keepsake. Judith looks at the amber pendant, contemplating her mother's secret identity and her mysterious ties to Kilgenny. While the jeweler exclaims the piece is a literal national treasure, Judith humorously imagines the vast wealth it represents. Roger casts a sharp, highly suspicious look at the jeweler, warning him about the dangers of illegal acquisitions. Roger sternly cuts him off, commanding the jeweler to cease his highly impudent line of questioning. Roger cold shoulders the jeweler with a dark warning, sending the terrified craftsman into a state of frantic apologies. A sudden thud echoes as the jeweler trembles in absolute terror behind the partition while Judith looks on. Roger inquires if crafting the amber will diminish its inherent power, and the jeweler reassures him it remains intact. Satisfied with the craftsman's detailed explanation, Roger decisively commands him to proceed with resizing the gem. A soft footstep sounds as Roger steps forward, requesting to measure Judith's finger for the new ring. Roger gently takes Judith's hand in his, holding it softly to begin taking her measurements. Judith looks at their joined hands in mild surprise, wondering if agreeing to this plan is truly wise. She internally reasons that disguising the protective amber as an engagement ring is the most logical choice. Judith notes that temporarily playing the role of his fiancé will make their mission and waltz much smoother. She visualizes their public portrait together, resolving that a fake engagement is a perfectly harmless arrangement. A sudden wave of self-conscious panic grips her, manifesting as a flustered chibi witch hugging a weeping puppy. Judith quickly turns her head away, her face burning with a bright red blush from Roger's touch. Frantic heartbeat pounds in her chest as she finds herself completely unable to meet his intense gaze. Fighting her curiosity, she resists the temptation to unconsciously deploy her psychic powers to read his thoughts. A soft, glowing warmth surrounds them as Roger continues to hold her hand with quiet, protective care. Judith's breathing turns shallow as she feels a sudden, inexplicable tightness spreading deep inside her chest. The jeweler's voice drifts from behind the screen, politely confirming that the ring size can easily be adjusted later. As the jeweler notes the crafting will take half a day, a sudden, ominous tension flares around Judith. Painful, high-pitched ringing suddenly echoes in Judith's ears, catching her completely off guard. Judith gasps in sudden agony, clutching her chest as a wave of severe dizziness completely overwhelms her. A sharp gasp escapes her as her legs suddenly give out, causing her to lose her footing. Her long dark hair whips through the air as she begins to fall backward in slow motion. Judith slips into total darkness as echoing, distorted voices from her forgotten past desperately call out her name. An echoing whisper of her name pierces through the heavy dark silence. As the jeweler discusses the ring design, a sudden, heavy thud echoes through the room. Roger's eyes widen in sheer panic as he calls out her name in surprise. His shoes scuff against the floor as he rushes desperately toward her side. With a quiet rustle, Judith loses consciousness and collapses forward before he can catch her. Judith's vivid red eyes fly open, filled with a sudden, dazed terror. Kneeling on the carpet, Judith looks up at Roger with an incredibly tense, panicked expression. Roger freezes as his own eyes suddenly take on a striking, glowing red hue. Judith trembles as she stares back, her vision clouded by panic and confusion. Roger remains paralyzed under her gaze, his red eyes reflecting her intense emotional distress. Roger internally panics, realizing his body has become completely frozen and unable to move. Clinging tightly to him from behind, Judith's overwhelming aura effectively keeps him completely subdued. Sweat drips down her face as Judith gasps, weakly assuring Roger that she is fine. Roger realizes the oppressive pressure lifted the instant she broke their intense eye contact. Metallic clink sounds as Roger urgently hands the glowing golden amber pendant back to her. Clasping the protective relic tightly to her chest, Judith lets out a sigh of relief. Roger angrily snaps at the trembling jeweler, rejecting his suggestions to rest and try again. Judith looks up in surprise as Roger suddenly takes her hands in his. Roger coldly dismisses the jeweler, commanding him to leave and wait for further notice. Lifting her gently in his arms, Roger carries the weakened Judith away to rest. Roger hands her a glass of water, gently explaining it contains a sleeping aid. Judith hesitantly sips the water, whispering that she feels she should remain awake. Her eyelids grow incredibly heavy as she mutters about almost recovering her lost memories. A quiet stillness settles over the grand bedchamber as the afternoon light filters through. Judith rests peacefully in the massive bed while Roger watches over her from a stool. Roger gazes down at her sleeping face with a deeply somber, protective expression. A memory of Judith's terrified red eyes flashes, recalling the brief duration of her episode. Roger recalls a medical record detailing a patient's first seizure following a major surgery. In her mind, a red haze dominates as she relives a terrifying loss of control. She visualizes a dark state of absolute mental domination where all free will is stripped. Roger realizes with dread that removing her pendant even briefly triggers these dangerous episodes. He squeezes his fist tightly, frustrated by his own lack of understanding regarding her condition. Roger resolves to uncover the truth behind her mysterious state as a magical mind. Deciding to take action, Roger heads to his private study to inspect her records. The drawer slides open with a hollow clatter, revealing it is completely empty. Roger gasps in shock as the blonde-haired man stands nearby holding the missing file. The blonde-haired man reveals he has Judith's 3-month military hospital diagnosis record. He mentions the document details the secret events that transpired in room 511. He brandishes the medical record, confirming it contains the complete diagnostic truth. Roger demands to know how he got it, but the companion reprimands his thievery. Roger angrily commands him to return the files, but the companion challenges his anger. The blonde-haired companion angrily confronts Roger for previously drugging him without his consent. Roger defends his prescription as a remedy for insomnia, prompting a sarcastic retort. The blonde-haired man bitterly reflects on how he was forced to sleep for days. He warns Roger never to repeat such a deceitful trick on him again. Slapping the papers against Roger's chest, the companion demands he read and memorize them. He warns Roger never to ask Judith to remove her protective necklace again. The companion warns of the lethal danger of triggering her magical rampage in person. Turning away, the blonde-haired companion laments that Roger has not changed one bit. He coldly remarks that Roger's twisted way of showing kindness will always remain flawed. The brown-haired man challenges his companion, questioning if his true nature was already well known. The brown-haired man asserts that he would never bring harm to those he holds dear. The blonde-haired man reflects on accepting his friend's methods despite his own personal reservations. The blonde-haired man admits his own mistakes but questions how he can trust someone who secretly drugged him. Shifting the conversation, the brown-haired man pauses before bringing up another crucial matter. The brown-haired man questions if their promise from 2 years prior is still valid. A tense silence falls as the blonde-haired man gazes back with a cold, serious expression. He recalls the letter outlining the transfer of Judith's guardianship and his demand to step away. The blonde-haired man demands to know if that agreement remains in effect. With a quiet click, the blonde-haired man questions if Roger's suspicion stems from fear of losing her. Stepping forward, he warns that he might intervene if Roger continues to prove untrustworthy. The blonde-haired man smirks, noting that Roger's failure has already taken place. He delivers a final warning to Roger to watch his behavior. He wishes to keep her. Left alone in the dim room, the brown-haired man stands in deep, brooding silence. Sitting at his desk, the brown-haired man reviews the scattered documents regarding Judith's condition. A medical report confirms that Judith suffers from a severe form of dissociative amnesia. The records connect her amnesia to the protective magic shielding her from rampages. The dark-haired woman weakly admits she felt on the verge of recalling more.
The brown-haired man realizes with grave concern that Judith's repressed memories are starting to return.
Roger resolves to watch Ethan closely instead of heedlessly obeying his warning. In her memories, a comforting hand holds hers, warning her to stay hidden until the danger passes. A blonde-haired girl desperately instructs the weeping child to run north through the mountains. The smiling princess leaves her with the tearful plea to survive so they can meet again. Sobbingly clutching her head, the young dark-haired girl is left alone in the dark corridor. A glowing runic symbol shines brightly against the darkness, representing the sealing magic. Crouching in terror, the young girl trembles as booming explosions shake the surrounding area. Frightened by a sudden nearby crash, the young girl realizes someone is approaching her hiding spot. Panic flares in her mind as she senses that her sister is in grave danger. She flees desperately through the dark, dense forest under the cover of night. The young girl halts, looking up in sheer shock as she witnesses a terrifying sight. An eerie glowing green moon hangs silently amidst the dark swirling clouds. Below, a devastating fire consumes the tall city buildings, leaving a trail of absolute destruction. Searing red cracks tear through the dark sky as the catastrophic rampage reaches its peak. A warm chandelier glows overhead as the chaotic memories slowly fade back into silence. Sitting up in a grand bed, the dark-haired woman looks around in dazed confusion. Touching the unfamiliar sheets, she realizes with growing alarm that she is not in her bedroom. Staring into the mirror, she gasps at her exhausted reflection and dark under-eye shadows. Hanging her head in despair, she wonders what is happening to her fragile state. Clutching her head, she questions why these painful episodes have suddenly returned after so many years. Overwhelmed by agonizing pain, she stands trembling as she tries to process her condition. She recalls that her lost memories had briefly returned just before she collapsed. Visions of the burning city flash vividly, confirming that her forgotten past has resurfaced. She wonders if the protective amber pendant was actively suppressing her memories from returning. She remembers being told that her amnesia was a subconscious shield against severe trauma. She realizes that without the pendant's barrier, her memories from age 16 are rushing back. Closing her eyes, she resolves to uncover the dark truths hidden within those memories. A brief handwritten note left on the desk reassures the others that she is fine. With soft footsteps, the dark-haired woman quietly walks down the empty sunlit corridor. The blonde-haired man suddenly spots her from around the corner, calling out her name. He asks about her well-being after her collapse, and she quietly assures him she is fine. Walking down the corridor, Judith makes a quiet sound as she notices something worth taking. Ethan carries the weakened Judith in a bridal carry, intending to bring her back to her bedroom. Holding on to him tightly, Judith rests her arm over Ethan's shoulder as they move through the castle. Ethan quietly carries Judith down the grand, sunlit corridor toward her private quarters. Gazing down at her, Ethan feels frustrated that she fell asleep on Roger's bed instead of his. Resting quietly in his arms, Judith remains completely fast asleep and unaware of his thoughts. Ethan tries to dismiss his lingering feelings for her that began when they first met at 16. Settling her into bed, Ethan watches over the sleeping Judith in her dimly lit chamber. Judith suddenly opens her eyes, looking up with a dazed and confused expression. Turning onto her side under the covers, Judith rests quietly as she prepares to sleep. Looking down with a solemn expression, Ethan reflects on how her sudden collapse was entirely predictable. The glowing golden amber pendant sparkles, serving as a protective shield to keep her dangerous powers sealed. Resting in bed, Judith contemplates removing her protective necklace to force her lost memories to return. Ethan decides to keep his true thoughts hidden, fearing it would only cause unnecessary panic. Keeping his expression closed and distant, Ethan remains silent rather than speaking his mind. A soft, quiet mumble breaks the heavy silence as Judith looks up from under the covers. The grand bedchamber remains still and quiet as Ethan watches over Judith from his seat. Judith blinks softly, watching his movements with a quiet, observant gaze. Staring down at her, Ethan notes that she has been behaving strangely all day. Judith looks up at Mr. Ewart, asking him to speak directly if she has done something wrong. Ethan looks back calmly, confidently reassuring her that he will not get hurt. Sardonically laughing, Ethan questions if her insistence on being fine is simply a defense mechanism. Gently touching her cheek, Ethan assures her she is fine, though Judith feels treated like a child. Leaning in closer, Ethan asks why she continues to keep her distance from him. Looking at her tenderly, Ethan reiterates his deep care for her safety in both body and mind. Staring up at the grand chandelier, Ethan reflects on St. Hawk and Roger's wealthy, kind nature. Looking up at him, Judith listens as he notes her apparently good relationship with Roger. Clutching the covers, Judith listens as Ethan explains his reluctance to interfere with her current situation. Holding the blanket tightly, Judith firmly denies having any romantic connection with Sir Roger. Ethan looks down, coldly asserting that whatever transpired between them is not important. Sitting up, Judith looks disappointed as Ethan notes that only Roger's perspective of her matters. Staring toward the vanity table, Judith quietly wonders if her own feelings are completely dismissed. A sudden mental shock strikes Judith as she vividly relives a terrifying battlefield explosion. Clutching her face in pain, Judith stands trembling as a throbbing ache fills her head. Pledging her chest, Judith gasps as the memories from her 16th year suddenly flood back. Closing her eyes, Judith resolves to seek out the truth behind her forgotten past. Judith holds onto Ethan's shoulder as he gently carries her down the quiet hallway. Ethan carries her through the sunlit corridor, heading back toward her private chamber. Ethan reflects on his annoyance regarding Judith sleeping in Roger's room, wishing he brought her to his. Gritting his teeth, Ethan struggles to dismiss his intense feelings for her since they met at 16. The golden pendant glows warmly, acting as a vital dam to keep her magic under control. A low mumble echoes in the quiet room as Judith watches him with intense focus. Sitting quietly by her bedside, Ethan ponders how he should handle his complicated relationship with her. Ethan remains determined, confidently asserting his ability to handle the situation without getting hurt. Gently patting her cheek, Ethan tells Judy not to tiptoe around him, though she feels babied. Looking at her tenderly, Ethan repeats his earnest desire for Judith to remain safe. Looking toward the chandelier, Ethan reflects on St. Hawk and Roger's wealthy, kind nature.